This time, we have this little failure. 7 years ago, people received ultra-rare talents, but he was the loser without any talent. When he gave up and was about to cause a catastrophe, he unbelievably received the system of explosive growth. In other words, he completes missions and grows 10 times faster than other people. But before all of this began, the world had been invaded by monsters 30 years ago. They came out of the portals, plunging the world into pure chaos. But in the present day, a bottle of liquor is thrown to the ground as someone complains about yet another damned portal. The same person who discarded the bottle kicks a metal railing and rants that both hunters and portals could go to hell, as he doesn't care anymore due to this filthy, miserable world. This man with a bruised face and tears streaming down in a mix of rage and sorrow yells, questioning what he did to deserve such suffering. He's interrupted by a guard warning him to step down from the railing because it's dangerous. But the man only shouts back, asking why he should listen and whether he doesn't even have the right to die if he wants to. While the guards try to calm him down and coax him to come down, it's no use. He insists they leave him alone, shouting that they couldn't possibly understand his pain after everything he's been through. 3 hours earlier, in a massive building belonging to the Biction Guild, the same young man was yelling, questioning if he'd really been fired. He demanded to know if they were aware of how much he dedicated himself to the guild. In front of him, a man sitting behind a desk asks what he's actually accomplished for the guild. He was practically nothing more than a pack mule, hired 7 years ago for appearing diligent, but in all that time, he hasn't achieved anything, hasn't advanced beyond rank D, and now he's limping and crippled. Our protagonist tries to argue, but the guild leader coldly tells him to stop trying and just leave, assuring him that compensation will be calculated. However, the protagonist protests, saying he could find a way to heal his injured leg and continue working. The discussion is interrupted by a muscular man with blonde hair and tattoos who sneers at him, asking if he truly doesn't understand plain language, pointing out that the boss already told him he's fired. The protagonist recognizes the man as Lee Youngjin and demands to know how he can treat his senior this way. But Youngjin merely mocks him, asking why he's acting like an old man, calling it pathetic. Youngjin advises him to take the damn severance package and buy himself some snacks like the pathetic rank D hunter he is. Finally, he calls the protagonist by name Lee Taejin. Enraged, Lee Taejin grabs Youngjin's tank top, accusing him of being the reason his leg was injured due to Youngjin's recklessness during an attack. Youngjin simply scoffs and asks when Taejin ever asked to be saved. He coldly states that Taejin was just a pack mule and had no business being on the front lines. He blames Taejin for not knowing his place and sarcastically questions how a loser like him could have an S-rank ability. Referring to Taejin's skill, explosive growth, he mocks it as a bad joke, suggesting that Taejin's growth plates must be sealed. Unable to stand the insult, Taejin clenches his fist and tries to punch Youngjin, but his strike is effortlessly blocked by a small barrier that forms around Youngjin's hand. Youngjin warns Taejin to stay in his place before delivering a direct punch to his stomach, causing Taejin to spit out and fall to the ground. Grabbing Taejin by the collar, Youngjin tells him he's tired of Taejin acting superior just because he started a few years earlier, and says this is the perfect opportunity to see how tough Taejin really is. Youngjin begins punching him repeatedly in the face. In the background, the guild leader accuses Taejin of several crimes, a mere rank D challenging a rank C, disrespecting his superior, and worst of all, the crime of being Lee Taejin. Youngjin drops the battered Taejin to the ground, leaving him sprawled out. An envelope of money falls beside him as the leader thanks Taejin for driving his ass around for all those years, but informs him they'll never see each other again. Taejin can only cry as the scene shifts to nighttime. Now our protagonist exits a small store after purchasing a drink and heads to the bridge from the beginning of the story. He takes a sip, remarks on the drink's good taste, and then holds the envelope, bitterly questioning how, after 7 long years of work, all he has to show for it is a measly bundle of money. Feeling he has nothing left to hold on to in this world, he climbs onto the railing. However, as soon as he does, a system window appears, warning that his life is in danger and asking him to step back. Taejin scoffs, complaining that only now the damn system cares about him. He sarcastically asks the cursed status window if it knows how much he's suffered in the past 7 years. He punches the window, blaming everything on the useless skill he received. He keeps hitting it, lamenting that the skill doesn't boost any of his stats. In response to his aggression, the status window notifies him that it is going on strike. Taejin bursts into laughter, mocking the system and telling it to go ahead since it's useless anyway. He orders it to disappear and throws the bottle at it, shattering a glass. Taejin begins brooding over his past, shouting that if the system had explained the skill properly from the beginning, none of this would have happened. He screams into the night, begging God to hear him that this nightmare wouldn't have happened and he wouldn't have such a miserable life. The status window begins glitching, flickering with visual distortions, before finally notifying Taejin that his complaints have been received. We return to the present. Taejin argues with the authorities, urging him to step away from the edge, but as he shouts that they don't understand his suffering, he slips and falls. Looking up at the guards as he plummets, he wonders if this is really how it all ends. Surprisingly, he finds it almost comforting, thinking it might be for the best since there's no point in living in such a cruel world. But as he falls, the status window reappears, notifying him that the administrator has received his complaint and he will temporarily be transported to the administrator's server. recover. Confused, Taejun glances down, seeing a massive surge of energy envelop him. Multiple windows appear, announcing an update to the status system. Finally, the status window turns golden, notifying him that the update is complete. Suddenly, Taejun wakes up to sunlight on his face and the sound of birds chirping. He places a hand on his head, complaining about the pain and wondering what kind of nonsense he had gotten into by drinking alone like an idiot the previous night. He promises himself that if he ever drinks again, he'll imitate a dog as punishment. But in a sudden flash of memory, he questions whether he had actually fallen the previous night and recalls seeing something about a status window update. However, he dismisses the idea, thinking it was just his imagination running wild. In any case, he's now an unemployed man, pondering what the hell he's going to do to make a living. He wonders if he should take up day labor, considering that joining another guild as a hunter will be nearly impossible for a while. As he mulls over his options, he's interrupted by a small hologram of a blonde, pointy-eared girl who asks if he's satisfied with the latest status window update. Naturally, Taejun is startled by the sudden appearance, stumbling backward and yelling, asking who she is. With an air of nonchalance, she introduces herself as Miri from the status window management department. Taejun questions whether any of this is real, asking if what happened the previous night wasn't just a dream. Miri quickly confirms that it was indeed real. She informs him that they reviewed his complaint about explosive growth and discovered, after an investigation, that his status window had been outdated, which caused it to malfunction. This revelation leaves Taejun stunned, and the lighthearted laugh at the end of her statement doesn't help. He demands to know how such a thing could happen. Mary explains that she can't disclose the reasons for security purposes, but assures him that the issue has been resolved. His status window is now fully functional, and he'll start evolving as intended. However, instead of feeling relieved, Taejun grows furious. He turns to her, shouting that all of his efforts were in vain. Every bit of hard work and training over the years had been wasted because of a malfunctioning status window. Startled, Mary tries to calm him as he grabs her by the shoulders, his face contorted with rage. He asks if she wants to die for what she's done, demanding to know how she plans to compensate him for the 7 lost years. Terrified, Mary pleads for him to relax and assures him that she has restored all the attributes he should have had and even healed his injuries. Taejun lets go of her and examines his leg, moving it around. He realizes he no longer feels any pain, marveling that it's in perfect condition. He asks how she managed it. Mary offers to explain, but first mentions that for explosive growth to activate, a special trigger is required. She begins proposing a challenge to him. The scene shifts to the middle of the city, where green energy swirls in the sky. From it, tentacles emerge, followed by a massive creature spewing acid. The sight causes the crowd to scream, with people calling for the containment team. The creature, resembling a beholder with multiple faces, descends to the ground. In the midst of the panicking crowd, Taejun exclaims in disbelief, questioning if Miri is seriously sending him to his death. He insists he has no chance against such a monster, but Miri encourages him, expressing her faith in his abilities and reassuring him, almost too casually, that at worst, he'll just die. While Mary flashes him a thumbs up, Taejun stares at the creature, which opens up like a flower, releasing venomous spores. Such a creature would typically require at least a B-rank hunter, and even an experienced containment team would struggle against it. Taejun, hesitant, asks if defeating the monster would truly activate explosive growth as Miri claimed. She confidently confirms it. Still conflicted, he debates whether to trust her. Her sudden appearance and her absurd suggestion leave him incredulous. He concludes that his life is already a chain of unfortunate events, and running away wouldn't change a thing. With nothing to lose, he decides to face it head-on, albeit hesitantly. He begins running toward the creature, passing by soldiers who try to stop him, warning him of the danger. Just as he closes in, the creature sprays acid on his arm. Taejun retaliates, delivering a direct kick that obliterates one of the creature's appendages. Instantly, a mission notification appears. A small step forward has been completed. The skill Fearless experience activates along with explosive growth. Taejun, astonished, questions how a single blow could damage a creature of his caliber. As he wonders about the new windows appearing before him, another notification pops up, stating that his stats are improving significantly. We see his status window. He's still a rank D. Behind him, Miri asks how it feels to use explosive growth for the first time. Taejun, wide-eyed, can only say that it's absurdly overpowered. Miri warns him not to celebrate yet. She explains that the skill's true potential is just beginning, and to unlock it, he'll need to defeat all the monsters. As she speaks, Taejun charges toward another spore, killing it in a single blow. Again, explosive growth activates, boosting his attributes further. He marvels at how each kill significantly strengthens him, fueling his excitement to take down more. He quickly eliminates the 5 remaining spores, gaining even more power. Finally, he leaps toward the venomous spore, thinking that at this rate, he could reach B-rank status within a week, maybe even surpass A rank. With a grin, he plunges into the spore's mouth, preparing a punch. The scene cuts to a restored cityscape, where soldiers clean up the creature's remains. Onlookers gather, speculating whether the containment team has arrived. Among the crowd is Yeonjun, who complains about missing the action. One of his companions points points out Taejin rummaging through the creature's remains. They wonder why a loser like him is there and speculate if he's eaten something strange. Noting his oddly smug expression, Youngjin approaches with his group, calling out to Taejin and Miri. Youngjin taunts Taejin, asking if he didn't understand the hint they gave him earlier. He calls him pathetic and asserts that he'll never amount to anything more than a loser. Taejin wonders internally if they're here to hunt as well. A status window appears before Taejin, prompting a sly smile. With heavy sarcasm, he remarks on how his injured leg delayed him, ironically thanking Youngjin for their kindness. Before the situation escalates, a soldier from the containment team interrupts, thanking Taejin for his help and acknowledging that the situation would have been far more dangerous without him. Taejin's smile turns almost psychotic as he contemplates how everything is falling into place for him. Deciding to seize the moment, he humbly tells the soldier that it was nothing and simply his duty as a hunter. This leaves Youngjin and his group visibly irritated and confused. The soldier continues praising Taejin, marveling at his ability to handle so many spores at once. She's interrupted by Youngjin, who incredulously asks if she's saying Taejin defeated the entire monster alone. She confirms, questioning if there's an issue. Youngjin, still in disbelief, barely has time to process this when Taejin dismissively tells him not to bother the public officials. Grabbing Youngjin and his group, Taejin drags them away, promising to explain everything later. We move forward to a scene where the characters are inside a small building under construction. The blonde guy taunts the protagonist, demanding to know if he really defeated that creature on his own. He continues mocking, pointing out that the protagonist is just a rank D, questioning if he seriously believes such a feat is possible, and ordering him to answer. The protagonist remains silent, recalling an earlier moment when the status window informed him that he had encountered some very rude adventurers. It then gave him a mission to teach him a lesson in exchange for an A-rank skill. This memory had caused him to grin like a psychopath earlier, as he thought about the opportunity to gain a skill just by beating up these idiots. For him, it was like killing two birds with one stone. In the present, the protagonist suddenly drops to his knees on the floor, leaving Miri looking like a complete fool. Taejin, however, apologizes and asks if they wouldn't mind if he gave them a good beating. They stare at him in confusion, while Taejin casually explains that they might be confused, but since he's new to this sort of thing, he's not very good at sugarcoating his words. He asks one last time if they'd mind receiving a lesson. Youngjin's group is outraged. One of them, a massive bald guy, steps forward and questions if Taejin has lost his mind due to the heat, or if this is some sort of joke. He tells Taejin to stop spouting nonsense and reminds him that in this world, people who commit crimes must be punished. He punctuates this statement by striking Taejin's head, trying to push him downward. The protagonist calmly asks if he's serious about what he just said. Then he announces that since the bald man thinks this way, he'll be the one to punish him and that he should take it like he deserves. The bald man starts to question Taejin's statement, but before he can fully speak, Taejin lands a punch straight to his face. The impact is so devastating that it metaphorically restarts his Windows system, leaving the man sprawled on the ground. The rest of the group is left stunned, questioning if they're seeing things correctly, as the bald guy has collapsed all by himself. While they're still shocked, Taejin tells them to come at him one by one. Since they dared to intimidate a superior, he wants to see if they can handle even a single flick to the forehead. The group thinks he's delusional to believe they'd fall to such a ridiculous attack. They question why he seems so confident, asking if he hasn't already taken enough of a beating. As they approach, Taejin, who is preparing a flick, delivers it with such force to the bald guy's head that his face deforms and his nose sprays blood like ketchup. Then Taejin systematically takes down the rest of the group one flick at a time, breaking shields, disarming weapons, and knocking out several members. By the end, only Youngjin is left standing, furious and confused, asking if this is some kind of joke, that his team could fall to an attack like that. Taejin responds that it's no joke. He calls Youngjin by his name, his eyes glowing red, and asks if he still thinks this is funny. Youngjin is visibly disoriented, and Taejin explains that while he might let the others go, Youngjin specifically isn't going to escape. He states that a mere flick to the forehead isn't enough for someone like him and advises him to prepare himself. Youngjin, now enraged, declares that he's going to kill Taejin. He conjures ice spikes and mocks Taejin, stating that it seems like he's unlocked some sort of physical skill, but warns him not to get cocky over a single ability. Taejin, unfazed, looks at him and casually asks when he learned the ice missile skill. Right at that moment, the status window pops up, announcing that Taejin has acquired a new skill. Taejin grins and thanks the status window for its perfect timing. Raising his hand to the sky, he conjures a massive fireball and a Dragon Ball-style display of power. Taejin smirks at Youngjin, informing him that he also has a new skill and is eager to test it out. This is no ordinary fireball. It's an A-rank fireball, significantly stronger than a standard fireball and capable of reducing healing effects upon impact. Taejin asks Youngjin what he thinks of it, as the blonde guy stares in stunned disbelief. His ice spikes melt under the fireball's intense heat, and he wonders if it's even a real fireball. Taejin admits that that he just learned the skill and isn't sure if he can fully control its power yet, mockingly advising Youngjin to be careful before launching it at him. Youngjin began to be consumed by the enormous flaming ball, his thoughts overwhelmed by how unbearably hot it was. In the end, a massive explosion shook the area, creating a fissure in the building and leaving Youngjin sprawled on the ground. His body was dried out, his clothes scorched, and his hair split in half and burned to a crisp. The blonde guy, barely conscious, wonders what just happened and how he's still alive. Our protagonist mocks him for wetting his pants, adding that even in desperation, he shouldn't collapse to the ground in such a pitiful manner. Taejun walks closer to him and warns him to stop picking on guild members, instructing him to be nice from now on. Youngjin apologizes profusely, admitting that he understands. He calls Taejun senior and promises never to bully anyone again. However, our protagonist smirks and reminds him that there's still one flick left to deliver. Placing his hand close to the blonde guy's forehead, he smiles mischievously, ready to finish what he started. Mari looks at our protagonist collapsed near the bed and tells him to wake up, saying it's time for him to head to the dungeon. She explains that after using too much power, he passed out from exhaustion and remained immobile for 3 days. She wonders aloud if he'll be able to overcome this crisis, breaking the fourth wall and looking at us, while Taejun tells her to shut up. He groans about being in pain, running a fever, and asks if she could just keep quiet. She realizes he's finally awake, and he explains that he pushed his mana to the limit, which is what happens when he's reckless. He got too excited about becoming strong so quickly, but now he needs to focus on improving his mana. Miri asks if he really needs that, considering his incredible growth so far. He confirms that it's precisely because of that growth that he needs to increase his mana. All his stats have improved except his mana, and if he continues hunting without addressing this, he'll faint again. He also points out that his fireball skill consumes twice as much mana, so either way he has to boost his mana. Mary nods, saying she understands, and asks if there's a way to increase just mana. He responds that there's a perfect place for that, just as the status window pops up, notifying him that 8 hours and 30 minutes remain until his recovery. We fast forward to the next day, where an enormous tower reaching up to the sky comes into view. Its name is Training Tower. Taejun approaches it with Mary, who asks him what the giant tower is. He explains that it's the best place to train mana quickly, and that it's a beginner's dungeon. She looks puzzled and asks why, if it's so well known and effective, they're the only ones there. He explains that in the past, it was a popular spot, but it's fallen out of fashion nowadays. As they talk, an old man approaches, calling out to his grandmother and asking if she's really returned. This confuses our protagonist, who wonders what's going on with him. Taejun approaches and states that he wants to do the tower's training mission, but the old man mishears and says something about not eating fast food, directing it to his grandmother. Our protagonist clarifies that he wants to do the mission and isn't asking for fast food. The old man asks if he's really there to challenge the tower's mission, then tells him to follow along, offering to guide them through the tower. Miri comments nervously about how uneasy this makes her, but Taejun assures her that he's prepared. The old man begins explaining the tower, but is interrupted by our protagonist, who explains that the tower is divided into 10 stages, and upon completing them all, the mission is cleared. He elaborates that the first stage involves defeating a group of goblins. The old man confirms this, and Miri remarks that Taejun seems to know a lot about the tower. Taejun responds that no one knows tower strategies better than he does, as he couldn't physically participate in expeditions, but studied them extensively on YouTube and memorized all the strategies he saw. He concludes by saying that the beginner's dungeon will be a piece of cake for him. Miri congratulates him, and the story notes that Taejun is indeed an excellent theoretical learner. The old man asks what he said, but Taejun brushes it off, pretending he was just talking to himself. Shortly after, they find themselves inside the tower, where the old man tells them to begin the first tests, striking the ground with his staff and summoning the monsters. As Miri comments that 10 goblins should be nothing for Taejun, 3 small goblins approach. However, behind them, an enormous group of ogres emerges. Taejun, confused, wonders if it's bulking season. He tries asking the old man why the goblins look like ogres, but the old man simply mutters something about kimchi soup. Frustrated, Taejun calls the old man Sanao. Without delay, the massive group of ogres charges at them. Miri asks Taejun what he's going to do about the approaching monsters. Clenching his fist, Taejun gathers his fireball magic and hurls it at the group, setting them ablaze while shouting that he'll crush them. As he celebrates, watching the monsters burn, Miri warns him that there are still enemies left and tells him to be careful. An ogre sneaks up behind him, and it's too late to defend himself as it lands a direct blow. Fortunately, he blocks it and counters by using the staff for leverage, launching himself into the air and landing a direct kick to the ogre's face, challenging it to show what it's got. With just one kick, the ogre collapses. The status window pops up, notifying him that the first stage has been cleared perfectly, and that, thanks to explosive growth, his experience has increased significantly. The old man laughs and congratulates Taejun on clearing the first floor so quickly, commenting that it looked too easy. Taejun, trying to suppress his rage, says it wasn't easy at all and was much harder than he expected. The old man ignores him and instructs them to proceed to the next stage, further infuriating Taejun, who feels an increasing urge to attack the old old man. From that point, our protagonist explains that the dungeon was completely different from what he had anticipated, with monsters far stronger than usual, overwhelming numbers, and absurdly higher levels of physical and mental difficulty. He finally understood why no one came here anymore, not because they almost died at the start, but because this place was utterly impossible to clear for beginners. It was hell itself. We see our protagonist going through numerous test stages, and in the end, as he screams for mercy, Miri calls out to him. He kneels at the final stage of the tower, facing an enormous creature. In front of him stands the final boss, a massive three-headed dog with golden chains around its neck and reddish fur. This is the Hellhound, level 90 rank S. Our protagonist thinks back to the forest, where he once thought of hellhounds as merely mean dogs. But this was on an entirely different level than anything he'd encountered before. He mutters that they should just give up on the reward already, admitting he couldn't defeat this thing even if he died and came back to life. Worse still, he's out of mana. However, a hidden mission suddenly appears, instructing him to heal the senile NPC. It explains that the NPC is causing disorder in the dungeon, and restoring his health would bring the dungeon back under control. Our protagonist wonders how he hadn't thought of this earlier, and recalls that the entire tower was constructed using the old man's mana. Since the old man can't control his own mana, the monsters are running rampant. If he could just restore the old man to normal, he could complete the dungeon. Miri asks if he's come up with a plan, and he confirms he has, though he's not sure it'll work. He starts running toward the old man while recalling something he heard before. When a powerful mage loses control of their mana, they lose their mind due to an overload of magical energy. At that point, they can barely think. The old man's mind is like a massive tangle of mana threads. Our protagonist rushes behind the old man while Miri shouts, asking what he's doing. Grabbing the old man's head, he prepares for action. In a swift motion, he starts massaging the old man's head, relaxing him into nirvana. Our protagonist thinks that at first glance, this might just look like a massage, but in reality, he's redirecting the scattered mana back into its proper pattern in the old man's mind. He assures himself that somehow, he'll fix this and restore the mana's flow. However, Miri interrupts, shouting for him to be careful as a massive pink fireball heads their way. Desperate, he begs the old man to snap out of it while accelerating his movements. The fireball strikes, creating a huge explosion that bursts out of the tower. Yet our protagonist isn't hit directly. A voice speaks, remarking that the old man's body seems to have caused a lot of trouble, acknowledging all that has happened and finally calling him Young One with a chuckle. We then see that the frail old man has transformed into a muscular figure, and his staff has become enormous. Our protagonist asks who he is now. The old man replies that it has been a long time since his mind was so clear. Before he finishes speaking, the massive hellhound lunges to attack. With a single motion, the old man not only tears off a chunk of the hellhound, but also destroys the top of the tower. Finally, he thanks our protagonist, calling him a benefactor and saying that if he has any wish, he need only say the word. The status window appears, notifying that the hidden mission has been completed and a reward has been granted. We move forward a bit to the old man doing squats with the staff on his back. Reaching the 100th, he throws the staff against the ground, breaking the floor while saying that high-intensity training is preparing for moments of intense mana usage. He then starts showing off bodybuilding poses, claiming that this is precisely what made him an archmage. He is the archmage Elcruroid, who asked our protagonist if he can feel the mana radiating from his muscles, telling him to touch them if he wants to. Our protagonist refuses, saying he did need to, but the old man says that this type of power is not unnecessary and adds that he hasn't heard what he wanted yet and that anything is valid. Taejun informs him that he has little mana and hopes that the archmage can increase it. His limit is 200. Elcruroid says it wouldn't be difficult for him, talking about the body mana technique, mana accumulation technique. He punches the poor guy directly in the stomach, and at that moment, the protagonist starts screaming with light coming out of his eyes and mouth. The status window informs that his mana has been increased by 300, now totaling 500 points. He starts coughing, complaining that he almost died from that. The old man informs him that from what he sees, the problem is not his mana, but his use of the fireball, as he uses too much mana to cast it. Even though the fireball is a basic ability, this is far beyond that, and it's consuming a lot of mana. But he reassures Taejun that he shouldn't worry, as he would help him recreate the fireball. We move forward a little in time outside of this tower, and we're in a building in the middle of the city. We hear someone calling for Taejun, a red-haired girl named Lee Shenao, a rank hunter from the Myth Guild. Miri, impressed, asks if the protagonist knows the girl, and he replies that she is just an old friend from the hunter training institution. Miri is even more impressed, asking if he really has friends and even a friend. This leaves him irritated, and he questions whether he really looks that miserable in her eyes. She simply asks why she called him. Taejun confirms that he called her to test the new fireball technique he learned from the old man and says that the guild's scene is part of myth has the largest training center in the country. He adds that the old fireball could easily destroy a building, but the current one is even more dangerous, so he needs a safe area to use it. Cian understands and says that he has more connections than she expected. She approaches, asking what he was saying, but he just says that he didn't say anything, nervously laughing. We move forward to inside the location, with Cian asking how he has been since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. He says he's just been fulfilling his duties as a hunter. She suddenly gets closer, asking if that was true, and he asks if there's something on his face that made her get so close. She denies it and says she just wanted to see how much he's changed. Cian says that he always needed her help, but suddenly he seems more confident. This is strange, but another person had also requested to use the training center. She confirms and says that he would be surprised to see who it is. As she clicks to open the door, she notices they already arrived. The protagonist is surprised, realizing it's Choi Jin-hyuk, a rank a hunter and member of the Bikshin Guild. The two stare at each other, with the protagonist surprised and Choi looking very angry. Cian is between them and asks why there's tension between them, since they hadn't seen each other in a year. We move forward a little with her explaining that the location is a virtual space made from the user's mana, and the power of the training monster depends on the amount of mana used. She channels mana into her hand and creates a small, ugly rat that even the devil would pity, but she calls it cute while asking if he understood. Our protagonist wonders if this thing was really supposed to be cute, while Cian says she's going to grab some drinks, leaving them alone. Taejin stares at her leaving, and behind him, Jin-hyuk stares at him. The protagonist extends his hands, saying that in this place he could create any monster he wanted with mana. He ends up forming a huge ogre to test it, noticing that it worked. In an instant, he sets a series of attacks, splitting the ogre in half, saying that it wasn't even worth the warm-up. While stretching, Jin-hyuk asks if it was him and tells him not to try to act innocent. He asks if he's the one who wiped out the guild's rookies, calling him an idiot. He says that at first he didn't want to believe it, but now seeing him kill an ogre, he realizes it's true, asking if he had unlocked some new power or something like that. Questioning what he is doing now that he is strong, beating his family members who ate from the same plate. Our protagonist stares at him, remembering that Jin-hyuk is one of the few friends he could truly rely on at the hunter training institution. But when Jin-hyuk joined Bikshin, he climbed the ranks and began changing into the person he is now, and they are no longer friends. The protagonist has a very ugly and arrogant look on his face, saying that it was him who did that and asking what Jin-hyuk would do about it, since it was him who beat up the rookies for messing with him first. He steps closer and asks what Jin-hyuk did, besides just watching as he was beaten to a pulp by them, every word making Jin-hyuk angrier. Taejin finishes by saying that he should have stepped in and defeated them with Youngjin. Jin-hyuk loses his patience and grabs the collar of our protagonist, warning him that he has a lot of nerve. But the protagonist interrupts him, saying that he's being strangled and finding it hard to breathe, and since he feels threatened, this would be self-defense. We see Cian entering, carrying a bag and informing them that she brought drinks for him. She is surprised and asks what they were doing, seeing Taejin and Jin-hyuk fighting. Jin-hyuk forces the protagonist to lower himself with a thrust while asking for a break, but the protagonist warns that there will be no rest, while he is surprised by a kick from the protagonist. Jin-hyuk barely manages to defend himself, but he admits that Taejin has gotten stronger and that he will now take it seriously. But our protagonist just mocks him, saying that he should have done that from the start, making Jin-hyuk even more irritated, thinking about when this idiot became so good at provoking. He spins his spear and names his technique, releasing yellow thunderbolts. Bikshin spear technique, first form, Spear of Thunder, surrounding the spears with yellow energy. Cian shouts, asking if Jin-hyuk has lost his mind, pulling out the Thunder Spear in the training center. Our protagonist says he already knew Jin-hyuk would use this technique, with Miri by his side, surprised and scared, while the protagonist warns that he's going all out as well. Cian and Miri are shocked as he prepares himself, and the crazy guy simply releases a blue fire Kamehameha towards Jin-hyuk. This is the fireball of the rank as Archmage, which also applies a healing reduction on the target, and it was learned from Elkroyd. It leaves Jin-hyuk stunned, wondering if this is really a beam of pure energy. Jin-hyuk complains about the amount of magical power and says he wouldn't be able to block it, but suddenly a figure stepped in front of him, drawing a sword and cutting the energy in half, dissipating it completely, leaving everyone stunned. Our protagonist asks who he is, and Cian shouts that it's the vice president of the Myth Guild, Cha Soo-hyun, a rank as hunter. Soo-hyun states that this fireball isn't ordinary and warns that using such a powerful skill on a teammate could have caused a serious accident. Our protagonist simply says that he's a bit out of energy because this was his first time using it. Jin-hyuk thinks that, although it was an unexpected situation, it turned out well, and the best part is that Taejin was in trouble. Finally, with a terrifying aura, Soo-hyun stares at our protagonist and calls him. After approaching with a smile, he asks if our protagonist would like to join his guild, while shaking his hand. Jin-hyuk is indignant, thinking that the vice president of the Myth Guild, one of the few rank as hunters in the country, is offering a proposal to Taejin. Soo-hyun states that he had never encountered a fireball with such power before, and someone who takes basic skills to the maximum would be a great asset to their guild. He asks once more if Taejun would like to join them. Our protagonist smiles while thinking that to receive a proposal out of nowhere, he must have been recognized, and Myth is one of the 4 largest guilds in Korea. The 4 guilds are Hongnik, Myth, Longwon, and Cheonyin. If he joined, it would be a huge benefit. Taejun speaks aloud to the vice president, who listens, saying that a hunter must consistently train to surpass their limits. Soo-hyun questions this training, and our protagonist states that he promised to duel a colleague to test his limits, while Jin-hyuk denies, asking when he promised to duel. But he is interrupted by our protagonist, who says that during his training with hunter Jin-hyuk, he realized that Jin-hyuk is a mountain he still cannot surpass, and because of this, he couldn't join the guild since there are still many mountains to overcome before that. Jin-hyuk claims he's crazy and tries to warn about the fight, but the vice president simply starts laughing, saying that nothing is more essential than training for a hunter, and that he liked Taejun's spirit. He finishes by asking what his name and rank are. The protagonist states that he is a rank D hunter, and his name is Lee Taejun. Soo-hyun says that a talent like him being rank D is a huge waste, and finishes by saying he will make an effort for him. We move forward a bit in time with the protagonist explaining that he received a letter of recommendation from Soo-hyun to participate in the rank B evaluation in a month. At first he was hesitant, but the higher a hunter's rank, the higher the level of dungeon they can enter. Because of that, he wouldn't be losing out, so he decided to take the test to become rank B. Now a month later, we are at the Hunter Test Center, and our protagonist is impressed by the unique atmosphere of the place. Beside him, Miri comments that Soo-hyun must really like him since he gave him a recommendation letter so quickly. Our protagonist boasts, saying that talent recognizes talent and no one could compare to him. Miri asks the question everyone is wondering: why didn't he join the Myth Guild, since they were offering so much support? He replies that logically it's because of the money, as adventurers affiliated with guilds have to share part of their expedition and raid profits with the guild. Also, the rewards aren't that great, and his schedule would be packed. He'd work like a good dog, only to be discarded when get injured. He ends by saying he just wanted money and nothing more. While smiling like a psychopath, someone calls his name, making him turn his face around with only part of his body devilishly twisted. He notices it's a girl with silver hair wearing a cat ear headband, asking if he was also going to take the test. This is Yu Se-rin, a rank C member of the Cheonyin Guild. She extends her hand and he shakes it, asking if she knows him. She confirms, saying that rumors had already spread, thinking about how Soo-hyun is completely determined to bring him into his guild. But she gives a mischievous smile as she says she heard he was such a talent that even the vice president of the Myth Guild was after him and had been eagerly watching over him. Our protagonist confirms, thinking that he was talking unnecessarily. Both are interrupted by a man who says he came to see what was going on, but ended up preparing only with a mediocre man, referring to our protagonist, saying this was to show that nothing good comes from a hyped-up banquet. This is Ham Jeon, rank C, from the Whoring Guild. He introduces himself and says it's a pleasure to meet them, stating that he is destined to be the greatest hunter of this era. While our protagonist thinks that he's crazy, a voice echoes it's the announcer welcoming the participants and stating that they would begin the 30-second rank B evaluation test. All the hunters present turn their attention to the woman on stage, and she continues, announcing that she will introduce the hunter who will be their mentor during this time, rank a hunter Choi Jin-hyuk from the Bikshin Guild. Our protagonist is impressed while Jin-hyuk speaks into the microphone, saying it's good to see all of them. He warns that before the tests, you will briefly explain the procedures to them. The test will take place in a dungeon prepared by them, and each of the 8 participants will be grouped into pairs to face the dungeon together. This dungeon has 4 entrances labeled A, B, C, and D. The first pair to reach the end will face the boss with him directly, and even if they get seriously injured, a team will be ready to help. He ends by warning them about a scoring system that will be in effect and that they must keep it in mind. After informing everyone, they would begin the test. If anyone's name was called, they must step forward, take the streaming equipment, and then go to the portal. Finally, Team A is composed of Yu Se-rin and Kang Jian. Team B is composed of Yang Dongjun and Hong Ah-riam. Team C is composed of Cho Song-yai and Bong Jun-hyun. And Team D is composed of Lee Taejun and Kim Jun-hyun. They were instructed to go to their respective locations, and our protagonist starts talking to the big guy on his team, calling him by name, surprised to see him there too. Jun-hyun says it would be good to work with his senior, Kim Jun-hyun, rank C, from the Bikshin Guild. We see them entering the portal while being observed by Jin-hyuk, who thinks that Taejun will regret using him for his own benefit, mentally warning him that it wouldn't be as easy as he thought. Jun-hyun nods at him. The two enter the dungeon, and inside we see a huge dead serpent impaled by spikes with a skull in the darkness sitting on a throne. We see a flashback to the Bikshin Guild, where Jin-hyuk was asking if Jun-hyun was listening carefully, warning him that Jun-hyun only needed to participate in the rank B evaluation and disrupt Taejun. Route D was designed to be most difficult, and if Jun-hyun Hyun disrupted Taejin, he wouldn't be able to pass easily. He then asks if the poor guy's mother isn't in serious condition and tells him to take the chance to make some money to help pay for the surgery, promising a generous reward if the mission is completed. With Jin-hyuk telling him to just trust him and move forward, we return to the present, where Jun-hyun is thinking about how he ended up on Route D with Taejin. Our protagonist points to some white snakes, calling them monsters, and with one swift punch, the 3 snakes have their heads crushed. He wonders why they're so weak and why they gave so little experience. Jun-hyun is confused by the protagonist's strength and the fact that his explosive growth ability is active, but only increases experience by a small amount. Jun-hyun thinks to himself about how Taejin got so strong since just a few weeks ago they weren't that different. Back at Bikshin, they were at the lowest ranks, but even in that position, Taejin didn't lose hope. We see a conversation between them, with Taejin admiring Jun-hyun's ability to absorb his opponent's attacks and stating that someone with a skill like his would eventually shine, as long as he kept trying. Jun-hyun recalls how Taejin, as a great senior, gave him hope when he had none. Now his mission was to make Taejin fail, and he couldn't help but think that this was the kind of thing only scum would do. But he had no choice. He needed to pay for his mother's surgery, so he had to do it for his family. He approaches the protagonist, calling out to him and hands him a bottle, saying it would be difficult, so he should at least take it. He explains that it's a buff potion he brings on expeditions and that it would be good for him to use it. Taejin thanks him and drinks it, while Jun-hyun thinks that the protagonist has successfully drunk the paralysis poison and Taejin will become weaker over time. But as soon as Jun-hyun stops thinking, the protagonist starts complaining about pain, saying that some devil is waking up inside him, asking for a bathroom. Jun-hyun says there is no bathroom in the area, and Taejin says there's no choice but to quickly clear the dungeon. Taejin receives a notification from his status window that his resistance to all poison skill is active, while the chubby guy wonders if he has any kind of resistance. Sometime later, deeper into the dungeon, the protagonist observes a huge hole in the cave and says that it's a dead end due to the deep hole ahead, so they should go back. But the design of the place gives the feeling that they're walking in circles. Jun-hyun looks at the protagonist's back, thinking that this is his chance. If he pushes him, Taejin wouldn't die from the fall, and this might be his only chance to disrupt the evaluation. He shouts an apology to the protagonist while charging to push him down, but ends up missing, leaving both of them confused. As the protagonist is about to fall, he grabs Jun-hyun's leg in desperation, shouting, asking if he wants to die by suddenly throwing himself off a cliff. Jun-hyun desperately calls himself garbage and asks to be left to die. And when Taejin asks what he's talking about, Jun-hyun explains that he was trying to make him fail the evaluation by putting him in danger. He finishes by asking Taejin to let someone like him fall. Taejin tells him to talk about it later, and that it's not a good time, as in his mind he's thinking that this time it's serious. He has extreme stomach pain, and he wonders if he can relieve himself nearby since no one will be watching his live stream. But as soon as he looks around, there are 10 spectators. Thinking that he can't let this be seen, he tries to pull Jun-hyun up, but the ground gives way, and they both fall to the bottom of the pit. After the fall, both of them complain of pain in the darkness when a strange animal sound appears and countless snakes emerge from the darkness, heading toward them. We see the other groups. Team B is in trouble. Both are extremely exhausted, and while the observer asks if they'll be able to make it through, Hong Ah-ryum starts screaming for her mother, asking to leave. With her resignation, Team B is eliminated, while poor Yang Dong-jun is left behind, asking for help. Meanwhile, in Team C, they're fighting each other, almost leading to their elimination. Then the last one left is Team A. The observer asks if they'll be able to make it through as we see Yu Se-rin speaking to the camera, announcing that they will defeat the 1,000-year-old white snakes. As soon as she says she's ready, she looks back to see Kang Ji-yeon charging at the snakes, shouting "Aura, aura, aura, aura" like Jotaro. She gets scared because he's doing everything by himself, while Kang says this evaluation will get him noticed by his boss, and he won't let this chance slip. She complains that he wants all the spotlight for himself, but she won't let that happen. Raising her hand, she uses her freezing wind skill, freezing many snakes as they are hit. She shouts that she won't be a secondary character. She will be the main character of this test. Team A advances in the test, meeting the expectations as the potential of the 4 major guilds, and they are the first to enter the boss room. They arrive in front of the Jin-hyuk, who congratulates them for making it this far and says he will lead them to the boss. Yu Se-rin asks if Taejin hasn't arrived yet, and Jin-hyuk responds that since Team D doesn't have a live stream, they've probably been eliminated. Kang says he told them Taejin wasn't much, but Yu Se-rin simply says she had high expectations from a direct recommendation from Soo-hyun. Jin-hyuk asks them to follow him to the boss room, hiding a malicious smile. They enter the boss room, and Jin-hyuk thinks about how disappointed Soo-hyun would be if he found out about this. But all three are stunned by the sight of a huge serpent, impaled by spikes, and a large skeleton sitting on a throne. staring at them and saying something unrecognizable. They all wonder what the hell that is. We return to Team D with the explanation of Junhyun's ability, which absorbs magical skills from opponents and returns them to the attacker. The more it absorbs, the more powerful it becomes, but he cannot absorb more than his capacity. And when the absorption meets the Archmage's fireball, it forms a new ability, the Hell Train. The two are sent flying toward the top with a cannon of blue flames coming out of Junhyun's backside. Our protagonist on Junhyun's shoulders asks him if he can still take more, and Junhyun agrees. The protagonist points upward, telling him to head straight for the boss room. We cut directly to Team A with Jinyeok thinking that the dungeon boss should have been the Imuji according to the original plan. However, the Imuji is dead and a lich is facing them. Jinyeok can only think that someone must have tampered with the dungeon. Seren asks if this is really happening and screams, questioning why there's a lich in the area. The massive dead serpent begins to rise as Jinyeok orders everyone to move back behind him. At that moment, the serpent attacks, lifting Jinyeok and causing team members to shout that they can't just stand by and watch. Both begin to attack the creature. However, the lich simply raises his finger, causing ice stakes to shoot toward them, striking them. Just as Jinyeok thinks he'll have to defeat the lich to stop the Imuji, he charges toward the lich's back, only to be held down by the serpent's tail, immobilized. While thinking that he's been careless, he questions if he's really going to die so easily, without even being able to say his last words to Sena. However, his thoughts and the snake's attack are interrupted by the two clumsy ones, who hit the snake's head with the Hell Train, leaving Jinhyuk staring at them confused. Taejun and Junhyun celebrate for reaching the boss room, while Jinyeok thinks that he's happy to be alive, but that's not important right now. He stares at the two clumsy ones, calling out to them and warning them to stay away from the Imuji. While dodging a direct strike from the serpent, the protagonist asks if a lich alongside an Imuji isn't too much for a rank B test. Jinyeok replies that apparently someone interfered with the evaluation, and maybe someone wanted one of them to fail. He adds that it's probably someone who can control the guilds or maybe even someone connected to other guilds. The protagonist says he understands and points at the serpent and the lich, asking if they just need to defeat them. The stressed out Jinyeok confirms and says that he really doesn't want to work with the protagonist. The two agree it's only temporary while they move forward. Jinyeok warns them to be careful while shouting and using his spear to slice through the spikes flying toward him. Taejun assures that he's not distracted and launches another fire Kamehameha against the spikes, eventually hitting the snake's head. Finally, at his side, Jinyeok thrusts his spears forward and initiates the second form of the divine spear technique, slashing at the Imugi from multiple angles simultaneously. With the help of Team A, Seren unleashes freezing energy into Kang's hands, and he charges toward the seemingly defenseless lich. Kang makes sure not to miss this opportunity, advancing with a direct punch that pierces the lich. The protagonist doesn't waste time, thrusting a burning flame into Junhyun's mouth, launching the Hell Train at the lich again. They all celebrate its defeat, while the lich remains frozen, but suddenly, they are surprised to see it return to its original state, as if nothing had happened. While reciting unpronounceable words, bones rise from the ground like spikes, piercing all of them in various places. Everyone is wounded by the surprise attack as Taejun thinks that even though the lich is strong, it shouldn't be immune to damage. He wonders what he might be missing, since he doesn't know enough about liches. However, while the protagonist is thinking, Mary's voice asks if he has forgotten about her, informing him that it was very difficult to download the app and hack it. From this moment on, they will fight using the map as their main weapon. She tells him to try hacking the map and fight. He asks her what the hell she's talking about, as she never mentioned this before, but the status window appears showing the loading of the dungeon mapping, acquiring information such as monsters, structure, and details, and informs that it would recreate a map. Once completed, a mental hologram appears in front of him with a screen announcing that Parsley Navigation has been activated. Taejun asks Mary what Parsley Navigation is, and she explains that by using it, he would be able to discover various information about dungeons such as enemy abilities, secret routes, and rewards. This would allow him to learn a lot about the dungeons. Additionally, she installed apps that he could actively use in combat. The protagonist thinks to himself that this is not just a hack to see, but a complete assistant since it has many useful functions. He confirms that the original boss should be the B-class Imuji and wonders where the hell this lich came from. Staring at the lich, it suddenly starts making strange sounds, which incredibly, he can understand. The lich informs that Eridas is happy, and our protagonist realizes he has an app that translates monster language, thinking how creepy this is, and asks Miri what's happening. She confirms it must be a bug, but both are interrupted as Eridas says he's grateful to his contractor for giving him such fresh and strong humans. Our protagonist thinks it's strange because it doesn't seem like a bug, and since he mentioned a contractor, maybe someone summoned him forcefully. The protagonist asks Jinyeok if he can move, and when he confirms that he avoided the fatal blow, the protagonist says that even if he doesn't believe it, he has found the lich's weakness. There's no time to explain, they just need to confirm and trust him. They stay in a brief silence until Jinyeok asks what they should do. The protagonist replies that the first thing they should do is annoy him. At the same time, the protagonist starts jumping, calling the lich a skeleton, and asks why he isn't attacking, wondering if his brain is frozen, all while making faces and sticking out his tongue. This irritates the skeleton to the point that he questions if the protagonist wants to die sooner, banging his staff on the ground ground, warning that he would bring them all down. The protagonist is able to see alerts of where bone spikes would come out of the ground and tells everyone to gather around him, barely escaping them this time. Smiling, Taejun confirms that it's just like the manager said. He can really see the attack paths, and with that, he can execute the plan. He starts mocking the poor guy for missing all of his attacks, and that he really does have a legendary shooting skill, which only angers the skeleton more. The skeleton, furious, launches several flaming skulls, and taking advantage of the moment, Taejun begins coordinating their movements, telling Jian to move 3 steps to the side and Junhyun to move 5 steps back, making both dodge attacks that almost kill them. As John praises their skill, Irida starts shouting that they're good at dodging, but he wants to see them dodge the next one. As dark energy emanates through the room, the protagonist sees that there are warning signs of the attack everywhere, making it impossible to dodge. While they ask how they should dodge, Taejun thinks that it's a huge attack area, and there's only one way to avoid it. Meanwhile, Iratus announces his ability, the Requiem of Death. It generates mass destruction, annihilating everything around him, and when it finishes, he calls the humans idiots, saying that when they dodge too much, it's easy to use an ability that cannot be dodged. However, the Lich is surprised when the protagonist shouts for them to go, and the 3 of them, Jinhyuk, Taejun, and Serin, emerge from the smoke generated by the ability, while the protagonist yells that the Lich's abilities are on cooldown. The Lich screams, asking how it's possible that they survived that and what's going on. The text explains that the Requiem of Death is an area attack ability with a vast range, where the strength increases the farther they are from the center and decreases as they approach. With this information obtained through Parsley navigation, Taejun warns everyone to get closer to him to avoid severe damage. We return to the protagonist ordering Siren to attack, and she launches the freezing wind directly at the Lich, immobilizing him. Iratus congratulates them for blocking his attack, but warns that their attacks won't affect him. Knowing this, the protagonist tells them to prevent the Lich from moving while he runs toward his back. The skeleton stares at him, trying to understand what he's going to do, but begins to panic. Taejun thinks as he runs that Liches summoned by contracts accept sacrifices and remain virtually immortal until the offering is destroyed in some way. Our protagonist runs toward a box full of seals while stating that if he destroys this box, he will cancel the summoning. The Lich gets even angrier, asking how they dare deceive him, charging at the protagonist and breaking the freezing spell, screaming incomprehensible words while trying to strike Taejun in close combat. But just as he almost hits, Jinhyuk and the others attack from behind, with Junhyun throwing himself on top of him and the cross spears pinning him to the ground. They inform him that they stopped him and tell Taejun to finish the job. While he thanks them, he prepares to deliver a punch to the Lich, telling him to stop. The protagonist's punch opens a hole in the wall, revealing a small chest, and he rushes like a psychopath to grab it. The Lich remains trapped by the group as he tries to grab his staff, but Jinhyuk can only think about whether the protagonist really knew the weakness and if it was truly hidden. He fails to notice Iratus activating his magic as he struggles to rise, thinking it's impossible, and that only he and his contractor should know about the offering. Jinhyuk continues trying to hold him in place by attacking, but he doesn't succeed, and the Lich advances toward the protagonist. Up ahead, our protagonist, holding the box, warns the skeleton that if he continues being stubborn, he will destroy the box, once again wearing an evil smile. The Lich stands up in front of the protagonist, asking if he understands the ancient language. Ignoring the question, Taejun states that the Lich should listen closely, as it could save his life. Iratus begins laughing, claiming that he is a contracted being and cannot obey any order except from his contractor. Our protagonist simply says that if that's the case, they should just cancel the contract and be done with it. The Lich then explains that it wouldn't be possible as maybe an ancient mage could do it, but someone like him would never be able to do such a thing. Taejun then questions if he really looks like an ordinary human to him, leaving Iratus confused. The protagonist not only figured out his magic, but also located the offering, making Iratus wonder if Taejun really could cancel his contract. After thinking it over, the Lich kneels, saying he would believe him for now, asking what he desired and affirming he would fulfill his wishes with a strange expression on his face. The protagonist once again thinks about the pain in his stomach and says that first he should undo the skeletons outside, warning that before entering he summons several skeletons. He then looks at Parsley navigation while Iratus asks how he discovered that. Meanwhile, we see the rest of the group fighting the skeletons outside, and the protagonist warns that if he lies, his head will be destroyed, forcing the Lich to comply. After finishing the summons, the Lich asks if the protagonist has any more wishes. The protagonist starts to smile psychotically again while telling him to give him everything he has. The skeleton gets scared, asking what he means by everything he has, and Taejun informs him that he's referring to the items and accessories, asking if he didn't have something to give him. Iratus claims that he doesn't have anything useful, but since the protagonist isn't stupid, he points to the Lich's staff, saying it's interesting. The poor skeleton tries to hide the staff, claiming that it couldn't happen, but changes his mind when the protagonist holds the box and says he will break it. The protagonist grabs the staff, and Iratus starts questioning if he could break the contract, saying that if if he could, he would do anything for him. However, the protagonist simply responds with a clueless expression, saying that he didn't know how to break the contract, which leaves the Lich incredibly confused. Finally, the protagonist tells him that he can't break a contract, since he doesn't even know any summoning magic, advising him to have more sense with his words. Eratus becomes furious after this remark, shouting that he dared to deceive him, but as he threatens and approaches, the protagonist says he warned him that if he came any closer, he would break the offering. Without hesitation, the protagonist lifts the chest and throws it to the ground, causing the Lich's body to begin disintegrating as he mutters complaints. In the end, he disappears, saying he was so close to returning. The protagonist and Miri can only comment that even in death, Eratus left in style. The protagonist then kneels, picking up a rotten finger from the ground and asking if that was really the offering, noting it seemed quite important since it summoned such a powerful being. Miri asks who could have summoned the Lich, and Taejin says it doesn't matter since he got a great item from it. But Miri points out that there is still another item, indicating a small octahedron on the ground. Taejin approaches to inquire about other items, picking it up to examine it. Noticing he can't figure it out, he just says it must be expensive since it fell from the skull. However, he is interrupted by the rest of the group running inside, asking if he's alright, and he hides the staff in the status window. Jin Hyuk takes the lead, asking if he really managed to defeat the Lich alone. The protagonist confirms, saying that the Lich appeared without leaving a trace. Jin, who is accompanying Jin Hyuk, admits that even though he hates to admit it, our protagonist is a very strong hunter, just like Sirin and Jung Hyun, who agreed with John. While they were celebrating in the back, Jin Hyuk approached our protagonist to speak directly with him, apologizing for poisoning him and causing him to be pushed into the pit. He explained that Jung Hyun had only done that because he had ordered him to. To compliment his apology, he admitted that he wasn't sure why he had done all of that to Taejin, and most importantly, he didn't know how they had lost their friendship and drifted apart. However, he said he thought it might be because he didn't like the fact that our protagonist had worked so hard without having talent and never seemed to progress, but he sincerely felt sorry and offered a heartfelt apology to our protagonist. However, the protagonist began to mock him, saying that next time he should make it a little more obvious, as he hadn't noticed Jun Hyun's failed attempts until now. He especially laughed at the fact that Jin Hyuk thought you would fall for something so common. Finally, he joked that Jin Hyuk must have hit his head to think something like that. Before Jin Hyuk could even question him, Taejin told him to forget about those things and simply celebrate becoming a Class B by eating something later. The Hothed agreed and asked Taejin what he wanted to eat, saying he'd figure out a way to get it. Of course, our protagonist wanted that perfectly cooked Korean steak, but cutting the subject short, the Hothed whispered in the protagonist's ear, asking if he, by any chance, liked Lee Shen-ah. The look of disgust on the protagonist's face was priceless. Along with that face, he started laughing at Jin Hyuk and pointing at him. The blushing Hothed simply told him to shut up and stop making that stupid face. While they were arguing in the back, Jun Hyun informed everyone that the gate had opened and they could now leave, especially since Jun was eager to have a grand meal to celebrate. After they all crossed the greenish portal, they were met by two people who confirmed that everyone had returned safely and congratulated them on progressing to Class B. The two people were Siu Yanhua, a blue-haired woman with a strange aura from the Clear Sky Guild, and Madapayam, a burly red-haired man with a peculiar style from the Whoring Guild. In short, both of them are badass. Siu Yan started talking about already knowing about the alteration in the test, and I'm almost sure she was making a JoJo reference, walking towards them while emanating that greenish aura. She stated that alterations like the Imuji turning into an undead and even the presence of a lich were impossible to occur on such a scale. The eccentric woman began to say that the culprit was certainly someone who was keeping both guilds under control. She then stopped in front of our protagonist, saying that he was the culprit with a rather sadistic smile. And while he was confused, both Siren and Jian were equally perplexed by the situation. They stated that the protagonist had helped them during the fight and fought alongside them, so he couldn't have done it. However, she laid the card on the table that from what she had seen, Taejin did everything alone. They had watched the entire fight against the Lich via the broadcast, and not only did our protagonist guide them to dodge every attack, but he also discovered the secret location on his own. Even though they didn't know what was there, it was certain that it was the Lich's weakness. She insisted that it was very strange and suspicious for a D-rank hunter like our protagonist to know such critical information. As she mentioned these facts, everyone started questioning whether it was actually a possibility. Siu Dian was the most insistent, asking the protagonist once again if he really knew the Lich would appear. She said this almost as both a threat and a statement. However, we see that our protagonist was so scared he couldn't even pass an atom, his face frozen in a strange expression, thinking he had absolutely no idea this was going to happen. But he didn't even have time to say anything as Made approached, asking why the protagonist was hesitating so much and declaring that if he didn't answer quickly, he would crush him right there. The protagonist only grew more fearful, wondering if this lunatic was really thinking about killing him. But he knew he had to stay calm and think of a way to clarify the situation since, whether he liked it or not, he really did look suspicious. While he recapped everything that had happened so far, the lich, the sacrifice, and the contractor, he reached a conclusion and asked everyone to wait a moment and listen to him. He activated his actor mode once again, saying that ever since he was a child, his dream was to become a necromancer, leaving the two guild members speechless. He continued his fantastic performance, saying that since childhood he had studied and learned all the characteristics and abilities of the undead as well as their weaknesses. He pointed his finger directly at the investigators, saying that it was precisely because of this knowledge that he was able to deduce the lich's weakness was hidden somewhere. But the woman simply asked if he really thought she would believe such a poor lie. If she didn't believe him, he said she should see his trump card. He pulled out the finger used in the sacrifice that had been inside a sarcophagus. That finger meant that someone had made a contract with the lich, and that it wasn't a monster deliberately placed in the test. Someone had placed it there through a contract to manipulate the exam. And Taejin dropped a bombshell, a very solid argument. Since the lich could never disobey the orders of its contractor, it meant neither he nor his companions could have been behind the incident. Seo-hyun pointed out that if it really was the protagonist who had manipulated the exam, there would be no reason for him to protect his companions. The red-haired man simply asked who it could be, since it wasn't the protagonist, wondering if it might be someone from the Dark Magic Guild. But Taejin was certain of one thing: the culprit was still inside the area, and shouted loudly for everyone to check the hands of the people present. While everyone searched for the culprit, a man in the middle of the crowd began running desperately, trying to escape. As he passed through the crowd, everyone was sure that he was the culprit and the owner of the finger. The protagonist boasted to Miri that this was exactly how culprits were caught in detective mangas. While Miri stared at him blankly, the red-haired man lunged at the culprit, alongside the woman who trapped the man with a barrier spell. Mata used his technique, Divine Art of the Dominant Dragon, Dragon Strike. In that moment, he looked exactly like Guy Sensei, with the 8th gate activated. But before he could even land the hit, the man was already lifeless on the ground. Furious that the man had taken himself out, Mata ordered people to send the corpse to the respective guild, and to investigate where he had come from and what he was doing. Seo-hyun wondered who would be crazy enough to use dark magic to target both the Whoring and Clear Sky guilds, and promised to find out who had planned all of this. And as if she were bipolar, she looked at our protagonist with the sweetest face, apologizing for the misunderstanding and assuring him she would repay him for the incident. However, our protagonist had already collapsed, fainting from mana exhaustion. He could only hear everyone calling his name as he lost consciousness. The protagonist woke up, wondering where he was, with someone thanking him for finally waking up. It was Lee Sin-ah and Choi Jin-hyuk. After he asked why they were there, Sin-ah said it was because their friend had fainted, and Jin-hyuk joked that he was just checking if he was really dead. The red-haired girl asked how hard the protagonist had to push himself to faint from exhaustion, since the doctor had had a lot of trouble treating him. Moreover, he had made an enormous impact during the Class B ranking test. She made sure to show the protagonist her phone with the news about the exam. Everyone was congratulating him for carrying the entire team on his back. Jin-hyuk even had the courage to say that without him, Taejin wouldn't have been able to do anything. But the red-haired girl told him to stop lying, since everything was in the published video showing the protagonist doing everything by himself. While they argued, the protagonist thought about how long it had been since they had talked so casually and as friends. During their conversation, someone knocked on the door, asking if Taejin was awake, and then entered. It was Seo-hyun Hwa, the representative of the Clear Sky Guild, surprising all three of them. She informed them that the hospital they were in was managed by her. When the protagonist had fainted, they had brought him there since the hospital was under the guild's management, and he could rest easy since she owed him a debt. That debt was specifically because he had saved a precious member of her guild, Yu Se-rin. She started speaking in a somewhat strange way, saying she never thought she'd see Se-rin again, which already made hearts ache at the thought of what could have happened. Then she leaned on the protagonist's bed and asked what he wanted, saying she would do anything he asked. And that was very strange, to say the least. Was she trying to seduce our protagonist? The protagonist says he's not sure what to ask for since he can't think of anything, and while he's speaking, Jin-hyuk, unlike our very Sigma protagonist, turns completely red witnessing this seduction. Yin states that there's plenty of time and he doesn't need to decide so quickly. She'll be waiting in the office on the top floor whenever he has a request. As soon as she left the room, Sienna immediately hugged him, congratulating him on improving so much, while Jin-hyuk couldn't believe it, calling him lucky. The redhead says it feels like just yesterday she was watching our protagonist getting lost in dungeons and struggling against weak creatures, and now he's become so much better. After finishing the hug, she asks if he's already decided, and just like before, he still hadn't thought of anything he really wanted, since he's unsure about what to ask for. Shana explains that they're talking about the vice leader of a guild, so he could ask her for something related to magic without any problem, as that's basic for her. But she warns that at this moment, what matters most to Taejin is rest, so he could think about it later. She offers him a bottle with a drink, telling him to recover quickly while smiling. The protagonist thanked her and said goodbye since Simna and Jinhyuk had things to do and were going to leave him to rest. After they left, Mary comments on how lucky our protagonist really was, saying that just thinking about a beauty like the vice leader offering to fulfill any wish was enough to make her little heart race. Meanwhile, the protagonist has the perfect "you what" face and asks what the hell she's talking about. He stops to really think about what he could ask for, considering money but realizing it would be a terrible choice. Since she's an S-rank hunter, she could easily get something priceless. Before choosing, he needs to consider what he really needs right now. He remembers something and asks Mary where the items he previously bought went. She explains that they were probably automatically stored in the parsley market, but Taejun once again looks confused, not understanding what she's talking about. On the other hand, Mary is very happy to see that the protagonist finally asked about the market. She had been waiting to explain it for a while. It's essentially a platform where users simultaneously sell things to each other, with 100 million users from various dimensions trading among themselves. If Taejun registers right now, he'll receive bonuses such as no exchange fees, secure transactions, and 7% member rewards. The protagonist couldn't stop thinking that this was really an ad, and speaking of ads, have you liked the video yet? The protagonist starts thinking about really being the only person on Earth with access to the market system, and only now does he realize that he's the only one in the entire world with this system, at least updated. Taking advantage of being unique, he can open a store to resell since he's the only one who can buy. That way, he'd be able to monopolize the entire market for himself, wearing a villainous grin. Meanwhile, Mary looks shocked at the protagonist's reaction as she wasn't expecting something like this. The protagonist directly clicked to enter Parsley Market, and after verifying all this information, he was fully registered and his entire body was transported to another location. In a huge medieval city, we see the protagonist looking around at many people holding items, offering them for strange values like 1.8 at. Taejun can't help but think that this looks exactly like a game. But since they're already there, Mary tells him to take a look at the items. He goes directly to the first vendor they see, a man with strange horns, a monocle, and a weird beard. He shows off a red shield he had displayed earlier, an item called the Dragon Cinnamon Shield. It's a Class B item made from dragon scales, giving it great resistance, and it costs 18,000 parsley coins. He finally asks Mary how much a parsley coin is worth, and he is extremely shocked to learn that 18,000 would be approximately 240,000 magic stones, equivalent to a few million won. The worst part is that this is the base price for things in this market, so it only goes up from there. It's clear there's nothing here the protagonist can buy. However, he remembers he had picked up some items earlier that he could sell and wonders how much they would be worth. He pulls an item from his inventory, saying he's a newbie, and asks the horned bald man how much that staff would cost. Apparently, the staff is completely unsellable because it's cursed, and unless someone is a very powerful mage, they wouldn't be able to use it, making it impossible to sell. Since he can't sell the staff, the protagonist extends a strange stone to him, asking how much it's worth. Since it's from the same monster, a protagonist is genuinely surprised by its value, as it's worth nothing more than 10 coins. This is practically trash, and it shatters the hopes of a rich and monopolized future the protagonist was imagining. As the horned bald man waves goodbye, Mary tries to console him, saying that small amounts grow over time and that things don't happen overnight. You should relax. However, a man approaches, saying he wants to take a look at the crystal and asking if Taejun has time for a trade. It's actually a very short demon lord, but our protagonist says that the crystal is just some random junk. The demon insists he accept the deal, saying it's fine. As soon as he takes it in his hands and examines it, he confirms that he was right. If he were to improve that item, it would become very useful. Since he's there, he even covered the cost of the improvement himself. But before our protagonist can feel completely happy and grateful, the demon adds a condition. If the protagonist fails to improve the item, he will have to pay all the costs himself. But if he succeeds, it'll be free. Naturally, our protagonist is confused because the guy had a truly demonic grin while looking at Taejun. Of course, Mary realizes something's wrong and whispers into the protagonist's ear, warning him that the guy is actually a scammer. They basically trick rookies with absurd enchantment and upgrade costs, and it's the most common scam in the market. Only a fool would fall for it. The protagonist asks if he can stop upgrading whenever he wants, and of course, the demon agrees, knowing that the protagonist will fail somehow. And since our protagonist is the fool, he accepts the deal, leaving Mary panicked, trying to pull him away and saying this is going to go badly. But of course, our boy wouldn't enter such an unfair deal without a strategy. He has his own methods and tells her to sit and watch. He's about to show her what it means to break through with sheer luck. With his explosive growth activating again, the success rate has increased. And the strategies here are going to be quite simple. Basically, Taejun can keep upgrading as much as he wants, and the cost of each upgrade will be paid by the demon. But if he fails even once, he would have to bear all the costs himself. The greater the success, the higher the risk he would face. The demon transferred the items and money to our protagonist, asking if he would like to go to the perfect place. But our protagonist just scoffed, saying he didn't need something like that for the first upgrade. He clicked without fear, and the obsidian crystal became an item with a +1 enchantment. The demon congratulated him, saying that Taejun was already 80% closer to success. Slightly bolder than expected, the demon began provoking our protagonist protagonist, asking if he was really going to do just one upgrade and call himself a man. With a crazy smile, Taejin confidently declared that he would easily reach enchantment +9. The demon was left confused, asking if Taejin was really sure, as it was extremely risky. Internally, the demon was calling our protagonist an idiot and a beginner, since the chance of success for the +9 enchantment was less than 0.01% or 1 in 1,000. Of course, he sent all the items to the protagonist with a smile, already knowing he would fail. As soon as he received them, Taejin smiled and started clicking on the upgrade screen like a psychopath without even hesitating. Mary was in shock, screaming at him to stop, and the demon laughed, calling him crazy, saying that all the costs would fall on our protagonist. But our favorite trickster simply mocked him, showing the stone and revealing that it was a success. Just being +9 already guarantees +10 in all stats and an additional 20% mana recovery per hour. Laughing in the same position as before, not out of amusement, but because he was also in shock, the demon questioned how the protagonist had done it, as it was almost impossible. Even while trying to maintain his composure, internally he was panicking because Taejin had succeeded without a single failure, even wondering if our protagonist might be an administrator. But he couldn't let things end that way, as it would mean a huge loss for him. So he congratulated our protagonist, saying it was indeed an impressive feat, but since he had come this far, he might as well go for the final upgrade. After all, it was just one more enchantment to reach the maximum. The little red demon was now biting his nails and making some strange expressions that only Taejin noticed. Of course, our protagonist was a bit nervous about this challenge. Thanks to explosive growth, he had a 100% chance to upgrade up to level +9. The final upgrade, even with the buff, would only have a 10% chance, a far cry from the initial 0.001% or 1 in a million. If he insisted and failed, he would truly lose everything he had. Additionally, our protagonist was satisfied with his current stats, but he couldn't help but be curious about how overpowered a max-level item must be for the odds to be so low. Predictably, he couldn't resist his curiosity and agreed to do it, but he said he had one condition for the demon: to take him to the perfect place. Arriving at the peak Parian upgrade point, they saw many people without clothes, desperately begging for a chance to upgrade an item. Clearly, all of them had become addicted to the little tiger, having lost everything. Our protagonist could only feel the sorrow and sadness for the lost items. When Miri asked if that place really increased the chances, he simply said that nothing had changed, this time with his heart clenched in fear. The protagonist began explaining that luck is a flow. Whether you have a 10% or a 1% chance, at some point success will come. The real challenge was reading the flow of luck, as timing is essential for success, and anyone can overcome the odds even with ridiculous chances. Our protagonist began asking Miri if she couldn't feel the sorrow of so many items. He explained that there he could feel precisely when to proceed or when not to. The applause and regret of so many people served to determine the flow of luck, and at that moment, all the flow was with him. Without hesitation, he clicked to enchant again, and of course the demon thought he was crazy, as attempting a full upgrade was sheer stupidity, with almost zero chance of success. This left everyone tense, including 3 references that appeared in the scene: Robin, Dhalsim from Street Fighter, and a third character that was unrecognizable but seemed like a reference. In what could only be described as pure luck, the protagonist successfully upgraded the item to the maximum level and celebrated by shouting aloud, "Sai you," like Cristiano Ronaldo. The obsidian crystal was now +10 with something called Twilight Glow. Everyone around was stunned, because not only was it the first time seeing a max upgraded item, but it was also made from a material of national power. Of course, now that the little red demon had lost, he was furious, calling our protagonist a scammer. But as the saying goes, a hustler is a hustler, and a fool is a fool. Even as the demon accused Taejin of using some illegal means like a program to cheat the system, the protagonist simply asked who the real scammer was, since the demon had been trying to extort him while pretending to help. Angry, the demon warned that Taejin would never log in again under his watch and began filing complaints. However, the protagonist simply blocked him and left the parsley market, leaving the scammer behind, screaming for his resources to be returned. Back in his hospital bed, Taejin was celebrating having mastered an item for free, calling the demon cute. Of course, Mary scolded him, saying it was far too risky. If he had lost, he wouldn't have been able to pay for all the coins and materials. But our little actor just said that if he had failed, he would have simply run away. Once again, he entered Psychopath Mode 2.0, staring at the obsidian crystal and asking it who the real scammer was, calling the demon naive and dumb. Of course, he was happy because he had received excellent information from the market. While holding the staff, he said he might even be able to use it. Cutting to the top floor of the Clear Sky Guild Hospital, where Siu Yeonho's office was located, our protagonist entered, greeting the guild's vice leader. Out of politeness, she asked if he was feeling better. He replied that he was, and although he wasn't fully recovered, he could at least move around. She mentioned that if he had come there, it was because he had decided what he wanted. Meanwhile, she thought about how undeniably Taejin had placed first in the test, and if her intuition was correct, he would grow to become one of the best hunters in Korea. In the middle of her thoughts, our crazy protagonist simply approached, took her hand, and declared that he wanted her. In the next scene, we see Yeon explaining that he actually wanted her ability, asking if our protagonist always spoke in such a strange way. Like the fool he is, he asked if he had said something wrong, and she just shook her head, saying it was a misunderstanding on her part. The vice leader was clearly stressed by the situation, and our clueless protagonist was wondering if he had said something that could be misinterpreted. Even Miri was staring at him in disbelief, both at what she was hearing and seeing. Finally, the vice leader opened the door to a large training center and asked if all he needed was for her to break the curse on his item. That was much simpler than what she had expected him to request. She asked to see the item, and when he handed over the staff, she asked if he had retrieved it when he was still a Class D. After he confirmed, truthfully, whether he wanted to or not, she went on with her magic, her hands glowing green. She said that with her ability, which specializes in breaking curses, it wouldn't take too long. The ability was incredibly cool, forming something like a key above the item, descending like an unlocking door. Both the protagonist and Miri were impressed by the ability of an S-class. She finished activating Dispel Spell, an ability that analyzes and dissipates a type of magic. A curse is nothing more than a complex spell, but no matter how intricate the curse, it cannot overpower Dispel Spell. However, behind her, our protagonist appeared with a psychotic look on his face, holding a small obsidian crystal and extending it towards her back. It was revealed that, aside from its other characteristics, the crystal possessed a mimic ability, which scans and stores the target's ability. This was exactly what the protagonist had wanted from the beginning. He would have been satisfied with just breaking the curse on the item, but obtaining such a rare ability was an incredible chance. However, before he could act, a rift suddenly opened above the ability and struck Yeon by surprise, hitting her directly in the stomach. The creature absorbed her energy for some reason. In a panic, the protagonist lunged forward, screaming the vice leader's name, and delivered a flying kick to the creature's face. However, all physical attacks were completely ineffective. Since physical attacks weren't working, our protagonist launched a blue fireball at 20% of his strength directly at the creature's chest, sending it flying across the room. Logically, he rushed to aid Yeon, but she assured him she wasn't mortally wounded. She had just let her guard down, not expecting something like that to appear. The protagonist asked where it came from and what it was, wondering if it was some kind of monster. But she denied it, saying it wasn't a monster, even though it looked like one. It was the curse itself taking physical form, a cursed spirit. The protagonist was shocked to realize that the curse on the staff had taken physical form. Yeon explained that the curse was more deeply rooted in the item than she had expected, and the only way to remove it without damaging the staff was through her Dispel Spell ability. The problem was that the creature had hit her with an ability, preventing her from using the Dispel at that moment. Since she couldn't use her own ability, she prepared to channel her magic by conjuring a sort of staff and multiple magic circles, as if preparing to launch a mana-firing squad at the creature. However, this would destroy the protagonist's staff, which he obviously wasn't happy about. In desperation, he asked if she had an ability called Power Infusion, begging her to lend him Dispel Spell. Even though his idea wasn't bad, she warned him that the cursed spirit wasn't something he could defeat just by borrowing her power, as it was a high-level curse with a complex spell structure. Even she would need time to eliminate it. He agreed with her reasoning, but asked if she could trust him just this once. Overcome by his charisma, she disabled her active ability and told him to listen carefully, as without her guidance, it would be very difficult. She placed her hand on his back and he began to absorb her energy. She warned him that it wouldn't last long, so he needed to be quick. With the Power Infusion buff, he was allowed to use Dispel Spell. He thought that if she couldn't do it, he had to succeed. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the crystal on the floor and began copying the ability while using Dispel Spell as a shield, preventing the creature from approaching. The crystal finished mimicking Yeonho's S-class ability, and we saw that it had 2 slots for storing abilities, meaning there was still 1 more slot available. Apparently, our protagonist was lucky, as he had the Calculator ability. It fused with Dispel Spell thanks to explosive growth. Instead of manually calculating everything like Yeon, the ability calculated everything for him automatically. It was basically like hacking. Having finished copying, the vice leader began to instruct him on what to do to use the ability properly, but he simply said he didn't need her help. He had already figured it out. She was confused since this wasn't something one could learn through instinct, yet he told her to trust him. The green energy turned blue, the color of his own energy. Forming an energy gauntlet, he delivered a massive punch, yelling at the creature that he needed the staff, so it should leave it. With a single punch, he practically turned the creature into Toji from Jujutsu Kaisen. It began trying to flee, missing half its body. Yeon was understandably shocked that he could master an ability she herself struggled to use, wondering just how talented our protagonist was. While she was still in shock, he kept attacking the curse, tearing away the remaining part of its body until only its head was left. But it no longer had the strength to maintain its form and was completely nullified by Dispel Spell. The curse on the Erratus staff was finally broken. Naturally, he praised Yeon, saying she was incredible and that he could see the difference in their skill levels just by how she handled such a difficult ability. She in turn was thinking that he was far more incredible than she had expected. If he joined Clear Sky, he might even be considered a burden to them. Like a true professional, she asked if he would be interested in joining the Hwoarang Guild, since its leader, Mata Payong, had something for him that could be extremely useful. Cutting directly to the Hwoarang Guild headquarters on Guanak Mountain, Mata was already asking if our protagonist really just wanted to see the Ascending Dragon Fist. The guild leader was proud, saying he had made the right choice, as it was the ultimate martial art. As he spoke, he demonstrated with a ghost step and delivered a devastating blow, tearing apart a massive centipede. Our protagonist could only smile, holding the crystal. He had perfectly analyzed Mata's ability. At the Myth Guild headquarters, inside the training room, the protagonist uses the Ascending Dragon Strike on a three-headed dog that ended up with two heads and fell down stinking. Taejin states that first-tier items are truly different and thanks the leader of the Hwoarang Guild for giving him the martial art for free. However, the system warns that due to the protagonist's low-strength statistic, the power of all Ascending Dragon Fist abilities would only reach 50% of their maximum. Naturally, the protagonist gets angry, complaining that there's really no such thing as a free lunch. If he had known it would be like this, he would have followed the advice of the old muscular man and trained regularly. And he's right, go train. Folks, I want all of you in Balneario Camboriú in 2025. Speaking of Balneario, have you left your like, my friend? I hope so. Compared to Taejin's 7 years of suffering, enduring a little more in a way that he actually evolves won't be much. Since he needs to do it, he decides to maximize his strength. He simply summoned a bunch of creatures and charged forward in hand-to-hand combat. We skip to when Sirana appears with some food for our protagonist, asking him to eat, but she remains admiring the view of our shirtless protagonist, steam rising from his body. While wondering how he ended up like this, she noticed he's been acting strangely for a while. Not long ago, he was considered a mediocre hunter, but nowadays he's seen as one of the most promising hunters, having even passed the Class B test with flying colors. Additionally, he's now a person of interest for both Xiu Yen, leader of the Clear Sky Guild, and the leader of the Hwoarang Guild. This growth is anything but natural. He resembles a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. Although she's happy he's being recognized, it's clear to her that he's becoming more distant. While she's distracted watching the protagonist train, Soo-hyun appears behind her, commenting that she looks worried. She's startled by his sudden appearance, and he mentions he heard she was practicing the vision sword technique in the training room. She gets very nervous because he doesn't know she borrowed the training room without permission for the protagonist. If he finds out, she'll be in big trouble. But he simply taps her head lightly, saying he believes she would never lend their training room to someone without authorization. He mentions sensing an unusual aura, but realizes it was just Taejin. Noticing the martial art the protagonist is using, he approaches, saying he heard our goat pass the rank B classification test. He wasn't wrong about the protagonist in the end and isn't disappointed. The protagonist thanks him for the help, and Soo-hyun asks if he's still working as a freelancer hunter. Since our protagonist hasn't joined a guild or group, he's still freelancing, so it's not a problem for Soo-hyun to make an offer right then. With the protagonist showing interest, he begins to explain that they had scheduled an expedition in a few days with Siona as the team leader. However, one of the team members had to drop out due to a fatal injury, but the redhead interrupts the leader to say she thinks the expedition might be too big of a challenge for Taejin, as it's a grade 2 expedition, and it's the first time they'll be investigating it. They have almost no information about it, and it would be very dangerous. She's clearly worried about him, all cute and blushing. Even Mary seems happy seeing this scene, but all her hope is shattered by the protagonist's thoughts. He believes she's underestimating him. Soo-hyun, however, reassures them, saying they shouldn't worry because with his level of skill, he could definitely participate in the dungeon sweep. He also reminds her that it's an invitation, not an obligation. Finally, he asks the protagonist again what he thinks, since training with real creatures is far more beneficial than in a training room. The protagonist recalls that given his abilities, the advancements he would gain in real battle would be 10 times greater. Naturally, he agrees, but he asks if, as a freelancer, he'd be allowed to take all the magic stones from the monsters he takes down. We don't see the response, and we cut directly to another day. The protagonist receives a message on his phone telling him to arrive precisely at 11:30. He can only think about how irritating that is. While he's thinking, Mary asks if he's sure he wants to enter a dungeon when the person behind manipulating the exam hasn't even been revealed yet. But he says she shouldn't worry because this time he'll be accompanied by Myth Guild members. She asks if he can really trust the Myth Guild. He responds confidently, saying that both the leader of the Hwoarang Guild and the Myth Guild have been friends for at least 20 years, so there's zero chance the guild is involved in anything shady. Even if they tried to stab him in the back, it wouldn't matter. Even if they ambushed him, it wouldn't be able to defeat him. He says this with such confidence that I'm sure something will go wrong. Mary just tells him not to be so overconfident and to keep his guard up. He keeps walking, and we cut directly to the portal entrance. Siona approaches and asks him to introduce himself to the rest of the team. We meet 3 members, the group's lancer, Choi Yushik, the healer Yoon Ayeon, and No Youngchul, the youngest member who apparently is a gunslinger. All of them are logically from Group 3. They introduce themselves, and finally a protagonist asks if everyone is there so they can enter. But Xiaona says one person hasn't arrived yet. She informs them that one of her members got injured during training the night before and couldn't come, so they called in a reserve hunter. Before the protagonist can ask who the hunter is, a car starts honking and someone yells, telling him to move out of the way. From inside the car, a large tattooed man with several pieces of jewelry and an expensive bag steps out, asking if the protagonist didn't hear him and questioning if he's deaf. This rude and arrogant-looking man is their companion. To be polite, the protagonist approaches, introduces himself, and asks the strange man's name. However, the man just stares at him strangely, spits on the ground near him, and walks away. After spitting, he just keeps walking, saying that if everyone is there, they should hurry up and stop wasting time. The protagonist is clearly furious, veins bulging, almost jumping on the guy's neck and throwing 3 punches at him. But Xiaona steps in to calm him down, saying that despite his rude appearance and behavior, he's still a well-known figure in the industry. She explains that he's actually Class A freelancer hunter Kim Ji-hoon, called trash both for his character and personality, but his skills are unmatched even among Class A hunters. The biggest problem with him is that he abuses his position as a freelancer to monopolize all the magic stones, leaving the entire team without any rewards, not even enough to cover medical expenses. She clearly didn't want to work with him on this expedition, but she had no choice. In Taejun's mind, he's just wondering how he hadn't encountered this type of hunter before. But since Kim Ji-hoon is a Class A hunter with no affiliation, the protagonist makes a point to treat this piece of trash the same way he treats everyone else. Inside the portal, we see a crimson sky with Sienna shouting for everyone to remain calm and maintain formation as numerous creatures charge toward them. While the monsters began to rage like RPG barbarians, Kim rushed ahead, yelling that he couldn't waste time on low-level creatures, literally smashing them with his expensive bag. While he pushed ahead of Sienna, she complained about him acting solo since they arrived, hogging all the action. She reminded him that they were a team and needed to cooperate. Otherwise, his reckless behavior would endanger not just himself, but the entire group. However, Kim dismissed her concerns, calling her a crazy bitch and saying she was acting out of fear. He mocked her leadership, claiming she would never get anywhere with that attitude. Sienna was clearly furious, but Kim continued, blaming their lack of progress on her and pointing his finger in her face. He declared that the strongest hunters earn the most money and fame and ended by calling her a joke, questioning how someone like her ended up leading a team. In the background, our protagonist watched with the angriest expression he had made so far. Even Miri looked visibly annoyed by the disrespectful pig. We cut to a castle where they are greeted by Duke Duas, an NPC and lord of this cursed land. As Siona tried to thank him, Kim rudely interrupted, calling the Duke an old man and demanding he get straight to the point. The Duke explained that this was a land where a great evil had once been sealed long ago. It was completely cursed and unfit for human life. However, an artifact had been used to purify and banish the dark energy. Our protagonist interrupted, stating that it seemed the artifact had been stolen. The Duke confirmed this, explaining that if they could recover it, the land could be restored and life might someday return. The Duke revealed that the invaders had broken the artifact into pieces and carried them in various directions. The team began commenting on how the mission seemed easier than expected for a grade 2 dungeon. They hadn't anticipated a search and retrieve mission, and the monsters guarding the artifact were only slightly stronger than usual. Siona deduced that the pieces had likely been scattered to the north, south, east, and west. Before she could elaborate, Kim mocked her again for overthinking something so simple. He suggested they split into teams to search for the pieces. Siona preferred to prioritize safety and keep the group together, but this time, our protagonist agreed with Kim. He even shushed Siona mid-protest and said he wanted to team up with Kim if no one objected. The team split into 3 groups of 2, and Siona instructed them to regroup in the south once they had the artifact pieces to face the final challenge together. Our protagonist put on his best acting face, telling Kim he was honored to work with him. He even called him Sir and said he was inspired by Kim's speech to Siona. He agreed that stronger hunters deserved more money and fame, claiming he wanted to follow Kim's example. Kim, pleased with the flattery, asked for the protagonist's name and said he would help him as long as he stayed close. They eventually arrived at a graveyard, and the protagonist asked why Kim chose this spot. Kim nonchalantly said it was because there seemed to be a high concentration of monsters there. If any monster appeared, they could deal with it. Still in acting mode, the protagonist asked if he could stick to a smaller area since he was afraid of holding Kim back. Kim allowed it and moved to the other side. However, as time passed and no monsters appeared, Kim grew frustrated and shouted for them to stop hiding. Meanwhile, Taejun, the protagonist, was already farming monsters in his area, collecting high-quality magic stones. Kim grew even more irritated when he realized the monsters were only appearing near Taejun. He briefly wondered if the protagonist had planned this but dismissed the thought, believing him to be too inexperienced for such foresight. Frustrated, Kim resorted to using his area-wide taunt ability, yelling for the monsters to stop hiding and come out. Taejun smiled, his expression turning turning downright psychotic as he saw Kim use the taunt ability. We see a flashback where Seona had explained Kim's ability outside the gate. She mentioned that while Kim wasn't particularly special as a melee hunter, his area-wide taunt was quite unique. Taejin had shown interest in this ability, but when questioned, he simply said he was curious. Back in the present, Taejin grinned as the map showed an overwhelming number of monsters being drawn in by Kim's taunt. This was exactly what he wanted, a massive farming opportunity. Kid and Mouse, surrounded by hordes of monsters, panicked and yelled for Taejin to stop watching and come help. Taejin coolly refused, saying he couldn't leave his designated area. Kim, overwhelmed, shouted again, demanding help. Taejin seized the moment. Enveloped in a blue aura, he used Phantom Step followed by the Ascending Dragon Strike. In one devastating move, he obliterated every zombie in the vicinity. Kim was stunned, questioning whether Taejin was truly a B-ranked hunter. After the dust settled, Taejin casually thanked Kim for his taunt ability, remarking that no one could have guessed the sheer number of monsters hiding in the area. He then revealed a mountain of high-quality magic stones he had collected just to rub salt in the wound. Kim, visibly shaken, suggested they leave now that they had secured the artifact. However, Taejin refused, saying they should help the others by gathering more magic stones. With a sly smile, Taejin politely asked Kim to use his taunt ability again. On the other side of the area, Seona's group gathered with the other duo, and the four of them stayed together. Both groups managed to collect some crystals, and thanks to Taejin, they were able to find all the artifacts. Because of everything he did, he managed to complete the mission Impressive Growth, which was exclusively his. The mission required him to master the abilities he had copied from Made, and he fully mastered the Ascending Dragon Fist, allowing him to use it at 100% power. The sharpshooter, in particular, was impressed by the number of crystals our protagonist gathered, as they couldn't even fit into a single inventory. To maintain his good guy image, he offered for them to take some, leaving Kim very surprised, but Miri even more so. Everyone declined, as it would be taking advantage of the protagonist's kindness since he had earned everything himself. However, he insisted, saying that everyone had worked hard and he already had plenty of stones. Kim had shared some with him earlier, so he was merely following his example. To confirm his point, he lightly threatened Kim by asking if he was right, and of course, Kim agreed. They all thanked both the protagonist and the big guy, and in the end, they started collecting the magical stones. Seona, however, was lost in thought about the situation, as she didn't know exactly what the protagonist had done, but he had clearly succeeded. While all this was happening, Mary began asking if the protagonist was okay with distributing magical stones, but he simply said it was all about image. The guy was simply the reincarnation of Lloyd, and nothing could convince me otherwise. Back at the Duke's castle, we see him greeting the hunters and thanking them for gathering the artifacts, as now, thanks to them, the cursed land could bloom with life. Seona asked where they should offer the artifacts, and the Duke said they could give them to him since, as the lord of the land, he would make the offering himself. But this made the redhead thoughtful, and she asked an interesting question. When he first gave them the mission, he said he hadn't been able to protect the artifacts from the barbarians, and as a result, the sealed evil was released and killed everyone there. He confirmed this, but she continued with the truly important question: how did he survive? This made the atmosphere extremely tense, and the lord began laughing, saying she was indeed clever, and that most people would never notice this. However, it was already too late, as he had been regaining his power ever since they brought the artifacts into the castle. As he spoke, he removed the cloak he was wearing, revealing his true appearance. He also revealed himself as the secret boss, a high-ranking vampire Duke Duas, also known as the Great Evil, with an F+ danger level. Seona explained how she had realized this. It was because in such a large dungeon, there was no final boss, which was very strange. Additionally, the artifacts didn't seem like they were meant to clear the dungeon. So it was a case of a duplicated mission, and if the artifacts were gathered by the Lord, another mission would begin. The protagonist could only think about how fascinating this was, as he had discovered what a duplicated mission meant. It was interesting to know that from the very beginning, that old man had been the final boss. The vampire extended his hand and ordered them to walk forward and offer the artifacts to witness his glorious resurrection. For some reason, the redhead began walking towards him carrying the artifacts. This left Taejin confused, asking what she was doing. If they hand over the artifacts, the old man would become even stronger. However, before he could finish his sentence, he was attacked from all sides by his own teammates. He managed to dodge all their attacks, logically realizing they were all under the effects of the Evil Eye's charm buff. Our protagonist was unaffected because of the obsidian he carried, which nullified the ability. This surprised the Duke, who asked if the protagonist was really resistant to his power. In response, Taejin simply flipped him off, saying he wasn't attracted to ancient vampires and that the Duke should try hitting on charming grandmas at a senior center. The vampire was of course enraged, but he said it didn't matter since he had managed to gather all the artifacts. That day, he would regain his immortal power and ordered everyone to tear Taejin to pieces. Taejin found the whole situation troublesome, with the vampire saying it didn't matter how strong he was, he would still have to fight his companions, and it would end in a tragic death at their hands. However, contrary to what the vampire expected, Taejin simply channeled energy into his middle finger and began flicking his teammates on the forehead, instantly knocking them out. Specifically with Kim, after flicking him, he followed up with a punch so powerful that there was a delay before Kim hit the ground. Walking towards the Duke, the protagonist asked asked if he wasn't being underestimated, saying that it was easier than eating pie and that he hadn't even suffered a scratch because physical abilities combined with magic were extremely useful. This situation left the vampire furious, and he trembled while ordering Seona to protect him until he recovered all his power. She obeyed, attacking the protagonist without hesitation. She was incredibly fast, managing to cut Taejin before he could even dodge. She was the only one he could knock out with a simple flick. Of course, if he used the ascending dragon fist, he would win immediately, but the damage caused to her would be fatal. As he thought about all of this, he kept barely dodging her attacks. The vampire in the background began to speak, saying that he finally understood. It was clear that the two of them were in love with each other. That explained why Taejin wasn't attacking her, and it would be a tragedy if one of them were to die at the hands of their beloved. Taejin's expression was literally, "Are you out of your mind, brother?" But as he stared at the vampire, asking what the hell he was talking about, Mary warned him to look at Seona, who had stopped moving, completely frozen. The protagonist realized that for some reason, the vampire's charm ability had weakened for a moment. Even the Duke looked confused, ordering her to move and kill Taejin. At this point, the vampire was absolutely convinced that they were in love. The protagonist also noticed that she had apparently reacted to what he had been saying. Strong emotions might break someone free from enchantment temporarily. Even without full certainty, it was worth a try. Suddenly, he began speaking, saying he wasn't sure how this would sound, but he had something he wanted to tell her for a long time. He asked if she remembered last Christmas when she gave him a wallet, saying that a man with a good wallet would attract a lot of money. The atmosphere grew strangely tender, but of course, our madman broke the mood by saying he had sold the wallet at the market. He wasn't supposed to sell it, but he was financially desperate and had no choice. Mary was visibly disappointed, staring at him, but Taejin was sure that her anger would keep her frozen for a while. He began shouting at the vampire, asking how he dared to touch his friends, and Taejin made it clear he would never let the vampire use that ability again. To achieve this, he cast the Taejin-style nullification strike and simply jabbed both his fingers into the vampire's eyes with dispel magic. The little vampire was desperate, commanding the protagonist to remove his fingers from his eye right at that moment, but our madman simply said that he wouldn't do it and would continue as he was until death. The structure of the vampire's ability began to be calculated as he screamed, and once it reached 100%, the ability was completely nullified. Thanks to this, the Duke managed to free himself, but the damage to his eyes remained, and of course he was confused about what the Prota had done to his eyes. But you realized that this was done to break his powers once the people who were unconscious began to wake up. But this didn't make sense to him, as no one had ever been able to do this. It could only happen if at some point his mana had run out. Furious and confused, he asked again how our Prota had done it. But our madman is clever and simply asked why he should care, since he was going to die anyway, so he didn't need to know. Then he started mocking even more, saying that if he was really curious, he could just look it up in a wiki. But he couldn't do that while dead. Clearly, the Duke was getting angrier, thinking about how our Prota dared to joke around to the limit, but he wanted to see how long he would keep that smile on his face, stating that the one who would die wouldn't be him but the protagonist. He shouted that he wanted to put a death on Taejin's smile as he began to run towards him with a sword made of blood. But before he could get close, the redhead appeared, delivering a strike that severed the hand holding the sword, and she quickly took the opportunity to say that the protagonist had done well and could leave the rest of them. She shouted to everyone else that this was their chance since he couldn't use any more mental abilities and they should all unite their strength to defeat the vampire together. Everyone began charging their abilities while Sina stood facing him, preventing him from doing anything, making the vampire even more furious, screaming and asking if they really thought they could defeat him. During all this, our protagonist was simply watching, quietly saying that he would be defeated by the creatures he called pathetic. And just beside the protagonist, No Youngshul appeared, firing 2 shots, saying that he had been waiting for the right moment and wouldn't be a burden to the group. Both shots hit the vampire, injuring him clearly. Meanwhile, up front with Seona, Chui Yushik was battling the vampire, preventing him from using abilities, and healer Yuna Yang was healing the injuries of the companions that appeared during the battle. While the other 3 held off the vampire, our favorite redhead was charging energy into her sword, and she began to say the following words: "Power of the storm that cuts the winds, echo of the thunder that divides the sky, become one with my sword." She then used her strongest ability, the devastating cut, which struck the vampire directly, and in the next scene he was split in half horizontally, with only his legs standing. The gunslinger asked if it was over already, tired, but our protagonist appeared, telling him not to dare say it was over, simply launching his ultimate attack, the Kamehameha, at 100% power, a blue fireball that completely consumed the vampire's body and the region he was in, along with the artifacts. After finishing the ability, he said that he was Lee Taejin and would never lower his guard, even at the end. And while the Lord's charred body lay on the ground, Sena said it had been close, as she knew something was wrong with the Lord, but she hadn't expected him to be able to use mental control. The gunslinger said that when he regained his senses, the protagonist was pulling the vampire's eyes out, congratulating him for reading the Duke's ability. abilities. But the protagonist asked if they didn't remember exactly what had happened, and even though the redhead asked why he wanted to know, he simply said it was for no particular reason, though we know he didn't want her to remember what he had said to her. And since the gate to leave had already opened, they could go back and have a barbecue together to celebrate as they deserved it. The redhead was the only one who remembered Kim looking for him, but he was still lying on the ground like trash. And of course, she asked if the protagonist had anything to explain, but he said it didn't matter. Unfortunately, it wasn't a serious injury, so he would be fine. Therefore, they were going to leave immediately, and the healer asked if the protagonist would like to join them for the barbecue. However, he said that he had some things to do, and Siona directly asked if there was any other plan beyond them. But it wasn't anything major, he just wanted to explore the dungeon, as it was very different from the others, and he wasn't sure when he would be able to enter one like this again, so he wanted to analyze it closely. It was like a form of training. Everyone admired this thought from our prota, and especially the redhead said that he was always full of energy, and she truly admired his dedication, both in the past and now. But she approached him and placed her hand on his face, asking him not to overdo it. She then stepped back, saying that he could call them when he was done, as they would be out until late, and finally they stepped out of the portal. Mary, who was no fool, immediately started asking what our prota was really going to do, since he definitely wasn't going to study the dungeon like he had said. The protagonist said that she really knew him well, but stated that in the past he indeed had moments like that where he dedicated himself a lot, either to try to be a bit better or just to survive. But at that moment she was right, he just wanted to see one thing on the parsley navigation, and he pointed to a question mark symbol in the middle of the castle. With another exaggerated expression, he approached her, saying they should go explore. Following the map, they eventually reached the library area, and Mary commented that nothing seemed strange in that place, but she was sure there was something there. Following Parsley, our protagonist began using what he had learned from books and movies, which is the famous secret shelf hidden by the mechanism of a book. After a few attempts, he actually managed to open a secret passage. He was already excited about the treasure he would find inside, so he walked ahead without thinking, and this carelessness triggered a trap mechanism, nearly piercing him. Mary even tried to warn him, but he was too fast, and to finish, she said there were many traps in that area according to the map, and even though he could identify them, it was as if they were completely hidden within the dungeon. So the exact locations were not visible, and our prota simply said that he never expected he would need to use something like this, but the moment was perfect, and he pulled out the lick staff from his inventory. He waved it, emitting a purple aura, and said to listen to his call and appear, Eratus. While he calls for Eratus, Mary is visibly surprised as the big naked skeleton rises from the ground. He emerges honorably, introducing himself as the Herald of Death and addressing our protagonist as the Great Summoner, saying he'd come directly from the ends of the world. However, he's wearing a skirt that resembles Broly's from Dragon Ball, and it's clear he wouldn't show much respect for our protagonist, who had been a jerk to him. Eratus shouts, realizing that it was indeed our protagonist who summoned him. Our cheeky protagonist casually welcomes him, saying it's good to see him again, and asks how the skeleton has been. Eratus tries to ignore the question, and instead demands an explanation, asking how this is possible, and if the protagonist had really used his staff to summon him. To tease him further, the protagonist confirms it with a smug grin and even asks if Eratus liked it, saying his staff was very handy. For Eratus, this was clearly a lie, as his staff was filled with so many malicious souls that it would be impossible to use. These souls would crawl out and take over anyone trying to wield it, but Taejin just mocks him, saying he had already killed the spirit within it. Eratus still doesn't believe him, saying it's impossible. Taejin simply shrugs and complains that the spirit was a hassle but ultimately insignificant. Then he shifts focus, questioning how Eratus dared to speak to his master in such a tone. He bonks Eratus on the head with the staff, warning that it doesn't matter how he was summoned. If he dared to talk like that again, he'd end up as bone soup. Poor Eratus has no choice but to comply, saying he won't repeat the mistake. Taejin recalls that Eratus has always spoken that way but ignores it for now. Taejin orders Eratus to obey and gives him his first command, to follow the clearly safe path ahead. Of course, Eratus, knowing it's a trap, questions whether he really has to go forward unarmed and unable to see. But with a thinly veiled threat about disappointing his commander, the skeleton trembles and rushes forward as fast as he can. Unfortunately, he triggers a trap and barely makes it 6 steps before being smashed into pieces by a massive stone wall. Unsurprisingly, he's obliterated, and the system window pops up, notifying Taejin that Eratus has been despawned. Mary, horrified, looks on, but Taejin nonchalantly checks the map, pleased that one of the traps has been identified. Only the rest remain. After marking the trap on the map, he casually raises the staff and summons Eratus again, as his work isn't done. Eratus responds, awkwardly piecing himself back together, still confused about what just happened. Once again, Taejin commands him to advance without stopping. This time, Eratus triggers another trap after a few steps and is incinerated. The system pops up again to announce that Eridus has turned to ashes and been despawned. Taejin celebrates, marking another trap on the map. Mary asks if he really plans to keep doing this until every trap is cleared. Taejin, unconcerned, confirms it, asking if there's a problem with his method. He then reaffirms his philosophy, saying his name is Lee Taejin, and he shows no mercy to those who try to kill him. Mary wisely stays quiet in her corner, not wanting to be next. Taejin summons Eridus yet again, scolding him to stop slacking off and move forward because there are still plenty of traps to uncover. Time passes, and the sound of Eridus screaming echoes throughout the area. Half of his body is left lying on the ground while Taejin stands in front, praising his excellent work. Taejin tells Eridus that he's the best trap detector he could have asked for. Still alive, Eridus groans, asking why he hasn't been despawned yet. The system provides an explanation. After dying so many times and enduring repetitive blows, Eridus' durability has increased significantly, allowing him to persist. Taejin muses to himself that Eridus isn't dying as easily to the traps anymore. He considers that summoned creatures typically don't evolve just from dying a few times. This must be an effect of the explosive growth mechanism. Taejin remarks aloud how impressive Eridus has become, making the skeleton genuinely happy to receive praise. But Taejin leaves him behind, thinking he'll need to examine the explosive growth mechanism more closely after they leave this place. Eridus is irritated, feeling disrespected as Taejin walks off after giving him nothing more than a simple good job. To Eridus, this is outrageous. Even immortals have rights, and Taejin should acknowledge them. But Taejin dismisses it, withdrawing the summoning and putting the staff back in his inventory, saying they should refocus on treasure hunting. Miri, watching this unfold, quietly realizes how truly heartless Taejin is. She points out that there don't seem to be any more traps or paths, so this is likely Dungeon's end. As Miri asks if Taejin suspects anything here, he replies that the massive tombstone he's been staring at looks suspicious. Usually, tombstones aren't that enormous, and he's right, it's ridiculously large. Taejin adds that there's no reason to build something that big unless something is hidden inside. The moment he touches it, pink squares with strange symbols begin appearing across its surface. The massive tombstone splits in half, revealing a gigantic, helmetless suit of armor holding a small box. Inside the box lies a bracelet. Taejin recognizes the bracelet's design as being made from the relics they encountered on their earlier mission. However, this particular bracelet doesn't seem to be tied to any mission. The best he can do is evaluate its worth. It's likely very valuable. He starts praying to any deity listening, hoping the item is of a high class. While he's praying, Miri asks why he hasn't just used the system's item analyzer. Taejin freezes, dumbfounded, and asks her to explain what she just said. Miri explains that the item analyzer is a simple system feature that allows users to quickly and efficiently analyze items. It's such an essential tool that everyone from other dimensions considers it indispensable. She asks if he likes it, but Taejin, annoyed, yells at her for not telling him about it earlier. Miri snaps, shouting that she's already installed several system functions for him, and it's not her fault he didn't pay attention when she explained them. Taejin sheepishly admits he wasn't listening earlier and decides to give the analyzer a try. When used, the analyzer reveals the item, the Relic of Malice. It's now bound to Taejin and grants him 2 abilities along with +1 to all stats. The abilities are Vampire Aesthetics and Vampire Charm. This is incredible since it's a unique ranked item with 2 powerful abilities. Vampire Aesthetics, ranked A, prevents any wounds from staying on Taejin's body for long. It's an advanced healing ability but has limitations, can't heal severe cuts or fractures. As a passive skill, it doesn't consume mana. Vampire Charm, also ranked A, allows Taejin to enchant a target by consuming 50 mana. However, it won't work on individuals with mental defense above rank B or those who aren't weakened. While Taejin celebrates his new passive healing ability, Miri marvels at the usefulness of enchanting humans, knowing how valuable it could be. Taejin, with his usual psychopathic grin, asks why it wouldn't be useful. Humans are everywhere and can be incredibly handy. Miri grows uneasy as Taejin casually considers using the ability on people, but Taejin simply tells her she doesn't understand humans. In his view, humans can be more terrifying than any dungeon creature. Meanwhile, someone is watching them from a distance, communicating via radio. They confirm that the target has been located. The other person on the radio notes that the target recently reached rank B and shouldn't pose much of a challenge for the observer's stealth abilities. This individual possesses the rank S skill Silent Shadow. Our protagonist, however, senses something is off. The assassin, using their skill, stands directly in front of him. The assassin notes how Taejin was previously just a rank D doorman, a fractured individual, and now is a promising talent climbing to rank B. As the assassin prepares to stab Taejin unnoticed, he receives a brutal kick to the face. Taejin, confused, wonders if the navigation system could be malfunctioning. The kick reveals the assassin, confirming that he was there all along, though Taejin still couldn't see him through navigation alone. The assassin panics, realizing Taejin isn't just some low-ranked fluke. Taejin, on the other hand, wonders aloud if the man truly has invisibility and orders him to stop hiding and show himself for a conversation. To encourage compliance, Taejin threatens to keep beating him until he dies if he doesn't reveal himself. As our protagonist had said himself, if he didn't show up, he was going to get beaten, and that's exactly what happened. A kick landed on his back so hard he felt like a soccer ball afterward. Following the kick, there was a barrage of punches, reminiscent of JoJo, with him unleashing an ore on the poor guy. After taking such a beating, the guy started begging for forgiveness, apologizing profusely to the protagonist and asking for mercy, just this once. However, our sarcastic protagonist casually remarked that he hadn't even started yet, adding that kids these days lacked courage. Now that the guy had shown himself, the protagonist started asking where he was from and what his name was. The poor fellow, all beaten up with 2 bumps on his head resembling Mickey Mouse ears from the hits, introduced himself as Han Jong-chul of the Red Dogs Guild. Our protagonist recognized the name as familiar and remembered that the Red Dogs were a group of criminal scumbags who extorted money to kill hunters. Holding the pitiful man, well, not really pitiful since he's a scumbag, by the collar, the protagonist asked what had brought someone so notorious to a place like this. Terrified, the man pleaded for his life, saying he was only following orders, but the protagonist coldly replied that following orders still made him responsible. Mocking him, the protagonist nicknamed the group Hot Dogs and said he had a few questions for the man while gathering energy in his hand preparing to use the vampire's charm. He warned the man to answer carefully while staring at him with a psychopathic glare. While the man screamed inside the room, the scene shifted outside where the rest of his group was gathered in the cemetery. The apparent leader of the team was wondering why the invisible man hadn't returned yet, as it shouldn't have taken this long to deal with a simple rank B. This leader was called Han Jong-pil. The leader muttered that next time he would handle it personally, but the weird guy in the L pose, who was listening to a playlist, said not to be too hard on the newbie since he lacked field experience and that taking time was somewhat normal. After all, no one's perfect on their first mission. This strange guy was named Ham Jang Seo, whom I'll affectionately nickname Paraguayan L. As Paraguayan L insisted that the rookie would improve one day, our protagonist appeared out of nowhere, carrying the invisible man's body. He began addressing the 3 brothers by name, mocking them for being awakened hunters who joined forces to do dirty work. He didn't hesitate to hit a nerve, saying that if their late parents knew about this, they'd cry tears of blood over how pathetic they become. A scar-faced Jong-pil grabbed a bat and demanded to know how the protagonist knew such personal details. Had he interrogated the youngest brother? The protagonist calmly confirmed that he'd come personally to extract information from the 2 older brothers since the youngest one had been less than cooperative. Paraguayan L tried to snap back and insult the protagonist, but the scar-faced Jong-pil silenced him, stating that the invisible man was still a trained professional with years of experience who wouldn't give up information easily. He concluded that the protagonist must have used some kind of mind-contaminating magic. Taejin sarcastically applauded the brothers' unwavering trust in each other, saying it was touching and offered them a praise sticker before flipping them off. Unsurprisingly, the brothers got furious and accused him of being insane. The leader admitted he had underestimated the little psychopath and should have dealt with him from the start. He warned the protagonist not to think he'd walk away alive. Taejin, unimpressed, taunted him to try. The man then unveiled his supposedly impressive skill, a special assassination technique honed over years of training, the Shadow Strike. Unfortunately for him, the audience never saw the move in action because Taejin knocked him out cold with one punch. Taejin complained that he didn't have time for such long-winded speeches and moved on to Paraguayan L, who was now trembling. Taejin, low on mana, told him he'd better spill everything unless he wanted to end up like his brothers. The scene then shifted to the Hunter Alliance headquarters, where it was explained that the Red Dogs villains had been taken into custody. The Alliance's HQ had uncovered their plot. They had disguised themselves as dungeon regulars to ambush Taejin. When he didn't leave the dungeon as expected, they entered to carry out the assassination themselves. The Alliance's vice leader was now talking to Taejin and Mata. She admitted they had been careless as they already knew Taejin would be targeted again after the rank B evaluation scandal. Provisions had been made, but they never imagined the villains would infiltrate a Myth Guild dungeon. Taking full responsibility, she apologized, but Taejin reassured her there was no need to apologize since he had anticipated this would happen. It just came sooner than expected. Mata, however, couldn't contain his anger. He was livid that the villains had targeted not only Kang Jian and Yu Se-rin, but also Taejin. To him, this was utterly unacceptable. He vowed to storm the Red Dogs' headquarters and beat them until they confessed who had hired them. But Taejin calmly said there was no need for that since he already knew who had ordered the hit. Yin, the vice leader, asked if Taejin had really uncovered the truth on his own. Mata, surprised, questioned whether the villains had been that quick to talk. Taejin casually replied that they were far more talkative than he expected. With an intimidating look, Yin demanded to know who's the bastard that dared to attack Yu Se-rin, Kang Jian, and Taejin himself. Her aura flared so intensely that even Mary was left speechless. Taejin revealed the culprit, Seon Guild's leader, Ba Hyun-soo. The two guild representatives were shocked. They hadn't expected it to be Hyun-soo. Meanwhile, the hot-headed Maddie began shouting that it was obvious Hyun-soo was behind it, as his villainous appearance practically screamed guilt. Ian, however, analyzed the situation. Seon Guild was a national guild that had jumped from 30th to 7th in the rankings over the past 2 years. They were notorious for doing whatever it took to rise in the rankings, no matter how cruel or inhumane. With confirmation from Taejin, Yen declared there was no doubt left. She announced she'd gather her guild's elite members and ensure Seon paid for targeting the prodigy hunters. As she and Maddie prepared to march, Taejin asked if he could come along. He wanted to look the man who tried to kill him in the eye. The scene then shifted to Seon Guild's headquarters, where chaos had erupted. Maddie burst through walls, shouting for Hyun-soo, while guild members demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Meanwhile, Yeom entered from another direction, ordering the members to bring their leader immediately. Behind her was an army, all exuding an intimidating green aura. She warned that if they didn't produce their leader soon, the entire building would burn to the ground. When the guild members tried to talk instead of acting, Yin ordered her elites to attack, and they unleashed fireballs, creating a massive explosion. One sane guild member ran to Hyun-soo's office to warn him, saying the blue sky and Hwoarang representatives were there. But Hyun-soo, packing his bags full of gold and money, told him to shut up. He cursed himself for hiring such incompetent fools and wondered where it had all gone wrong. Was it the rank B evaluation or hiring the Red Dogs? Either way, if not for Taejin, none of this would have happened. He planned to escape, convinced that not even the guild leaders could break through his vault door. But then, he heard a loud bang. Through a crack in the vault door, he saw a terrifying sight. Taejin peeking through, asking if this was where he had been hiding all along and whether he really thought he wouldn't be found. Hyun-soo panicked, recognizing him instantly. As he stammered to ask if it was really Taejin, the young hunter confirmed, introducing himself as a rank B hunter and saying, "Consider this my respectful greeting." The leader begins questioning how our protagonist managed to get there. However, the protagonist simply claims he walked, since he's very skilled at finding people, while Parsley, who's navigating below, gives a thumbs up to the camera. Hyun-soo questions what the protagonist wants, asserting that he couldn't have come there in secret without expecting something in return. He asks if it's money, showing a briefcase stuffed with cash, and tells the protagonist he can take it and leave. He promises there's more where that came from if he just walks away. Mary warns Taejin not to fall for the schemes of this crook. Back to reality, the protagonists agree it's a tempting offer, but make it clear they're not after dirty money. Instead, they want to confirm something with Seon's leader about the promotion exam, asking if someone else was involved. The protagonist claims they already know most of the details, so Hyun-soo should just be honest. Hyun-soo grows visibly irritated, accusing Taejin of testing him. He insists he devised the entire plan alone, mockingly asking who else would be involved. The protagonist taunts him, hinting that he played a card to bait Hyun-soo, but admits he didn't fall for it. The protagonist jokes that he'll just beat Hyun-soo up and hand him over to the headquarters since he refuses to talk. Of course, as the leader of a powerful guild like Seon, Hyun-soo is no weakling. He demands to know who the protagonist thinks he is, calling him arrogant for showing up as if he were somebody important. Hyun-soo claims not to fear the protagonist, a mere doorman, but admits to fearing the two monsters, Made and Yeonhwa. As he speaks, Hyun-soo channels energy into his hands, manifesting dark matter. Even Taejin is momentarily impressed. Seeing the protagonist's reaction, Hyun-soo asks if he's ready to talk now, remarking that this whole situation could have been avoided if he'd accepted the initial offer. Feigning ignorance, the protagonist sarcastically asks if he should have accepted the deal. Meanwhile, he analyzes the dark matter ability, realizing its immense power. As a rank S ability, dark matter absorbs all energy except that of the conjurer, blocks range attacks, and drains mana and stamina in close combat, making it nearly impossible to approach. Hyun-soo orders the protagonist to step aside if he doesn't want to die. Normally, anyone sane would avoid such a fight, but the protagonist? Sane? Hardly. Instead, he accuses Hyun-soo of lying, claiming the ability is fake. Even Hyun-soo starts to believe the protagonist is insane, questioning if he's really planning to counter dark matter with a mere fireball. Unfazed, the protagonist doubles down, mocking Hyun-soo and claiming he's fooling no one. We finally understand the protagonist's confidence. He's using his unique ability to analyze Hyun-soo's status window, revealing that the dark matter is just a skill projection ability. It consumes mana to replicate a random skill, but operates at only 10% of the original skill's power. When the protagonist throws the fireball, Hyun-soo panics, raising his hands in surrender and begging to talk. But it's too late. The fireball hits, leaving Hyun-soo screaming in pain, pleading for someone to bring an extinguisher. Despite holding back, the protagonist is surprised at Hyun-soo's low endurance and wonders how such a person became a guild leader. Taejin tells Hyun-soo to stop making so much noise since he won't die from this. Concluding they've talked enough, the protagonist grabs Hyun-soo's head and uses his vampire charm ability to extract the truth. As the protagonist reaches for Hyun-soo's face, the scene cuts to the Seon Guild building, now wrecked with missing parts. Mata is shouting congratulations to the protagonist for capturing Hyun-soo, calling him 100 times more competent than the useless headquarters staff. The protagonist humbly credits the two leaders, claiming he couldn't have accomplished it without them. It's thanks to their support that Hyun-soo is apprehended. Made agrees, boasting about their abilities. He points out that the building might have collapsed without their intervention. Taejun acknowledges Made's strength, but asks about the guild master, Soo-yeon. Made reassures him she'll arrive soon as she's retrieving evidence from the office. Conveniently, a portal, resembling something out of Rick and Morty, appears just as he finishes speaking. Soo-yeon emerges with evidence of exam tampering. According to the documents, several high-ranking management officials were involved, though they fled abroad. Made, having suspected as much, asks if there's evidence implicating other hunters or guilds. Soo-yeon confirms that the exam manipulation was orchestrated solely by Hyun-soo and his subordinates. Made laments the greed of those willing to accept money from someone like Hyun-soo, blaming him for the corruption. Grabbing Hyun-soo by the ear, Made declares he won't hand him over to headquarters so easily and promises to change his mind today. Hyun-soo screams for mercy, but no one intervenes. Yeon speaks with Taejun, asking if he captured Hyun-soo in his underground hideout. After confirming, she admits they owe him once again. She never expected to need his help for something like this. However, the protagonist denies this, stating he acted entirely on his own to uncover hidden forces behind the events. His comment confuses Yeon, but he elaborates that the exam tampering couldn't have been orchestrated by Hyun-soo alone. With elite dark magic users and professional assassins involved, a larger force must be backing him. He vows to dismantle not only Hyun-soo's empire, but also everyone who supported him. He gives a righteous speech declaring that wrongdoers must be punished. Mary rolls her eyes at his blatant posturing, while Yeon is genuinely surprised by his determination. Yeon asks if he's identified the villains helping Hyun-soo. He denies it but stares at her suspiciously. The scene shifts to a dark office lit only by a laptop screen. A man nervously reads the news about Ba Hyun-soo's arrest, learning that he confessed to tampering with the promotion test 2 days after being captured. The man curses Hyun-soo for confessing, questioning why he hired assassins and did let things be. This man, Go Young-min, is the leader of the hard-to-pronounce Hwaryeong Guild, which we'll simply call the Skull Guild due to its symbol. Young-min is anxious, wondering if this will lead back to him, but dismisses the possibility. They only signed a contract and a sealing spell ensures their involvement remains hidden. As he ponders, someone knocks on the door. It's the Skull Guild's vice leader, Cho Young-tae, who reports someone wants to meet Young-min personally. Go asks if it's someone from Sky or Hwaryeong Guild, fearing he's doomed. Young-tae says the person is wearing a mask, making identification impossible, but mentioned the flying fly, which Go recognizes immediately. Panicking, Young-min tells him to let the person in. He fears Hyun-soo may have revealed details of their dealings but doubts it. The masked visitor enters, removing their disguise to reveal none other than the protagonist, Lee Taejun, the madman himself. Both men recognize him from the Rank B test, where his interference caused them to fail in eliminating Seirin and Jian. The leader asks why the rising star would visit their guild, inviting him to sit. Internally, Go speculates that Taejun has come to blackmail him over the Hyun-soo deal. However, breaking everyone's expectations, including our own. Taejun starts laughing maniacally, performing a handstand while spinning his head and spitting everywhere. The leader, understandably shocked, orders Young-tae to stop the protagonist's bizarre antics. Our protagonist has lost it. He starts running around the room with his arms. Yes, you read that right, running with his arms. This bizarre behavior even scares Miri, who begins to question if he's lost his mind as he's acting like a lunatic. While he's busy mocking everyone in the office, the vice leader of the guild charges toward him, channeling energy into his fists to land a punch. He demands to know what the hell is wrong with the protagonist for barging into someone's building and behaving like a complete maniac. Young-tae attempts to strike him, but with an agile maneuver using just his legs, the protagonist intercepts the punch with ease. The blow doesn't faze him at all, and to mock further, he even comments that it's exactly what he'd expect from the #1 of the Skull Guild. Even the bald vice leader is impressed. Taejun used nothing but raw physical strength to completely neutralize the attack, all while intentionally choosing a technique that momentarily restricted the vice leader's movement. The protagonist announces that the test should be over and introduces himself in a more formal manner. Returning to a more human position, albeit in a slightly contorted way, he presents himself as Lee Taejun, the rugby hunter and freelancer. The guild leader is understandably confused, questioning what on earth Taejun is talking about. He barged in, spouted nonsense about testing them, and now expects them to accept it. But our little psycho merely confirms it, explaining that of course he needs to assess the strongest person in the guild he's about to join. He's testing how they would handle the unexpected. Jeo Young-min, the guild leader, begins to realize just how insane this guy is. Even the bald vice leader is at his limit, claiming he's seen all kinds of lunatics. But even lunacy has its boundaries. Poking his finger at the protagonist's chest, he reminds him that this is not the kind of place where anyone can stroll in and say whatever nonsense comes to mind. And worse, Taejun doesn't even know the basics of necromancy. Unbothered, Taejun jokes about how obsessed they are with necromancy, and remarks that this fixation is precisely why the Skull Guild is failing. The bald man's anger boils over. Taejun continues, pointing out that the Skull Guild was founded by the legendary hunter Go Jun-ho, who used used blood magic. He revolutionized dark magic and necromancy, transforming them into symbols of national support. Thanks to him, the guild once ranked among Korea's top 5. However, ever since the original guild master retired, the guild has been on the brink of collapse. These statements infuriate the vice leader even further, but he can't deny them. Faced with the harsh truth, he realizes that they can't afford to be too picky in desperate times. There's an old saying about turning crises into opportunities. Taejun, sitting on the guild leader's desk, mentions that this is one of those moments, a chance to transform a crisis into an opportunity. If they accept him into the Skull Guild, he guarantees they will rise again from the ashes. Geo Youngmin, visibly conflicted, knows how risky this could be. But then Taejun hands him something, a document that changes everything. When the guild leader looks at the paper, his expression shifts to sheer panic. Though he brushes it off as unimportant when the vice leader asks, it's clear Taejun knows everything about the artifact used to manipulate the B-rank exam and even about the shady transactions between Geo and Hyun-soo. Realizing the depth of Taejun's knowledge, Geo finally concedes, signing the contract and addressing Taejun as their newest member. Later, alone with the vice leader, the bald man explodes with rage over the decision to admit someone who doesn't even practice necromancy into the guild. But Geo simply asks him to calm down. He acknowledges that Taejun is highly skilled and will be incredibly useful to their guild. The vice leader is far from convinced, dismissively saying, "Useful, my ass." He insists Taejun is clearly here just to exploit them. Still, he leaves one warning. Taejun better learn necromancy no matter what, otherwise, he'll have to face the special admission test. Back at Taejun's home, he finally feels at peace, enjoying a rare moment of relaxation. Even something as simple as a cup of coffee brings him joy. Ever cheerful, Miri comments on how great his life seems now, especially considering he used to have assassins targeting him. But she suggests he should remain cautious. Naturally, Taejun assures her he has a plan. He's never idle, and he always prepares for any potential situation. Mary doubts this, suspecting he's bluffing. Taejun, however, shows her a ring he took from the Red Dogs gang members. This ring, he explains, is the reason they managed to pull off so many jobs without getting caught. Once he puts it on, it alters his appearance for everyone around him. While advanced detection abilities might still see through the disguise, most people won't know it's him. This allows him to roam freely without worry. Taejun asks Mary to simply enjoy the peaceful moment with him. Still curious, Mary asks why he chose to join the Skull Guild when he had better options like Myth, Hwoaring, or Sky. Taejun explains that while those guilds are great, working for them would be exhausting. Constant international expeditions, political conferences, and other annoyances come with being part of the Big Three. Joining one of them would bring too much hassle. On the other hand, the Skull Guild, ranked only 22nd nationally, doesn't attract much attention. This means he can collect mana stones in peace. Besides, he slyly remarks he can renegotiate the terms of his contract whenever he wants. He's already secured 100% of the commission for mana stones for himself. Genius. Mary finally understands his reasoning but wonders what he plans to do next. Taejun, who hasn't been out in a while, is considering going shopping. Mary is shocked as he's usually so frugal, but Taejun believes it's okay to splurge occasionally and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Arriving in a massive glass building, Taejun is amazed. He never imagined visiting a place like this and marvels at how money truly changes lives. Mary, unfamiliar with this world, asks what kind of place it is, as it doesn't seem like an ordinary shopping mall. With a flourish, Taejun explains that this is the world's largest market for hunters, known and coveted by hunters everywhere. It's called Unwuljun, Korea's mega market exclusively for hunters. This isn't just a shopping mall. It boasts a VIP area, a cultural center, entire floors dedicated to weapons, armor, and accessories, as well as grand halls for parties and events. Rare equipment arrives every week, all of the highest quality and with effects Miri could never have imagined. Presenting this information like a TV commercial, Taejun earns applause from Miri. While he's contemplating all the treasures he can explore, a car pulls up and someone calls out to him. The person, barely recognizing him thanks to his ring, introduces herself as Cha Yeren, the leader of the Myth Guild. She mentions she's heard about him through her brother and didn't expect to meet him so soon. Taejun asks who she is, and she explains her role. Shaking her hand, he asks what brings a guild leader to a place like this. She surprises him by revealing she owns the entire mega market and personally comes by weekly to inspect the newest arrivals. Taejun is floored. He had no idea Myth owned the whole market, and if he'd known, he would have joined their guild without hesitation. After apologizing for not recognizing her, Yeren reassures him it's fine. She doesn't appear in the media much, so it's normal for people not to know her face. She then asks if Taejun has any free time, as she'd like to thank him personally. Apparently, she's heard from her brother about Taejun's role in the Cursed Territory expedition. The hunters said that without him, they wouldn't have completed the dungeon, and the entire third team, and possibly Myth itself, would have been in danger. While Taejun appreciates her gratitude, he politely declines any rewards, explaining that he didn't do it for recognition. Yeren respects his humility but offers one final gesture. She invites him to select any item he desires from the VIP area. As she shows off the golden card, our protagonist is left speechless, recognizing this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity opportunity. However, she begins to put the card away, saying there's nothing she can do if he truly doesn't want a reward. But all he can think is that any free item is highly advantageous. Without hesitation, he places his hand on her shoulder just as she is about to leave and asks her to wait for a moment, requesting to take a quick look at what they have. Inside the elevator, she comments that he is much more ordinary than she expected. She initially thought he would have a more unique vibe, especially considering the incredible aura he seemed to emanate and the rumors spreading about him. Embarrassed, the protagonist awkwardly admits that he might have accidentally raised her expectations. She reassures him, saying it wasn't a bad thing. In fact, she prefers that he is down to earth. However, she jokingly adds that Shamana probably wouldn't appreciate her saying that. As she finishes speaking, the elevator doors open and she explains that this area is reserved exclusively for VIP customers. However, since this is a special occasion, he can look around freely and take his time choosing something. The space is truly magnificent with white decor, some paintings, and endless corridors. The protagonist is amazed, staring at necklaces and armors worth billions of won, and marvels even more at the fact that she owns all of this, seeing her as a sort of goddess of money. He even begins to drool, prompting Yiren to ask if he's found anything interesting. Of course he has, it's just hard to choose among so many options. But one item truly catches his eye. Pointing to a specific section, he asks if she could explain what those items do. Impressed by his taste, she tells him that every item in that section was once used by legendary guild masters like Hwaring and Xiongyan, both of whom were legends in Korea and are now too old to wield these artifacts. She explains that these items are preserved as tributes to their stories and, unfortunately, are not for sale. She suggests he look at other items instead since there are even better ones available. However, their conversation is interrupted by a man informing Yiren that the director of the Hyonan Guild has arrived. Yiren remarks on how she hadn't realized how much time had passed and says she has an urgent meeting to attend. She suggests meeting later in her office to continue their discussion. The protagonist politely bids her farewell and urges her not to worry, but Miri teases him, saying he'll hurt his back bowing so deeply. The protagonist responds that it's all part of being a professional. Miri, however, remains puzzled about why Taejun is so interested in something like these gauntlets when there are so many better options available. She peers through the glass, trying to discern what might be special about them, but they seem far too old to be of any real use. Using a scanner, they identify the item as the Broken Steel Dragon Gauntlet. Its durability has reached 0, and it was once used by a forgotten martial artist. With its durability completely worn down, the gauntlet has become useless. Mary isn't wrong about that, but Taejun has noticed something intriguing about this item. It has a tab indicating synergy with the skills of the Ascendant Dragon. Additionally, there's an interesting mission related to explosive growth. Based on his understanding, the system never gives him an impossible task. At the very least, the system always provides challenges within his capabilities. This mission involves finding an item that creates synergy with his abilities, which will unlock a new tab in his status window. Thus, there must be a way to repair this item. But since he has no way to acquire it for now, he begins to complain that he'd do anything to fix it, even saying he'd bark like a dog if she asked him to in exchange for the gauntlet. To everyone's surprise, he actually starts imitating a dog and then lies down on the ground, contemplating ways to win her over and secure the item. His ears perk up when he overhears a conversation in the next room. Someone asks about a matter they thought had already been resolved, mentioning that the additional contract fee had already been paid. Recognizing the voice as Yiren's, Taejun senses an opportunity. If she's in some kind of trouble, he figures he might score some points with her by solving it. With that in mind, he starts running toward her like a loyal dog, determined to help. In the meeting room, Miran expresses her frustration, disappointed because they had already discussed this matter beforehand. She asks how long the other party plans to act so stubbornly. The leader of the Hyoman Guild, Kang Yong-sik, responds by praising her for being a bold businesswoman, but notes that her words are harsh. He and his guild insist they are charging a fair price for their high standards and ask if she doesn't agree that it's only fair for them to do so. Yiren struggles to believe his audacity, but before she can respond, Taejun bursts into the room, having overheard their voices. He enters, asking if something is wrong. Kang immediately becomes enraged, demanding Taejun leave, not even bothering to learn who he is. Even Yiren advises Taejun that now isn't a good time, but he confidently ignores them, saying that if they're in the middle of an executive negotiation, he should be involved because he loves negotiations. He takes his seat and asks to discuss the deal. Grinning, he draws the ire of Kang, who demands to know who Taejun is. Yiren too is at a loss for words, but Taejun has already grasped the situation. He knows the Hyonan Guild specializes in item appraisal, and since there aren't many guilds in Korea that can perform such appraisals, Hyonan monopolizes the market. Even if they breach contracts or act disrespectfully, guilds like Myth have little choice but to comply with Hyonan's demands. Interrupting Yiren, who is struggling to explain him, Taejun introduces himself as Che Yiren's legal advisor. He asks directly what the issue is. Though Yiren is confused by his claim, Kang falls for it, believing Taejun really is her lawyer. Kang explains that Yeren had asked them to appraise a large volume of items in a single day. Given the quantity, they'd need at least a week, and bringing in more personnel would increase the costs, so they require an additional payment, double the originally agreed amount. While Yeren is shocked by the price, Taejun understands the problem but notices something strange. Since Hyeon is supposed to be a specialized appraisal guild, how could they need an entire week to evaluate such a small batch of items? He calls them out, sarcastically questioning how an expert guild could be so inefficient. Laughing, Taejun remarks that if he were Yeren, he would have sought out another guild long ago. Kang fires back, asking how he dares behave this way, and challenges them to find another guild, warning of the risks. If appraisals are inaccurate or mishandled, the items could lose their value or even be damaged. Kang emphasizes that there isn't another guild capable of handling such work. Taejun remains silent, expressionless, as Yeren places a hand on his shoulder, telling him it's enough. She appreciates that he's trying to help, but if the situation worsens, it won't be good for anyone. Taejun stands up, admitting that he may have overstepped and apologizing if he caused any trouble for Yeren. He begins to leave. Kang mockingly remarks that Taejun finally got the message, boasting that no one else can appraise items like they can. He urges Yeren to finalize the contract, but as Taejun walks away, he suddenly turns back, introducing himself with a grin as Yeren's new item appraiser and expressing his excitement about working with her in various ways. Yeren questions what our protagonist is doing since he looks like a lunatic with that strange monocle on his head, looking at the items he's supposed to evaluate. But he asks her not to worry since he wouldn't take more than an hour. She's confused while he simply asks the other evaluators to leave since all of this is a trade secret. Kang, logically, gets furious, saying this is all a farce, and that he doesn't care if the protagonist is a lawyer or whatever. If he keeps interfering with business, there will be consequences. Kang tells him to stop pretending to be an item appraiser and go home, mocking him along with his subordinates about how Taejun doesn't even know how to bluff since evaluating so much in just an hour is impossible. But our protagonist simply picks up a necklace, asking if he could keep it for a moment. He says he already evaluated outside a little earlier, and the evaluation was done in under 10 seconds, asking if, at that pace, he could qualify as an appraiser too. To verify, Kang orders one of his evaluators to check, but the protagonist grabs the evaluator's hand, stating that one should only bet if they're sure, asking if they hadn't learned this before. He says he doesn't like being treated that way, then speaks directly to Kang, telling him that if he's sure he wants confirmation, he should put something on the line as well. Kang finds the situation amusing and asks if Taejun really wants to make a bet, finally understanding where this is going. Kang proposes that if Taejun fails to evaluate all the items in 1 hour, he'll lose. If he succeeds, Kang will lose and pay 1 billion won. Then he asks what Taejun will wager. Taejun, impressed by the bold offer, remarks on Kang's audacity. Kang, thinking he's intimidated him, asks if Taejun is backing out, scared of being exposed, saying it's not too late to admit his mistake and apologize. But Taejun confirms the deal, raising the stakes to 10 billion won, with that sly grin of someone who already knows they won the lottery. Yeren questions the protagonist's confidence in betting over 10 billion won to evaluate so many items in under an hour, asking how he could pay if he lost. But he reassures her, asking her to verify if the evaluation is complete, showing her a cloth. She uses some sort of verification and realizes the evaluation is indeed complete. It's an impenetrable cloak that nullifies one lethal blow every 48 hours and gives +1 to all stats. Shocked, she wonders how this is possible, and thanks to her reaction, the protagonist realizes his gamble was right. With his administrator's system's item analyzer, he can completely evaluate an item's details without separating it. He wasn't sure if it worked for others, but now he knows. All the analyses performed by the item analyzer can be shared with others, meaning he could make a fortune as an appraiser. Yeren asks if Taejun really did this, and he confirms, saying no one else could have done it. Furthermore, he claims to have evaluated all the other items on the table. He tells her to verify it herself if she doesn't believe him. She does, placing her hand over the items, and is shocked to find not just their names but their grades, stats, and abilities fully revealed. Even the country's top appraisers need hours to gather such information, but in an instant, everything had been unveiled. She wonders how Lee Taejun managed this. Kang is equally stunned, realizing all the items have been evaluated and questioning how this could be possible. The protagonist smirks and asks what happened to Kang, noticing he seems shaken. Taejun reminds Kang that he warned him not to bet unless he was sure, advising him to be more careful next time. Angered, Kang grabs Taejun, calling him a cheater and demanding to know what trick he used. Kang accuses Taejun of conspiring with Yeren, saying it's unbelievable. Yeren steps in, laying down the facts, stating that whether it's a lie or not, Kang can see for himself that all items were evaluated. Therefore, according to the contract, he owes Taejun 10 billion won. The protagonist casually agrees, saying Kang should just transfer the money to him. Kang, still in shock, struggles to process this since he isn't used to such a situation. It feels unreal to lose 10 billion won on a simple bet. His subordinates help him leave, trying to calm him down, while the protagonist and Yeren are left alone. Taejun, with a mischievous grin, remarks on how rewarding rewarding the bet was. Hirin thanks him for his help, but she says this is something they can't simply overlook. She notes that with his level of precision and speed in evaluation, he could single-handedly upend the global appraisal industry and monopolize it. In other words, if he wanted to, he could destroy the current market that guilds like Hyonen rely on. She admits that even for him, it seems impossible and demands to know how he did it. Naturally feeling cornered, the protagonist brushes it off as a trade secret, saying he can't reveal it. Seizing the opportunity, he changes the subject, asking if she remembers the relic gauntlets they saw earlier. Since they weren't for sale, he proposes a trade. If she gives him the gauntlets, he'll give her a hint about how he evaluated the items. She comments on how much he must have liked that item, but agrees, saying the situation is an exception, and she'll personally retrieve the gauntlets for him right away. However, she insists he explain how he evaluated the items. A short moment later, we see him leaving, thanking the director, saying he'll visit again soon and looks forward to seeing her then. The protagonist walks off carrying a pile of shiny items while Yurin waves him goodbye. After he leaves, one of Yurin's bodyguards asks what she discovered. She recounts that he told her everything before leaving, saying his secret was that he listens to the voice of the items, advising her to look at them with the eyes of the heart. Of course, the bodyguard finds this absurd, and Yurin agrees, saying it's likely Taeja never intended to reveal the real secret, or that he's in a situation where he can't. Regardless of the reason, she vows that the hunter Taeja shouldn't think she'll let this slide so easily. One way or another, she'll ensure he joins her guild. Returning to our protagonist in his little home, he was acting like a lunatic, finally exclaiming that he had gotten his hands on that cursed gauntlet. With a manic grin, he spoke to the item, asking if it knew just how much effort it had taken to acquire it, and swearing he wouldn't let it go. Miri interrupted him, pointing out that no matter how legendary the item had been in the past, now it was just broken junk. She asked if there was any way to repair it. However, the protagonist admitted he had no clue whether it could be fixed. Still, now that the item was in his possession, he could surely come up with something. Mary suggested posting about it in the Parsley Market, since there were countless people from different dimensions there and perhaps someone might know how to repair it. But the protagonist cringed, remembering all his bad experiences with that platform, wondering if he'd really have to log into that mass-produced game again. Mary reassured him that posting through the status window would be much simpler. Following her advice, he posted a query asking if anyone knew how to repair an item like his, offering a hefty payment for the information. Despite that, he decided the broken item wasn't his immediate priority, as his current focus lay on the items he had recently purchased. Thanks to the 10 billion won he'd gotten from Kang Yong-seok, he had indulged in some interesting shopping. He confidently remarked that the Cavalry Guild's initiation ceremony shouldn't be a problem. However, Miri noticed that all the items he'd chosen had holy attributes and questioned why he'd chosen such items, especially since he was trying to join a dark magic guild. The protagonist smirked and explained that Mary didn't know everything, saying the initiation test would likely involve a necromancy duel where he'd have to defeat a summoned monster. Holy items would be the best choice for this situation. Mary argued that cursed items might have been more appropriate for a necromantic duel, as using holy items would be against the rules. The protagonist simply told her to relax and watch how he handled it. The scene shifted to the Cavalry Guild. The guild leader welcomed the protagonist, stating they had been expecting him. Apologizing for arriving later than planned, the protagonist was informed that the preparations for the duel were already complete, and that he had arrived just in time. Curious, the protagonist asked if special arrangements had been made. The guild leader confirmed, explaining that his initiation ceremony would involve a duel against the guild's vice leader, Jo Young-tae, to demonstrate his necromantic skills. Anticipation ran high among the guild members, who had even prepared a special venue for the duel. As the protagonist entered the arena surrounded by a crowd of guild members, he noticed the vice leader waiting in the center. However, what truly caught his attention was that everyone around him was bald. Even Miri couldn't help but complain about the blinding reflection from all the shiny heads. The protagonist quickly realized they were deliberately trying to provoke him. They knew he was only a B-rank hunter and couldn't use necromancy effectively. Their plan was clear: to humiliate him in front of everyone. He cursed himself for not anticipating this earlier, realizing the guild members were even worse than he had expected. Mary, still puzzled, asked why everyone was bald. The protagonist explained that people who use necromancy often suffer from hair loss as a side effect of the black mamba attribute. Alarmed, Mary asked if the protagonist would also lose his hair, but he didn't respond. The vice leader, Jo Young-tae, finally addressed Taeja, asking if he understood the duel's terms. He explained that they would battle exclusively using necromancy. Taeja confirmed, agreeing to use only necromancy. The terms dictated that if Taeja won, he would be allowed to join the guild under the agreed conditions. However, if he lost, he would be bound to serve the guild for the rest of his life. The protagonist, having anticipated such conditions, wasn't surprised. He was well aware that the vice leader effectively controlled the guild's finances and operations. Taeja believed Jo Young-tae was the reason the guild was in decline. His parasitic leadership, dragging one of the oldest guilds into ruin. Despite this, Taejin confidently proposed an additional condition. If he won, he would take Jo Young-tae's position as vice leader and force him to compensate for the financial damage he'd caused. Smirking, he added that this would make the duel far more entertaining for the audience. He asked if Jo Young-tae was interested. Jo Young-tae, visibly annoyed, dismissed the accusations, claiming the Cavalry Guild's survival was entirely thanks to his efforts. To prove his worth, he slammed his staff to the ground, summoning an A-rank Death Knight. He challenged Taejin to show what he had prepared. Unfazed, Taejin began the duel by summoning Aratus. The crowd watched curiously as a skeletal warrior materialized, clad in the holy items Taejin had purchased from the market. But instead of impressing them, this drew mockery. The spectators laughed, questioning if he really thought a single skeleton could stand against the Death Knight. Jo Young-tae joined in, calling Taejin's preparation a joke. Ignoring the ridicule, Taejin commanded Aratus to attack. With a single blow, the Death Knight's armor cracked, stunning Jo Young-tae, who hadn't expected such power. The protagonist grinned, reveling in his opponent's shock. He asked Aratus if he liked his new equipment, and the skeleton humbly admitted that it was indeed incredible, though he still felt a little guilty wielding holy items. Taejin reassured him, insisting it didn't matter as long as he crushed the enemy. The crowd gasped, realizing that the skeleton had a holy attribute. Someone muttered in disbelief, questioning if such a thing was even possible. Taejin, meanwhile, internally explained the dynamics of mana attributes, detailing how fire, earth, wind, and water countered each other in sequence, while light and darkness opposed each other equally. Aratus, originally possessing a dark attribute, had undergone an evolution after consuming magical potions and battling alongside Taejin, becoming the only skeleton capable of wielding a divine attribute. As the duel continued, Taejin commanded Aratus to deliver the final blow. Aratus hesitated, asking if he should use that, to which Taejin nodded. Aratus began reciting, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Jo Young-tae, confused by the skeleton's monologue, sneered at the absurdity. But Taejin pulled out a light grenade, and as Aratus concluded, and God said, "Let there be light," the grenade flew toward the Death Knight. In the midst of this white explosion, everyone tried to shield their eyes, questioning what on earth this light could be. It seemed to purify even their souls, leaving them to wonder especially about that skeleton, practically self-destructing, while wielding something with such terrifying power. In the end, the protagonist declared the fight over, with the Death Knight completely disintegrated and their stalwart skeleton still standing in the arena. The protagonist noticed that Aratus wasn't entirely immune to divine power, but the damage he sustained was minimal compared to what it could have been. The bald man complained that things hadn't gone according to his plan, while the protagonist demanded that he keep his promise, relinquish his position as vice leader of the guild, and repay everything he had taken, including everything he consumed from the Ancients Guild up to now. Everyone was confused, but the protagonist had clearly won. They started to see him as just another dictator like the rest. The bald man began lamenting, saying that if he'd only had a little more time, he could have completed his plans. It was then revealed that he had orchestrated the entire situation, telling Ba Hyun-soo about the Lich's relic and instructing him to approach the guild leader feigning ignorance. He had even recorded everything, planning to use the evidence to blackmail the guild leader and seize full control. But thanks to the protagonist, everything had fallen apart. Furious, the bald man said he wouldn't go down alone and pulled out a black heart, challenging the protagonist. The members of the guild recognized the item immediately. It was the heart of a cursed king, a completely forbidden artifact. The guild leader demanded to know what Young-tae was trying to do, but he simply squeezed the heart, declaring that they all died together. The protagonist used his ability to inspect the item and discover it was a suicide weapon. The artifact, created by an ancient forbidden evil, drained the mana and life force of its user to summon a cursed monster from another dimension. Young-tae warned the protagonist not to think he could take someone's opportunity and walk away unscathed. If he was going to lose everything, he wouldn't lose alone. As he stepped into a portal, a creature began to emerge. The monster that emerged was called the Bride of the Black Death. Everyone was struck with terror at its appearance and immediately started shouting for others to flee. The creature screamed, releasing a horrifying aura. Thankfully, the protagonist's system notification protected him from the Ancestor's Wail ability. The monster wasted no time unleashing a barrage of high-rank attacks. Its sheer power was unfathomable. Out of nowhere, someone who looked like they stepped straight out of JoJo's bizarre adventure appeared behind the protagonist, offering assistance. This was the Bone King, Lord Gushin, the former leader of the Cavalry Guild. The protagonist asked when he had arrived, but Gushin revealed he had been there the entire time. He couldn't miss an initiation ceremony that honored the guild's name. Besides, he'd enjoyed the show, complimenting the skeleton Aratus, who seemed far more conscious and aware than an ordinary skeleton, more like a lich. The protagonist, visibly nervous, worried that Gushin had figured out the truth. However, the old man assured him they could discuss it later. For now, they needed to deal with the summoned spirit before things got out of hand. Gushin launched several blood blades at the creature, binding it while piercing his body. Despite the onslaught, awe, the monster screamed and continued to resist. Gushin, realizing its resilience, noted that such defiance was to be expected from a demon summoned at the cost of a life. To test its true strength, he raised his hand and caused an explosion of blood from within the creature. The protagonist watched in awe at the incredible destructive power of Gushin's legendary blood magic. Gushin, known as the necromancer who ruled the world for nearly 20 years after the Great Cataclysm, was a master of the mysterious blood magic. His team had once been renowned, and his leadership had elevated the guild to 3rd place in the national rankings. Although retired and largely forgotten now, his legacy was formidable. However, blood magic came at a cost. It used the caster's own blood as a medium. This weakness became apparent as Gushin began coughing up blood. Fighting a cursed creature that could infect with a mere touch was particularly disadvantageous, as close combat was out of the question. With no mana left after using his signature attack, the protagonist couldn't rely on his rising dragon technique. The cursed creature charged toward him, leaping with its double-footed assault. Its heels struck with such force they cracked the very ground. Just as the creature bore down on the protagonist, Erethus intervened, shielding his master while proclaiming in the name of the light and the Holy Spirit that the monster would not be forgiven. The protagonist demanded to know where Erethus had been, as he had nearly died. Erethus explained that the divine light from the earlier battle had briefly rendered him unconscious, but he was back now and would protect his master. The protagonist and Miri noticed a distinct change in Erethus' personality, with Miri even questioning why he seemed so different. The protagonist had no answers. Erethus charged at the creature, shouting that it would be purified by sacred light. However, the creature grabbed his head and burned him with purple flames. The protagonist realized that even divine power was ineffective against the monster, leaving him to wonder how they could possibly defeat it. Erethus, his voice resolute, told the protagonist that this was where his journey ended. He asked only that the protagonist survive. Teijin questioned what Erethus was planning. The skeleton, now resolute, drew a strange sword. The protagonist shouted for him to stop, knowing what would happen if he used that item. There was a one-time use artifact that had cost a staggering 8 billion. He couldn't afford to lose Erethus, no matter the cost. Then the skeleton finished the attack. The Saints gained ranked S. While Teijin cried, the old man said that a real skeleton was incredible. Not only did it use sacred attribute items, but it could also wield a holy sword. After the smoke cleared, the system announced that he had defeated Priest Blatch, and the summoned creature Erethus had its durability increased. While Teijin fought with the skeleton, it only turned around apologizing to its master, stating this was just to protect him. The system returned, stating that he had entered a petrification state for 24 hours, while Teijin kept talking to himself, complaining that he hadn't said anything. He thought of the legendary item, the Sacred King's Star Cluster. Even considering the severe debuff, its power was extremely strong, surpassing the common sense of this world. The problem was that recharging this energy cost an astronomical amount of sacred power, so he grew sad, saying that at this point he could buy a new one. But his partner told him there was a reason it was so expensive. He placed his hand on the skeleton, saying it had done a good job. At first he thought it was just a normal skeleton, but in truth, it was determination itself, and so a tear fell from the petrified skeleton. The old man arrived, saying the poor skeleton was trapped in a debuff, while Teijin asked if it was okay. Lord Gushin asked if he needed to take any action, but what Teijin wanted was for him to release the summon and let it rest for a while. So he bowed his head, saying he understood. Then he remarked that it was the first time he had ever seen something like this, a skeleton wielding a sacred object. But in the end, that sight was like witnessing the heroes of the past. Teijin looked at it, thinking that in the end, it was just a skeleton. The Lord went back to thanking him, saying that no matter what his intentions had been, the power of Hwariang had escaped from Zhou Yongtai's grasp. He had stopped the one who had been planning to betray both him and his nephew from within the position of Vice Guild leader. Then he looked at him, saying that Teijin's goal wasn't so different from his own, and he asked if anything useful had been left in Hwariang. Teijin just smiled, thinking that the experience couldn't be underestimated, because this old man seemed to know from the very beginning. But the reason he had joined the guild was only for his own benefit. That's why he wanted to be only the vice leader, not the leader. However, he had no intention of taking anything away from others. He then said that the guild had value to him. The old man thought that was good. Then he shouted, calling everyone, and declared that through this duel, Teijin's abilities had been proven. He had not only defeated Zhou Yang in necromancy, but also defeated the evil spirit and saved everyone's lives. Therefore, he ordered that from now on, this man would be the vice leader of the Hwariang Guild. Then he passed the word to him to say something to everyone, but the fool didn't even know where to start a speech. So he simply introduced himself as Teijin and said only one thing: let's not steal each other's rice bowls. That was his whole speech. Later, in the Myth Guild, they were watching the news that Teijin had become vice leader. One man looked on, thinking he had never imagined Teijin would join that guild. Although he respected the choice, he felt betrayed. Another woman complained that he was careless and kept losing talented people. He acted dramatic, saying his sister was being too harsh with him. But she was angry because she should have brought Teijin into her guild, since people like him were hard to find. Besides, she didn't understand why he had joined that guild at all. She remembered that Shana was close to Teijin, so she thought about asking her. In the end, she even tried to bribe the protagonist to come to her guild. She came back asking if they weren't close, but Cian replied that they were, but she had no idea what he was thinking. The woman just smiled back while Sean continued saying that sometimes she didn't know what went on in his head. Even though they had been friends for 10 years, Taejun could be very unpredictable. But one thing she was sure of: he always wanted to get stronger, and so everyone cheered for the new vice leader. A bald man asked to guide him to the office while Taejun was left speechless. After leaving him in the office, the bald man bowed, wishing him good work. But Taejun was exhausted from so much formality, wondering if every place was like this. His partner said that each guild was different. She turned to him, asking how he felt on his first day as a guild vice leader. He replied that it wasn't so good right now, but he was beginning to wonder if this was really what he wanted. Taejun shook his head, saying that successful people were lonely. He had been chasing what was in front of him all the time, paying for the hardships he endured over the last 7 years, completing missions and growing. So he wondered if it was right to get stronger so fast, because he had an uneasy feeling. Taejun returned to the manager, saying he had questions. She said that the developer of the dramatic growth had left the company. She confirmed it. He asked if that meant that if he failed a mission, there would be no penalty, because there had to be some drawback. She replied that she wasn't sure, so she would check the servers. Taejun thought to himself that he didn't really understand these managerial things. From the beginning, it had been strange that he was the only one using a status window that didn't even exist on Earth. He had been receiving benefits up until now, so he couldn't keep using it without knowing anything. At that moment, the manager came out shouting emergency. Taejun asked what had happened, but she said she had received some information. He tried to find out what it was while she began reading from the system. It said in the system user's guide that upon receiving dramatic growth, users could receive missions. These missions were calculated based on the user's situation, and if they were not completed within the time limit, the effects of growth would be invalidated. This shocked Taejun, who asked why, since everything he had gained so far could disappear. She agreed, saying that's how it was written. He fumed like a dragon, asking how she hadn't told him something this important earlier, but she apologized, saying she didn't know and had stolen this secret information. Since this subject was super secret, she had no access to it. All she knew was the matter of special priority. At that moment, she covered her mouth, saying she shouldn't have said that. Taejun thought all of this was strange, spending the whole day just to explain the latest functions. It felt like a game operator was running a balance patch test. So he asked if the manager was here to monitor his life. He got closer, ordering her not to lie. Sadly, she said it wasn't something she could reveal now. Then he joked, saying that in the end she didn't know anything. But she came back confidently, saying that she was always on Taejun's side. Taejun asks if this means he'll lose everything he's earned so far. Min replies that he will. He questions why he wasn't told sooner, but she explains that she didn't know either and had to infiltrate to find out. Taejun presses her on the fact that she infiltrated, and Addie reveals that the exact details are confidential information that not even she can access. All she knows is that the ability is labeled as something that needs special attention. Min realizes she shouldn't have said that part, and he stares at her, finding the situation suspicious. He thinks it's strange how she hung around all day just to teach him how to use the status window. The whole situation reminds him of a game admin setting up a test server for an update. So Taejun directly asks if she came to watch him. He asks if she was sent to observe his ability, since not even her superiors knew much about it. Min replies that's not something she can share with him right now. Taejun mimics her, complaining that she always says she can't tell him things, but she interrupts him to state that there is something she can say with confidence. And then Min declares that she will always be on Taejun's side. He asks if he can really trust her, and Addie affirms that he can because they're friends and she wants what's best for him. Taejun concludes that she doesn't seem like a bad person. Although she has a clumsy side, he remembers that she always worried about him when he was in danger. Taejun decides to give her the benefit of the doubt for now and checks the remaining time for the quest. Addie says she changed the interface to make it easier to read, but he complains about the delay, and she replies that she didn't know either. The quest screen shows a little over 2 days remaining, and Taejun admits it has become easier to read. He realizes time is running out, so Addie suggests he check his post on the parsley market. He remembers the post and decides to see how many comments he's received. Opening the post, he sees the only comment is spam. Taejun laments all the wasted work, but Addie alerts him that a new reply has arrived. The new comment says it seems he's brought another interesting item. In a private chat, the user confirms they remember Taejun, who replies to the message. The man explains that the item has very complex mana paths that can be recovered to get working again, but he warns that fixing these paths would require the help of, at minimum, a 7-circle mage. The person suggests he look for someone he knows with those credentials, and Taejun thanks him for the tip. After the user leaves the chat, he asks Addie if she knows any mages like that. She suggests Yeon Waseo, but Taejun explains that not even she is above 5 circles, and Addie is surprised to learn she isn't the best in the country. Taejun explains that as far as he knows, there are no 7-circle mages in Korea, as they would be the best in the world. Addie asks what they'll do, and he replies that he knows only one person who can help. He doesn't know how trustworthy this person might be, but he admits it's his only shot. Someone knocks on an office door and says, "Hello." A man opens the door looking for the vice master, as he has some documents for him to sign. He enters the empty room and asks for the task to be considered part of his duties. Then he finds a note on the chair that reads, "Taking the day off today." The man is left confused by the situation. He wonders about someone taking a day off on their first day as the scene shifts to the Tower of Trials. Taejun and Addie enter the place and he comments on how it's still deserted. She asks why that dungeon is in the middle of the city and he calls her a noob. He explains that the place is actually a large gate that can alter the surrounding terrain to suit it. This doesn't necessarily mean it's any different from other dungeons. Taejun mentions hearing it was just an old building and Addie jots down the information. Looking around, he wonders where that old man is and if he's gone senile again. Elkiroid lands with a massive impact on the ground, welcoming the young man. Taejun shields himself from the debris flying from his arrival. The Tower Master strikes a pose and wishes that the power of protein may bless his journey, making Taejun complain about being startled. Then, Elkiroid recognizes him as the kid who saved his life and shakes his hand, noting that he seems to have trained quite a bit. He asks what brings him here since he considers him too strong for a place like this. Taejun explains that he came to ask for a favor and shows an item in his hands. He says the object has broken mana paths and asks if the master would be able to fix it. Elkiroid agrees to do the repair as he feels he owes him a great favor. But before starting, he turns and says he'd like to ask something. The master questions him about what it means to him to be truly strong. Taejun doesn't understand, and Elkiroid explains that seeking strength is a way to stay true to one's own beliefs. He continues, saying some go through arduous training while others dedicate their lives to honing their techniques to achieve their goals. Then, Elkiroid points directly at the young man and demands to know for what reason he desires to become stronger. Taejun replies that, in truth, he's never really thought much about it. The master calls him a foolish young man and lunges toward him, stating that strength without purpose is nothing but poison. Elkiroid attacks Taejun with a powerful blow. The impact damages a section of the wall. Taejun recovers from the attack and comments that it was dangerous. Elkiroid approaches and remarks that although he's fast, his heart wavers. He compares him to a lone beast that doesn't know where to go. Taejun asks if he wants to fight, and the master replies that he will teach him a great lesson. Then he strikes a pose and says not to worry about the outcome as he'll go easy. Taejun says he's starting to piss him off. He rushes forward at high speed and warns him not to complain later. He hits him with an upward strike. Elkiroid blocks the attack with his arm and compliments him on the blow's strength. But Taejun replies that he's just getting started and prepares another strike. He unleashes a rapid sequence of attacks against the master. Next, he uses a secret technique and finishes with a fireball. The attack hits the target in a massive explosion. Taejun asks if he got him, but Addie scolds him not to let his guard down. Elkiroid emerges unscathed from the smoke, praising his physical strength and the creative use of his techniques. But the Tower Master says there's one thing he's forgotten. He reveals himself as a mage, body, and soul. A skill window shows Elkiroid's fireball. Elkiroid fully reveals his mage form, surrounded by his energy. Taejun stares at him and asks if that fireball is the same skill as his. The master explains that the skill varies greatly depending on the caster's mana. He continues, saying that the amount and type of mana create infinite variations for that attack. Then the master says his fireball has evolved, but it still lacks the ultimate power. Elkiroid states that mana is the source of all desires and unleashes his ultimate fireball, which carries his dreams. He says Taejun can't reach that level if he only wishes to get stronger for the sake of it. Taejun loses his balance and yells, reminding the master he promised to go easy on him. The master instructs him to defend himself with everything he has and to reveal who he is and what he truly desires. The massive attack surges toward Taejun. He faces the attack and questions why he wanted to become stronger in the first place. A memory shows that for 7 years his suffering was endless, but he trained even harder when others cast him aside. The reason why he was able to keep pushing himself so hard, even though no one acknowledged him or cared about him, it was because he wanted to prove that his years of hard work were not in vain. He declares that he hasn't been compensated for all his effort, sweat, and tears, and he isn't satisfied yet. Then, he unleashes his energy against the master's attack, determined to keep moving forward until he can accept himself. Elkiroid faces the flame coming toward him. He says that although it's weak, he can feel the young man's true desire. The master wonders if the boy has finally found an answer. He dispels the attack with a gesture and declares the lesson is over. Elkiroid tells Taejun that he finally seems to have found his path, while explaining that he lacks the strength to handle such power. Taejun collapses on the ground, exhausted, admitting he was almost defeated. The Tower Master says, just as I thought. Holding the item, he comments that it has a very complex mana path. Taejun is surprised to learn that the restoration will take 8 to 12 hours. Elkiroid explains that the restoration process is meticulous and requires great mental strength. He warns that since his consciousness and energy will be focused on the item, he won't be able to move the entire time. Finally, he asks if Taejun would be kind enough to stand guard. Taejun agrees, saying it's no big deal. The master says he'll leave the task to him, and Taejun asks him to start immediately. Then, Elkiroid begins the process. He channels his energy into the item. The master starts chanting a mantra, leaving Taejun and Addie confused about whether he's a Buddhist. Taejun wonders why he needs to stand guard since there's no one else around. He complains about how long it's taking and decides to take a nap, since there's nothing to do. He explains that he doesn't see any monsters nearby and can't stand guard for 8 hours straight. Addy decides to take a break too, and Taijin asks to be woken up when the time comes. 3 hours later, he mutters something about the master in his sleep. He continues dreaming and says that if the person insists, he can't refuse. A spider-like creature crawls onto his chest as he says thank you. Suddenly, Taijin's eyes snap open. He's startled by the creature on his chest and screams, calling it disgusting. With a single strike, he neutralizes the creature. Taijin recovers from the shock and wonders what a monster was doing there. Then, more creatures emerge from the shadows and he questions where they came from, since the master is supposed to have control over them. He wonders if this is a dimensional shift and if those are void monsters. It's explained that void monsters wander between dimensions and occasionally appear when they sense the mana from dungeons. Taijin realizes they're after the master's mana. He gets up, saying the old man was right to ask for protection, and that he was getting bored of napping anyway. Then he charges toward the creatures to fight. With a single blow, he lands a direct hit on one of the monsters. He continues to fight the swarm, but Addy warns him to look in another direction. Taijin turns his head to see the new threat. A giant spider-like creature appears and he complains that he hates spiders. He unleashes a barrage of fireballs, yelling for them to stay away from his precious item. The attack surges toward the monsters. The creatures are hit, and he says that was a close call. Taijin declares that he, Li Taijin, will always protect his items at all costs. Addy asks what's going on, and Taijin explains the monsters must have come from another dimension, since they appear where there's mana. A portal opens above them, releasing a swarm of creatures. He stares at the scene, completely shocked. Addy alerts him to the huge number of monsters advancing on the master, and he agrees. He realizes he can't handle the situation alone and prepares for a summoning. Then Taijin summons Iratus, who reports ready for duty. Taijin orders them to protect the muscular old man from all those spiders, and his servant replies, "No questions asked." He commands his servant to take position, and Iratus advances with his shield at the ready. The battle against the void spiders drags on for hours. The creatures kept pouring out of the portal even after being defeated, growing in number and size. 4 hours later, Elkiroid remains focused on the item, surrounded by the defeated monsters. Exhausted and weakened, Taijin begs for it to stop. He climbs a pile of defeated creatures, only to face an even larger horde. A giant void spider descends from the portal, heading straight for him. Iratus warns him of an attack from behind, but Taijin realizes the danger too late. With no energy left to dodge, Taijin hears someone yell for him to get out of the way. A swift strike neutralizes the creature before it can reach him. The monster falls behind him, and Taijin wonders about that familiar attack. A new person appears, saying they wondered what kind of person was making such a mess, only to find it was him. Taijin recognizes him, along with the girl by his side. The newcomer greets him and asks if he's okay. As one of his friends attacks him, the other hands him a potion. Taijin asks how they found him. Jinhyuk then asks if he has any idea what's happening outside the gate. He explains that the dungeon has gone completely haywire, causing monsters to escape and forcing an evacuation of the area. He curses his bad luck as a national emergency happened right on his day off. Taijin finally understands the whole situation. If the number of monsters exceeds a dungeon's limit, its mana becomes unstable, and the creatures escape through the gates. This phenomenon is known as a dungeon break and was the cause of the catastrophe many years ago. Sienna then asks what happened there and who the older man is. Taijin looks back in the master's direction. He fumbles, unsure how to explain the situation. He says he can explain in detail later, but that the man is the dungeon's protector NPC and is currently recovering. Taijin concludes the monsters likely appeared because they sense his mana. For now, he suggests they defeat all the spiders to stabilize the dungeon again. Jinhyuk replies that they don't need to be told, as they were already planning on it. Taijin suggests they fight together, and Jinhyuk agrees, just asking him not to get in the way. Jinhyuk attacks the monsters with his spear. The electrical attack spreads, hitting several creatures. He remarks on the monster's weakness, but one of them charges to attack him from behind. A swift strike intercepts the creature. The monster is defeated before it can reach him. Sienna warns him not to let his guard down. Although they're weak, their numbers are overwhelming. She continues, saying that if they hesitate for a second, they'll be done for. Jinhyuk retorts that he knows what he's doing, but she doesn't seem to believe him. Iratus appears between them and agrees with Sienna. He then declares that it's crucial to cooperate and hold their positions, as they must be relentless. The pair is speechless at the skeleton's appearance. They ask who he is as more monsters advance toward the master. Taijin intercepts the creatures approaching Elkiroid. He observes the situation and says it's not unusual for void monsters to come after mana, but the number of monsters is something never seen before. The ground trembles and Jinhyuk wonders what's happening. He then yells for the others to look, as something is coming out of the ground. A giant creature emerges from the earth, and Taijin asks if that's the boss. He realizes that's why the monsters kept spawning. The status screen reveals the creature is the Void Spider Queen, responsible for producing the monsters. Taijin realizes the spiders didn't come from another dimension, only the queen did. He comments to Sion that the queen is the host, and she asks if he noticed too. He says she won't be easy to defeat and that there must be a reason she revealed herself. It could be a trap to lure them in. Jinhyuk states they can't just stand around now that the host has appeared. He charges at the monsters, saying they'll be defeated if they don't fight back. Taejun agrees, saying he's not wrong, but they can't attack recklessly or defend forever. The best option now is something else. He points to Iratus and orders him to attack, leaving the skeleton stunned. Iratus asks if he's being sent to his doom, and Taejun simply confirms it, asking if there's a problem. Taejun reminds him that he can come back to life at any moment. He promises to revive Iratus if he's defeated, but the skeleton is shocked to realize his master thinks so little of him. Then Taejun scolds him, saying that if he's a summon, he should act like one. Jinhyuk and Seona yell for him to go check if it's a trap, but Iratus complains that he's gravely injured. The group urges him to advance and attack the queen. Iratus finally understands the situation. He realizes that from the beginning, he was nothing more than a tool. Then he charges toward the queen, crying out to his father in the heavens. He prays for strength and strikes the creature with a powerful blow. But something confuses him. Perched on the queen's back, completely unharmed, he asks what's going on since nothing happened. Taejun says he knew it would be a big deal, but then yells for him to look closely. The creature's flesh begins to writhe around his weapon, and Iratus asks what the spider is doing to his holy mace. He tries to pull the mace away from its body. The group watches the scene, and Taejun wonders why the queen was trying to absorb his servant's weapon. Taejun has a sudden revelation about the enemy. He yells to his friends that the spider queen can absorb mana and they need to fight without using their skills. Jinhyuk thinks the idea is ridiculous, but Seona agrees with Taejun. She explains that she noticed the number of spiders only increases when they use stronger attacks. Seona concludes the queen has been feeding on their mana the entire time. Jinhyuk complains, saying that of all the dungeons he's ever visited, this is the worst. He understands they need to stop using skills, and Taejun reinforces that they can't even expose their mana. Jinhyuk charges forward, declaring he doesn't need mana to defeat these small creatures. Seona asks Taejun if everything is okay, and he gives a thumbs up, saying they're doing great. He announces he's going after the queen and tells them to keep fighting. Jinhyuk accuses him of trying to steal the show again. He yells at Taejun not to fail, as the young man remembers that Iratus' attack confirmed the queen is after mana. He realizes she doesn't absorb just any type, but only certain variations of mana. So he approaches the creature and asks if it's still hungry. He suggests that maybe the creature would like a taste of his fireball. His friends react, and Jinhyuk questions him for using his skill after telling them not to. He launches the attack, and Jinhyuk asks if he's trying to get them buried in spiders. The spider queen opens its mouth to absorb the attack. It begins to absorb the energy of the approaching fireball. Taejun remembers that mana reflects true desires and that its characteristics can vary infinitely. And if he can hide that desire, it's also possible to conceal the mana's properties. The attack hits the queen, who can't understand what's happening. Jinhyuk asks what's up with that fireball, while Taejun yells for the creature to open wide. He then declares that this is a perfectly cooked fireball. Jinhyuk and Seona react to the creature as Taejun asks about the fireball and yells for it to open its mouth. Then he calls it a perfectly cooked fireball. The attack hits the Void Spider Queen head-on. She's thrown violently backward. Jinhyuk wonders what that was, as he thought the queen could absorb their mana. The creature writhes on the ground. A system notification informs them that she took critical damage from absorbing impure mana, disabling her ability. Seona realizes that Taejun's fireball had a type of mana the queen couldn't absorb. She wonders how, since it takes a 5-circle mage to alter mana types. Seona then asks if Taejun has really evolved that much. He warns everyone that the queen can no longer absorb mana. Taejun urges them to finish her off, and Seona charges forward. Jinhyuk states he doesn't know what's going on, but he decides they need to get rid of the spider first and attacks it. Seona asks Jinhyuk to keep the creature pinned down. She then thinks that Taejun shouldn't have any mana left. Seona rushes forward, declaring she'll finish the creature with her own hands. The Void Spider Queen is hit head-on. Jinhyuk turns and asks if it's over. But Taejun replies that it's not over yet, as he forms a new sphere in his hands. He declares he'll use every last drop of mana he has left. Then, he unleashes a massive attack to neutralize it completely. Taejun approaches the site of the explosion. He says the intense battle is finally over, but they must remain vigilant until the end. Suddenly, Iratus delivers a final blow to the queen, saying that even an extinguished fire should be checked. The creature's body disappears, and a system notification announces it has been defeated. The skeleton introduces himself as Iratus, the one who is always on guard. The group watches the scene, and Seona calls him a show-off. Looking at the street, Taejun wonders what that thing is. He notices the small creature looks familiar, and the system identifies it as a spider queen's hatchling. Min appears and says the queen must have laid eggs, expressing her discontent as the hatchling squirms on Taejun's clothes. A system notification informs Taejun that he can produce void silk threads with the spider queen's hatchling. He comments that this could be useful if he can use the infinite production mechanism correctly. Then, the system warns that the hatchling is absorbing his mana. Another notification pops up, revealing the creature now sees him as its mother. Taejun decides to store it in the salsa market, but Min scolds him for using the system that way. Seona approaches and says she thinks the other spiders have been eliminated. He gives a thumbs up, commenting that the dungeon is calming down and the tower master should recover soon, which surprises Siona. She asks that now that everything is settled, he tell them what's going on. The girl continues, asking what happened there and why he went to that place. Jinhyuk agrees that it makes no sense for a hunter with his skills to visit such an easy dungeon. Elkiroid then asks if Taejun has a secret he can't tell, making him flinch. The tower master reflects that he can't admit the dungeon break was his fault, but he thinks he has an excuse ready as Taejun denies having any secrets to hide. The young man claims he came because he knew the dungeon break would happen, as his priority is to protect civilians. Siona questions how he could have known that in advance. Siona comments that the reason for dungeon breaks is still a mystery. Taejun then explains that he didn't know on his own because someone told him, making her curious. He begins to say who it was, and the scene shifts to the headquarters of the Radiant Spectres Guild. Dozens of camera flashes go off simultaneously. A reporter asks Taejun if it's true that he predicted the dungeon break before it happened. Another person mentions his great contribution to subduing the monsters and asks what's going on. Taejun states that all he did was put the safety of the people first. Then he gives the credit for the prediction to Guild Master Go, who reacts with surprise. He informs the reporters that he knows absolutely nothing about the incident and that questions should be directed to the master. The crowd of reporters falls silent for a moment. Taejun turns to the man and asks if it's not true, but he looks confused. The young man then reminds him that he was the one who told him when the dungeon break would happen. The guild master realizes the young man is trying to make him take responsibility for his mess. As the man stammers, unsure how he could know something like that, Taejun announces he has to go take care of a job. He wishes him good luck with the reporters and runs off, while the guild master desperately asks him to wait. The door to the vice leader's office closes. Taejun throws himself into his chair, saying he's safe for now, but Addie Min asks if it'll be okay since he left everything to the guild master. He reassures her, stating that everything is fine and she doesn't need to worry. The young man then reveals he specified in the contract that the employer must fulfill the duties of the employee. He justifies that the master does nothing anyway and that he even boosted the guild's reputation, making it a win-win, which leads Addie to call him a devil. Addie reminds him that he managed to complete the explosive growth mission and will no longer have to stress about time. Taejun agrees it was a close call, as any delay would have put him in big trouble, but he reveals that all that acting and bluffing earned him the Dragon Claw gauntlets. Addie Min is impressed by the item's enchantment, which ignores half of the target's physical defense. He says all that hard work paid off as he equips the gauntlet, admitting he didn't expect such a big boost. The young man reflects that the mission's risk was extremely high, but the reward for success is immense. He concludes that if he keeps completing these missions on time, his growth rate will be unimaginably fast. Taejun tells Addie that while training with the old man, he realized he had been living the past few years without a dream. She assumes he didn't have any big goals, since all he cared about was money. He agrees and adds that if you're going to have a goal, it's better to aim high so you still get good returns, even if you only reach halfway. Taejun reveals to her that his goal is to become one of the greatest hunters. Addie Min reacts with surprise, but he assures her he's serious, as aiming high requires unwavering determination. Then the young man sits down and begins to explain what he needs most to get there. With a smile, he shows the spider hatchling and declares that what he obviously needs is money. The spiderling shivers and begins to produce a silk thread. Taejun sits on the floor and says the creature repulses him, but he holds the thread and declares that this is an extraordinary discovery. He thought it would be a basic material, but discovers that the hatchling can infinitely produce an item of great value. The young man then celebrates, for the creature is basically a source of golden eggs. He realizes that continuous production requires a constant source of mana. Someone knocks on the office door and asks if they can come in. Taejun authorizes the person's entry. Master Go enters, complaining about the reporters, and asks what Taejun did to attract them there. The master despairs, as he cannot think of a legitimate excuse for a beginner dungeon break. Taejun reassures him, saying not to worry as he is doing well. He then hugs him and asks him to keep it up, but Master Go still questions if everything will be okay. The master fears the reporters will discover the lie, but Taejun says he still needs to learn how the world works. He explains that what matters is not how something was done, but what was done. Now, the story is about a guild master who foresaw the catastrophe and a hunter who fought to protect the people. Taejun explains that this victory will be remembered and will positively impact the guild's reputation, which had been falling in recent years, and he concludes that it will bring more profit to the Radiant Spectres. Master Go agrees with him. In another location, the master asks why Taejun called him to that space that was barely used. Taejun says he was thinking of making a workspace there and that the master can help him with one thing. He then offers the small hatchling for the master to take a look at. The young man explains that it is the hatchling of the Queen of Void Spiders and can produce silk threads infinitely with enough mana. He continues, saying it is a rare ingredient that costs $1 million for a small amount, leaving Master Go surprised. The master gets agitated thinking about the total value, and Taejun says it seems he finally understood. Taejun asks him to take care of the hatchling, introducing him as the creature's new father. The place begins to be filled with spider webs. Master Go offers some mana fragments on a tray. He places them on the floor for the spider, which is now giant, and wishes it to enjoy the meal. The creature looms over him and he retreats. The spider devours the fragments while Master Go screams and apologizes. He wonders how the creature could have grown so fast. Master Go fears that if it gets bigger, it could damage the entire building, and his phone starts ringing. He answers Taejun's call, who asks how things are going. Master Go replies that everything is fine and that he has already collected plenty of silk, and Taejun asks him to keep up the good work. Addie Min asks if she can ask a question, and he allows her to proceed. She questions if it is safe to be near the creature, but Taejun tells her not to worry so much. Taejun states that his little spider doesn't bite, but Master Go thinks he must be joking. Taejun asks him to continue taking care of the spider, as he will go on a business trip, which leaves Master Go curious about the destination. He reveals he is going to visit Dahua Island, where the guild's founding master is. Master Go's scream is so loud it surprises Taejun, who asks if there is a problem. He explains that it is a Class 1 danger zone, restricted to S-rank hunters, and that unauthorized entry is prohibited. Master Go says a pass or the company of an authorized person is needed, but that he hasn't been able to contact his uncle lately. Taejun repeats the information, saying he understands the situation. He then tells Master Go not to worry, as he has many connections and will find a way. Master Go asks why he wants to go to Dahua Island all of a sudden, and if he needs to discuss something urgent with his uncle. Taejun replies that he just wants to pay a visit as the new guild vice leader, and that he heard he prepared a gift. He then continues to speak. A quest notification reveals he needs to acquire a blood magic skill, which makes him think he really needs to find him as soon as possible. The remaining time for the quest continues to decrease. The scene changes to the Blue Lotus Guild headquarters. Someone knocks on an office door and Yeon Waseo, who is at her desk, authorizes entry. Taejun enters the room with Addie Min and greets Master Seo. She greets him back and he replies that he's fine as always. Yeon Waseo mentions having read the news about how he prevented a major dungeon break. She comments that it seems he attracts trouble, but he says he was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. The woman then closes the document she was reading and says it's a pity. Yeonhwa regrets that if she knew he would join the Radiant Spectres, she would have been more insistent in recruiting him. She adds that she wasn't the only one disappointed, as he demonstrated his powers to many influential figures. Yeonhwa reveals that Master Cha and Master Ma were impressed with him, but Taejun says he had no idea. Yeonhwa says it's okay, as it seems he always had an interest in dark magic, so it makes sense for him to be with them. She then asks how she can help him today, and he begins to explain. Taejun says he is trying to visit Daiwa Island tomorrow, but he doesn't have authorization unless an S-rank hunter accompanies him. He then invites her to go with him, in case she is free, but Yeonhwa refuses, explaining that she already has scheduled appointments and won't be able to go. The news shakes him, as this ruins his plans, but she promises she will make arrangements for him to be able to visit the place. He asks if he can go even without her company, and Yeonhwa explains that if one of her guild members goes along, it should be fine. Taejun expresses his relief upon hearing the news. Suddenly, she remembers she wanted to give him something. Yeonhwa offers him a card as thanks for helping solve the exam incident. He thanks her and asks what it is about, and she explains that due to media exposure, he can no longer maintain his privacy. The woman reveals the card is the key to a luxury apartment built for high-ranking hunters, with top-notch security. She says she thought it would be a good gift given the circumstances, and asks what he thought. With the card in hand, he asks if he can call her Mrs. Seo. Yeonhwa replies that she doesn't think she's old enough to receive that title. The scene takes place at the Bone King's residence on Dahua Island. A dark voice enters the room and announces that the time has come for the Bone King. She declares she can no longer contain her insatiable desire. Then, the figure demands he hurry and hand over his strength, for otherwise she will dominate him completely while imprisoning him right there. Seagulls fly over the island's harbor. The mission timer shows 3 days remaining, and Taejun realizes his deadline. He calculates that he needs to learn a specific spell within 2 days to maintain his skills. Taejun considers that even if he learns as fast as possible from the Bone King, time is short. He then asks Addie if a skill should be able to affect the functions of the status window. He remembers that both Spellbreaker and Scanner were added by explosive growth. He questions if it's normal for a skill from a former employee to modify the company's system so much. Addie explains that she reported this to her superiors, but they took no action. She was only instructed to keep an eye on it, and Taejun understands the situation. He concludes that for now, the skill poses no threat to the company. After completing the Gauntlet mission, he remembers receiving a new function called Monman Wiki. It's a feature that provides all the details of a monster, including its weaknesses. At some point, explosive growth began to expand the functions of the status window itself. He decides to make the most of the skill until a young woman greets him. She waves and says he's even more handsome than the last time she saw him. Taejun asks if Hunter Seren is the one accompanying him, and she confirms, saying it's an obvious choice. Then she starts looking for something in her bag. Seren takes out her phone and states that this is an opportunity she can't miss. She starts taking pictures with him, commenting on his fame and asking to post them on social media. He then asks what she thinks she's doing. Taejun tells her to stop taking pictures and questions why she's calling him Appa, since they're not close. Suddenly, a young man bows deeply and greets Chief Taejun. Jian Kang introduces himself, saying he's at the chief's service, which leaves Taejun and Seren bewildered. Seren asks him what he's doing there, and Jian replies that a junior must support his senior. He declares that from the moment his life was saved, he swore to serve him for all eternity. Jian asks for permission to serve him, but Taejun says he can't just decide something like that, as Seren holds him back. Someone on a boat yells for them to stop wasting time. The ship's captain, Young-soo Kim, warns that he doesn't have all day. The boat then departs, moving away from the harbor. Once on board, the captain grumbles that he wouldn't go near the cursed island if Young hadn't asked, and Taejun asks if there's a problem. The captain questions how he can call himself a hunter without knowing what kind of monsters inhabit the island. Taejun replies that he knows many sirens live in the area. The captain confirms, adding that it's the season when they become more aggressive. He explains that the monsters become extremely violent during this period. Furthermore, they are sensitive and will attack in groups if their territory is invaded. The man warns that the path is too dangerous, so he'll have to take a detour. As the captain says it will take longer to avoid angering them, Taejun interrupts, saying there's no need. He then asks the captain to press on through the fastest route. The captain gets worked up and asks if he's gone crazy, as they could be swarmed. But Taejun reassures him, guaranteeing that hundreds of sirens couldn't even scratch the ship. He asks the man to trust him and take the fastest route. The captain refuses, saying he simply can't do that. The man says he has a family to support, but Taejun interrupts him with the word double. He then offers to pay double what Master CEO is paying. The captain yells that he won't be bought with a bribe and that he won't do it, no matter how much they offer. Taejun yells that the payment will be quadruple. The captain is shocked by the offer. Then, the man shouts to go full throttle and speeds up the boat. Taejun celebrates and challenges the monsters to appear. Seren approaches and tells him to be careful anyway. She explains that it's hard to predict where the sea monsters will attack from. He replies that she's not wrong, but she doesn't need to worry. A system notification detects multiple enemies, and Taejun claims to know exactly where they all are. He warns that 3 are coming from the right and 5 from the left, which surprises her. Taejun says he'll handle the left side and asks Hunter Seren to take the right. The sirens oddly from the water, and she realizes he wasn't kidding. Seren says she doesn't know how he knew, but she decides to trust him. She then fires an arrow at the creatures. Taejun decides to wait until the monsters get very close. He waits for the exact moment they're about to board. Taejun activates his Gauntlet's ability, which now imbues his attacks with a new force and ignores the target's physical defense. He then unleashes a powerful combination strike against one of the sirens. Attacking a creature, he says it's a waste to just knock them back into the water. Taejun declares that he wants all of their mana fragments. Jian Kang watches him from a distance and confirms that the rumors were true. He remembers the rumors that Chief Taejun uses the Ascending Dragon Fist technique. Taejun turns to him, who wonders how much the young man actually saw. Taejun tries to explain that it's a different martial art, but Jian states that he's no longer his chief. He points at Taejun and declares that from that moment on, he is his rival. Taejun asks why he keeps deciding these things on his own. Jian then leaps from the boat to demonstrate the true technique, and Seren warns him that it's too dangerous. The boat finally approaches Manhwa Island. On the beach, a man wonders if Hunter Taejun is coming to the island today. He then yells at Master Go on the phone, who makes excuses, saying he couldn't get in touch. The man scolds him for not using the crystal orb and hangs up, leaving Master Go to regret his mistake. The man on the beach laments the terrible timing, as the monsters won't let the newcomer pass unscathed. As he considers taking action, Taejun shouts from the boat, apologizing to Master Bone King for the delay. He explains that it took longer than expected because they had many monsters to capture along the way. Taejun then introduces himself as the vice leader of the Radiant Spectres, offering his regards to the founding master. Taejun arrives on his boat and tells the Bone King Master that he hopes he's been well. The founding master asks, surprised, if he defeated all the mermaids during their active period. On board, Young-soo Kim comments on how chaotic the hunt was. The captain adds that Taejun hunted even the deep swimming creatures as if he had radar, and that there can't be many left. Taejun goes down to the beach, explaining that he defeated all the ones he saw, but he isn't sure if he neutralized every single one. He speculates that some might have remained in the deeper parts of the sea, but the founding master replies that this is more than enough. The older man explains that the survivors will soon cease to exist, as they'll run out of food. He continues, saying that for some reason they can't dive into the greatest depths, and Taejun realizes he might have permanently driven them from the area by accident. The founding master just starts to say, well, and then adds that there is an exception. Just as a navigation system detects a hostile enemy. Suddenly, an explosion in the water catches everyone's attention. A huge sea creature bursts through the surface of the water. Jian Kang and Taijun watch its appearance, and Jian Kang recognizes the threatening presence. Taijun tells Saren the enemy's location, and she confirms she understood the order. The young woman gets into position and declares she will immobilize them. With a gesture, she invokes a technique and traps the sea creature in ice, but the monster begins to break free, and the girl reacts to the strain. Then, the creature breaks completely free, shattering the ice prison. Saren starts convulsing on the boat, and someone asks what's wrong. She wonders if it could be magic immunity, and asks how a B-rank monster like a mermaid could have such a powerful passive ability. Saren then warns Taijun that this is no ordinary mermaid. The creature leaps from the water, charging toward them. Yongsoo Kim points, shouting and asking what that thing is. It's identified as the Mermaid King A. The captain says he never knew a giant like that lived in these seas. Taijun faces the opponent, recognizing it as a Mermaid King. Addie Min explains she can't use her fireball, as it will be reflected, and that freezing doesn't work to immobilize it. She suggests the best thing to do is retreat to form a strategy, but the founding master says it's a shame, as they served him well. He declares it seems to be the end of the line for them, as a substance drips from his cane and Taijun calls out to him. The founding master then orders the young hunters to step back, and states he will take care of it personally. With emotion, he makes the substance rise from the water and bind the Mermaid King. He then addresses the creature, questioning if it dares to bare its fangs at its own master. The monster writhes under the pressure of the technique. The creature continues to struggle against the restraint. The founding master declares that the creature will be stopped and intensifies the power of his ability. The creature is subjugated by the force of the attack. Then, the monster is defeated and falls back into the water before the group. Saren, on board the boat, comments that it's unbelievable he defeated an A-class monster so easily. Taejun watches, thinking about the incredible power of that magic and its magic-piercing property. He concludes that regardless of the mission, it would be very useful to learn that technique. The founding master states that with the monsters neutralized, Dahua Island will be at peace for now. He turns to Taejun and welcomes him to the island, calling him the guild's vice master. He continues, saying he wanted to personally deliver the gift for his appointment and appreciates that Taejun came to meet him. Saren watches everything from the boat while Taejun and Jian Kang remain standing on the beach. The founding master invites everyone into his mansion. Inside, Taejun comments that he never imagined finding the Bone King on an island like this. Yeon Waseo tells Saren she now understands why Master Seo kept it a secret, while Taejun asks if the girl didn't know the Bone King lived here. Saren replies that she didn't, as she would never imagine one of Korea's legendary hunters living on a deserted island. Yeonhwa asks Taejun if he saw that display of power, and Saren adds that he defeated the Mermaid King with a single attack. She claims it was one of the coolest things she's ever seen and that not even Master Seo could defeat that monster so easily, but Jian Kang says it's to be expected from the hero of the catastrophe. Then Jian Kang clenches his fist, declaring that his master is much more powerful. Someone calls him immature, leaving him with an annoyed expression. Later, Saren is shown to her room and thanks the maid. Taejun says goodbye to Jian Kang and Saren, thanking them for accompanying him. He tells them he needs to talk to the Bone King Master and that they can go rest. The young man knocks on a door and a voice invites him in. Upon opening the door, he greets the founding master, who is sitting at a table. The older man asks how he's finding the room, and Taejun replies that it's great and the mansion is very elegant. The founding master replies that's good to hear. As he stands, he invites Taejun to follow him to receive his gift, and the young man readily agrees. They both begin to walk down the hallway. As they descend a staircase, the older man says he heard the news that he prevented a catastrophic disaster in Macheon. Taejun replies it was just luck, but the founding master advises him not to be so humble in front of him, and to save that for the reporters. The young man insists he wasn't being humble, as the mess was created by him. He then says that Guild Master Youngmin had the hardest time, but the founding master asks if he's referring to his foolish nephew. He explains that in the 3 years since his nephew became the head, the guild has never been worse, with unpaid salaries and tax evasion. But now, thanks to Taejun, the guild has earned respect as one of the heroes, and his nephew is the one who should be thanking him. Taejun reacts, realizing that Youngmin Go sounds more incompetent than he imagined. So he asks the master why he left the guild to his nephew. The young man adds that even if they were family, he knew his nephew wasn't ready for the role. The founding master stops and begins to explain the reason. He reveals it was because he had grown weak. Then the older man tells them to hurry, as they can talk later, and Taejun reflects on what he heard. The young man concludes that he's not wrong, as even the strongest hunters grow old and weak one day. But then Taejun activates his reader to analyze the founding master. The system reports that the information is unavailable, as the target's level is much higher than his. He then wonders what that means, since there are few hunters in the country he can't scan. He couldn't even see the information for Su Hyun Cha, Taepyeong Ma, and Yeon Waseo, no matter how strong he got. He knows the Bone King is the hero of the catastrophe, but he wonders if he's still as strong as the others at his age. Taejun then wonders what secrets the Bone King of the underworld might be hiding. Upon entering a new room, Taejun and Addie Min react with surprise. They find themselves in an immense underground hall filled with items. The young man is amazed to realize the founding master was hiding all this in his basement. The older man says it's not much compared to the 4 great guilds, but that Taejun's gift is in here. He then invites him to choose an item, explaining he can't give them all away due to the penalties they carry. The young man then selects the skull of Magnetus. Taejun analyzes the S-class item's information and considers it very good. He observes that the other items here also have better stats than many of the rarest items in existence. He thinks that this is a ridiculously good offer for most hunters, but for him, there's nothing here he really wants. So the young man turns and asks the master if he has any items related to crimson magic. The founding master is surprised and asks if he's interested in that area, and Taejun explains it would be useful since he's a radiant specter. He continues saying the magic has magic penetration and costs no mana, making it very effective in dungeons. The older man apologizes, but says he has no crimson magic items here and asks him to choose something else. Taejun is confused, but the founding master turns and says he will go prepare their food. The founding master tells him to feel free to take whatever he wants and then leaves the room. Taejun feels something is strange and wonders if he's hiding something, and Adi confirms that he is. Suddenly, Taejun throws himself on the floor, declaring that now only crimson magic can satisfy him. He then crawls on the floor, begging to be taught crimson magic. Adi suggests it doesn't have to be an item, and that he could simply ask the Lord Bone King to teach him. Taejun turns and explains that crimson magic isn't something you learn just by asking someone to teach you. He explains that the technique requires a passive skill called crimson power to be activated, making it impossible to use without it. Kneeling, he laments that he planned on getting a skill book to unlock crimson power, but then the lantern function discovers a hidden mechanism. The lantern function then activates, revealing a specific spot in the hall, much to their surprise. Taejun is surprised by the functionality, and Adi explains that he added it because of a dark dungeon, asking if it isn't useful. Taejun then approaches and drags a heavy stone slab to the side. He confirms there really was something hidden and finds a button, but Adi says he has a feeling he shouldn't press it, questioning if it might be a bomb. Taejun laughs, saying it's the 21st century and no one attacks people with bombs anymore. He adds that he can't resist and presses the button, declaring that even if he gets nothing, he has to take the risk. The entire hall begins to shake, and as Taejun turns, Adi screams about an air raid alert. After the tremor, a pedestal rises from the floor and Taejun asks what it is. On the pedestal is the Crimson Tome, a forbidden book that requires a great sacrifice to use crimson magic and unlock crimson power. Taejun grabs the book with satisfaction, exclaiming that it was here all along and calling it his baby. Later, during dinner, a servant asks the founding master if this will really be enough. The older man tells Taejun he wishes he could give him a grander possession gift, but the young man replies that this is perfect and thanks him. Holding the Onyx of Bandur, Taejun explains that he needed resistance to mental corruption. The founding master then replies that if this is his wish, he will not stop him. He says his goodbyes, mentioning that it's getting late and wishing everyone a good night, while the guests thank him for the meal. The island is shown at night. In his room, the founding master appears to be in pain as a voice says that this reminds him of the old days. The dark entity asks if that boy, Taejun Lee, doesn't seem quite eager to learn crimson magic. The voice continues, saying he had the same look the founding master had when they first met, the will to sacrifice anything for power. The founding master shouts that the boy has nothing to do with the entity, as a contract can only be made through a forbidden tome. The entity then says there is one thing the Bone King doesn't know. It reveals that Taejun Lee has already acquired the Crimson Tome, leaving the founding master in shock. The founding master asks what the entity said, and it replies that it senses a new host has been born for it. The entity declares that it can no longer satisfy its hunger with the energy he offers, as his old body is insufficient to house its power. It then announces that it will borrow the Bone King's body for a while. Later, the door to Saren's room opens slowly in the middle of the night. The founding master approaches her bed as a voice accuses him of feeding her inferior items when he could have offered better meals. Saren continues to sleep soundly in her bed. He reaches out his hand and tells the human not to be upset because although it wasn't part of the plan, his hunger needed to be sated. Then, the founding master prepares to take the girl's essence. Suddenly, he turns upon hearing someone call him master. At the door, Taejun asks what he's doing up so late. The founding master replies that he could ask him the same thing. The young man explains that he couldn't sleep because he felt bad about what he did and came to apologize. Taejun bows and reveals that the gift he chose earlier wasn't what he really wanted. He then shows the forbidden tome he took. He apologizes for taking it without permission, but states he has his reasons for needing to learn crimson magic, and he adds that he would sacrifice anything to learn it. The founding master covers one of his eyes and asks if he's sure. He warns him that there could be unimaginable consequences if he chooses to delve into crimson magic. Taejun replies that it's fine, as he's prepared for anything. With a smile, the founding master simply agrees. He then says they should begin, and the young man asks what he means by that. A dark entity emerges from the founding master, and a voice asks the human if he can hear it. Taejun backs away, clutching the book, and asks who he is. The voice introduces itself as a great sorcerer who dominated the world and reigned over countless eras long ago. It continues, saying it will grant him new powers by taking its place in his body, and that all he needs to do is offer small tributes. The entity then instructs him to proceed with the contract as the book's pages flip and a system notice warns of an unauthorized access. Suddenly, dark tendrils shoot out from the tome and grab Taejun's arm. He yells that he heard nothing about this and asks what the entity means by entering his body. The entity replies that it's too late for regrets, as his body is now its own. As he's pulled by the tendrils, a system alert informs him that the unauthorized user is synchronizing with his status window, and he screams for it to stop. Taejun resists, stating that he still has much to accomplish. The entity thanks Jeonho-go for guiding it to this wonderful body. It notes how the young, healthy body far surpasses that of the founding master, but Taejun's body begins to move uncontrollably. The entity wonders what's happening as the movements continue. Then it questions why the body isn't obeying it. The entity wonders what's happening. Then the body starts moving strangely, and it questions why he isn't obeying. Moments before, just before dinner time, the scene returns to the basement. Taejun holds the book, and Addie asks why the master would hide it like that. She says she doesn't know, but feels he shouldn't touch it. Taejun deduces the master planned to never show the book to anyone, as life force magic carries a high risk. He continues explaining that if used incorrectly, the user's life could be in danger. The young man observes the book intently, and he reads the description, which says the user must pay a price. He notes that while many items have penalties, few warn the user so clearly. Taejun then wonders just how bad the price would be. He turns to Addie and asks if similar items exist in other dimensions. She explains that these types of ancient tomes usually attract experienced collectors. Addie then suggests he put it up for appraisal on the parsley market. Taejun agrees, realizing he could use the parsley market. Taejun then decides to log into the parsley market. He begins typing his question into a panel. The young man asks if anyone knows the item and says he'll pay for a detailed description. Quickly, a user named Know-It-All requests a chat, and Taejun is surprised by the speed. The user asks if the item is for sale, but Taejun replies that for now, he just wants information. In the chat, Know-It-All reveals that it's a soulbound tome. He explains that it's a forbidden book that grants an ability in exchange for the user's life, and that the contract is a trap. Taejun and Addie react in shock upon learning the price to be paid as life itself. The young man asks what that means exactly. Know-It-All clarifies that the book's sorcerer's consciousness enters the user's body as soon as the contract is made. He adds that it's possible to use the sorcerer's magic, but you must offer life force and mana for the rest of your life. Taejun realizes the sorcerer uses the book to move between bodies and wonders how that could be possible. Then, the user says he noticed something else and that the book is of terrible quality. Taejun asks what he means, and Know-It-All explains the book is so old it wouldn't get past the antivirus of his status window above version 2.0. The young man gets the hint and thanks him for the information. Taejun points forward and sends the payment. Then the system confirms an unauthorized access attempt, activating a firewall that makes Taejun's body contoured. He points at the entity and taunts it for trying to invade the latest status window. Taejun declares that a virus has been detected as the entity is forced out, and it reacts in disbelief. A digital barrier with access denied blocks the entity, which wonders how a status window like that can even exist. The entity questions if he was planning this from the start and asks who he is. A force throws him backward. Lying on the ground, Taejun looks up. The system's firewall blocks the virus's access through an unauthorized route. The entity is repelled, finding the situation impossible. Taejun gets up and comments on the persistence of that smoke. He then places his hand on the book. The book opens and he acquires the Tome of Life Essence and the passive skill Demonic Essence. The explosive growth mission is completed, unlocking the communication horizon, and Taejun wonders what that could be. He gets the feeling the reward is useless, as the founding master, now fallen to the ground, calls out to him. Taejun supports the founding master and asks if he's okay. He replies that he's fine and then asks how the master feels. The older man questions what just happened, stating that he saw him making a contract with the entity. He continues, saying he saw the creature enter the young man's body with his own eyes. The master then asks how it's possible that nothing seems to be happening to him. He questions if Taejun really defeated Azel alone. The young man explains that all he did was refuse to listen to it. The founding master is confused by the answer. Taejun explains that he destroyed the contract at the last moment, and then the entity simply left his body. He says that although life force magic is useful, he didn't want to go as far as selling his soul. With a hand on his chest, the young man declares that true strength comes from within. Taejun adds that he doesn't know what happened to the entity. Perhaps it's wandering the underworld without a body. The founding master realizes he can no longer hear the entity's voice, nor feel its dark presence. He fought for 30 years to escape the contract, but this man succeeded in the most unbelievable way. Then, the founding master kneels and thanks Hunter Taejun. The founding master explains that during the catastrophe, he sought a power he shouldn't have to protect the world, even if it meant following the wrong path. But he says that after observing Taejun that day, he realized something. The master concludes that all the power he had gained was not truly his own. Taejun asks him not to cry, as he can't imagine the burden he carried for decades. He holds the older man's hand and states that even without life force magic, he is still very strong. The young man then advises him to free himself from the burden of the past, Master Bone King. Waking up to the noise, Saren turns on the light and complains that she can't sleep in peace until she notices their presence. She sits up in bed, surprised to see Hunter Taijun and the Master Bone King in her room. The girl then covers herself and screams, asking what the two of them are doing there. Taejun tries to explain, saying it's not what it looks like. Suddenly, the entire room begins to shake violently. Saren shouts, asking what's happening now, while Taejun recognizes the threat. A voice calls them all foolish mortals as tendrils emerge from the ground. The entity claims it's impossible to make it disappear as long as its soul remains in the world, and a structure begins to crack the wall. And then it declares that if it cannot possess a body, it will be reborn on the land through their life force. Then an S-class mythical entity, the Tree of Life Essence, is summoned. Saren wonders if that's a tree, as everyone stares at the creature. Taejun's system syncs and identifies the Tree of Life Essence, the most powerful creation of life force magic. The information reveals that the summoning requires an immense amount of life energy, or the magician themselves in extreme cases. Taejun realizes that since there are no people to use as a source, the magician must have offered themselves up. A large monstrous wolf appears on the island. Then several wolves begin to attack a barrier around the mansion. Saren asks about the strange tree and why the silver fangs are heading in that direction. The founding master states that they need to do something. Saren says the situation is getting dangerous and decides to wake up Hunter Jian, while Taejun prepares himself. The founding master walks toward the tree, declaring that it has already consumed countless souls, and he adds that it now seeks to take all the lives on the island as the wolves are absorbed. Calling the entity greedy, the older man summons a weapon made of bones. Jian Kang and Yang Wasio arrive running and ask what's happening. Jian questions if a gate is open nearby. Taejun turns to them and says he'll summarize everything quickly, as there's no time for explanations. Taejun points to the creature and reveals that the tree is the remnant of the magician who tormented the Master Bone King for decades. He continues, explaining that the entity tried to make him the next host but failed and has now returned to life. Yang Wasio asks what he means by the tree tormenting the master, and he explains that all the magic he used in the past was the power of that thing. The founding master laments not knowing that selling his soul to a dark entity would bring such catastrophic consequences. He apologizes to everyone, saying he has no right to be called a hero, but Jian Kang tells him not to say that. Saren prepares to use his skill. Yanhua tells him that even without life force magic, he is a hero who saved the country and asks for her and Jian to get rid of the silver fangs. But just as Saren is about to attack, Taejun stops her. He warns her that those are no ordinary silver fangs. The girl is confused by his warning. Taejun explains that they look like normal monsters, but they all have enhanced attributes. His analysis reveals they possess magic absorption and stamina regeneration, so they can't be defeated with ordinary attacks. He concludes that the veins must be making them more powerful, and that the fight will only end when they defeat the tree. Taejun then turns to the others and asks what they think and if there's a way to destroy it completely. He reflects on the problem, realizing the tree also has passive magic absorption and stamina regeneration, which makes it practically invincible. Addie Min comments that her fireball would reduce the enemy's healing but would be more harmful than helpful, while Jian Kang says not even his dragon's fist can overcome it. Taejun concludes that the creature seems to have no discernible weaknesses, but he then claims that yes, there is a way, as there's no monster in this world without weaknesses. Taejun instructs everyone to fight the Silver Fangs to buy time, and the Master Bone King agrees. Declaring it's time to show his skills again, the older man slams his bone weapon into the ground. He says that maybe it's because the parasite that was consuming him is finally gone. Then, a horde of skeletons emerges from the earth, and the master declares that he feels incredible. The Silver Fangs charge forward to attack. Jian Kang readies himself for battle, and he strikes one of the creatures with his blow. Saren summons the spirits of the frozen lands, and she blesses the dead with her powers, imbuing the skeletons' weapons. The young woman then tells the Master Bone King to advance, and he confirms. The army of skeletons fiercely attacks the wolves, but a stamina regeneration buff is activated on the Silver Fangs, and their healing begins. Saren says that at this rate, the battle will be endless and apologizes for it being the best she can do. The Founding Master reassures her, saying there's nothing to be done since the monsters absorb magic, but that he's happy to have her support. The girl then asks what Hunter Taijun is doing over there. The Founding Master explains that he's been confronting the Silver Fangs for a while but sees no progress. The older man observes the situation. He says he doesn't know what Taejun's plan is, but that he needs to hurry. Taejun uses one of his techniques to advance quickly, and then he lands a powerful blow on one of the creatures. The young man grabs one of the veins connecting a wolf to the tree. He realizes he can't rip the veins out, no matter how hard he tries. Taejun concludes that attacking the veins doesn't work, so he decides it's time to execute the final plan. The young man approaches the tree and tells Azel he's changed his mind, leaving the entity confused. He holds out his hand and asks if the creature will teach him its magic once more. His companions watch him, not understanding the situation. Taejun declares that the power of life force magic is incredible and invincible. He then offers his entire soul and asks the entity to teach him the magic. Suddenly, tendrils wrap around the young man's body, and someone calls out to him. The entity calls him a fool for thinking it would fall for the same trick twice and binds him with tentacles. It declares that it no longer needs his body for its resurrection. And then it begins to drain Taejun's life force, who screams in pain as the system warns him about the energy loss. The entity says that with him offering himself so willingly, everything becomes easier. It states that its new body will be complete soon. The creature decides to use the others as a power source for its rebirth and greets them. Suddenly, Taejun's clone appears before it, startling it. He explains that he observed the use of life force magic and got an idea. The clone reveals that he could also take possession whenever he wanted. The entity asks, confused, what he means by taking possession. The clone asks if it understands what's happening and offers to give it a taste of its own medicine. The tree begins to crack. With a smile, Taejun declares that the tree is now his, and his system displays the amount of usable demonic essence he has acquired. Taejun is captured by the monstrous tree right before Seren and the Bone King. Seren screams Taejun's name as she sees him get hit. She laments that the creature can absorb magic. Then she charges forward, determined to save him. But the Bone King stops her, saying they don't stand a chance now that Taejun has failed. He warns her that she'll only put herself in danger. With tears in her eyes, Seren asks if they should just watch him die. She declares she'd rather be defeated fighting by his side. The Bone King then takes the blame, saying none of this would have happened if he hadn't awakened him. And he claims Taejun would have been fine. The creature on its back opens a giant eye, and it introduces itself to the skeleton army as the legendary sorcerer Azel, leaving everyone completely confused by the situation. Azel reflects on its selfish acts and decides to apologize to everyone. The Bone King wonders if it's actually apologizing, but one of his men warns him not to be fooled. Azel insists that its apology is sincere. Then it claims it no longer wants to torment people, releases Taejun, and decides to just leave. Saying its goodbyes, the creature begins to move away. Seren and the Bone King can't believe what they just witnessed. The Bone King is still processing the fact that Azel apologized, but he refuses to believe it, knowing Azel isn't the type to do such a thing. While he wonders if it's a trick, Seren warns him to look. She points out that the wolves and skeletons are returning to where they came from. The Bone King confirms they are indeed retreating. He realizes all life on the island is returning to normal and wonders why this happened so close to Azel's resurrection. Then he looks in the direction where Taejun fell, and he questions if this was all part of Taejun's plan from the beginning. Inside the tree, Taejun feels as if he's in control of everything. A system notification informs him that his mana has exceeded the previous users, transferring all rights to the tree to him. While Taejun revels in the power, Azel questions what he's doing. Azel demands that Taejun get out of its body, but he refuses. Then Taejun grabs one of the tree's tentacles. He declares it's time to neutralize all the life energy the tree has taken, as a system notification confirms the dark energy is leaving its body. The system issues an alert: insufficient energy to maintain the millennial crimson tree. The tree begins to sway and fall apart. Azel can't believe a mere human dares to take the tree for himself. He laments that he was just a little more time away from returning to life. Then, he refuses to accept what's happening as his body disintegrates. A system notification reports that the entity has been unsummoned due to a lack of life energy. The surrounding forest falls silent. The system then informs him that the tree's life energy is being supplied to Taejun, and that his vital signs have returned to normal. He suddenly sits up, exclaiming that he was almost defeated. Taejun then reflects on how dangerous essence magic is, and that he really could have been beaten. Seren and the Bone King rush toward him, happy he's alive. She hugs him, relieved. Seren says she really thought he wouldn't make it. Taejun reassures her, explaining he just passed out for a moment. He then asks her to let go, and Seren awkwardly pulls away, apologizing. She faces him and asks what exactly happened. Seren explains that the tree just changed its behavior and disappeared after making the monsters return to normal. She admits that while it's good for them, she can't understand why the creature would do that. Suddenly, Jian Kang appears, declaring the reason is simple. It was all because of him. Taejun and Seren just stare at him without reacting. The Bone King then approaches, saying he has many questions for Taejun. He states that what he witnessed that night seems impossible for just one hunter, suggesting his true strength comes from deep within. The Bone King suggests an unknown force is helping him. With a smile, he comments that it's too complex for an old man like him to understand. But he hopes that whatever this power is, it takes him where he wants to go. Taejun thanks him and wonders if the Bone King knows something. He shakes the Bone King's hand, reflecting that sometimes it feels like he can see right through him. The Bone King tells everyone to rest, assuring them he'll take care of the remaining monsters. But Azel's spirit rises from the ashes, declaring it's not over yet. Taejun gets annoyed at the enemy's return and wishes it would just disappear for good. Azel then taunts the Bone King, asking if he really believed it was all over. It swears that even in defeat, it will drag him down to the underworld. In a summoning circle, Azel invites all mortals to join it. Taejun complains that the enemy just doesn't know when to quit. The Bone King explains that the sphere of mana is its final attack, created with all its life force. He warns that if it explodes, everyone on the island could be wiped out completely. Taejun despairs, realizing he's out of mana at the worst possible moment. Then, Adimin's voice chimes in, explaining she was doing some research and has already taken care of everything. Taejun asks what she means by personnel as the world around him begins to distort. He turns around in surprise as two figures appear behind him. Time around them seems to stop, and Taejun wonders if everything has frozen. Three people observe the spell, and Jin Hyuk comments that it's been maybe 150 years since he last saw that distribution site. Jin Hyuk identifies the situation as involving an illegal status window user. Yeon Waseo agrees to finish the job quickly so they can go home. Taejun wonders who these people are and if they're part of Addie's organization. Then two unknown figures emerge from a portal. The tailed man comments that they look like monsters, very different from her. The slime creature asks why he didn't isolate the area, but the man doesn't understand the question. He insists it's impossible, as he entered the exact dimensional code he was given. Then he notices Taejun watching them and admits the creature was right. Addie explains that she forgot to mention in the report that he had the latest version of the status window. The slime creature gets agitated and asks if they're in trouble, but the man tells it to calm down. He then addresses Taejun and asks if his status window is version 2.0 or higher. The young man confirms that it is. The tailed man apologizes for the inconvenience and explains that their report was different. Taejun asks them to explain what's happening. The man then ponders where he should begin the explanation. He states that if the young man has version 2.0, then he should know about their organization. But Taejun replies that he only knows there's an entity that manages the status windows. The slime creature then reveals that they are members of the organization's special security department, and it explains that while it can't give details, their mission is to apprehend the user of an illegal status window. Taejun repeats the term illegal status window as he looks at the dark being. The tailed man confirms that the being is wanted by the organization. He can't tell him everything, but he reveals that the target tried to abuse the system's functions for personal gain. Taejun remembers Addie mentioning the organization, but he never thought he'd actually meet them. He always believed they were just her excuses not to work, but now he sees she was telling the truth. The slime creature interrupts him, but his partner scolds it for meddling. It then alerts him, saying the target has begun to emerge from occlusion. The dark creature questions who they are and if they were summoned by that enemy. It then confronts them for following it to such distant lands just to torment it. So it decides it will consume every last drop of their life force to drag them into the abyss. The man states they've wasted too much time talking and that it's time to get to work. The slime creature dashes toward the target at high speed. It then announces the detention of Azel von Arceus under Article 5, Section 13. Azel questions how they got there so fast as the device is activated. Then, the slime creature pulls it into a containment circle. Taejun simply watches and wonders what is happening. He realizes it subdued that enormous mass of power without showing any effort. Next, the slime creature seals Azel inside a container. The tailed man bows and apologizes to Taejun once more for all the trouble they caused. He explains that for cooperation they would like to show their appreciation. Taejun just asks him what he means by show. The man then informs him that he will pass out in a moment. He says goodbye as he steps into a portal, and Taejun tries to stop him, demanding an explanation. But they disappear before the young man can reach them. An older man shouts for Taejun and Jiyeon to get Seren inside. Then, everything around them simply vanishes, leaving only the night sky. A young woman asks what happened, stating there was something there just a moment ago. Taejun then collapses unconscious on the ground. Someone asks if Taejun is okay. A new day dawns at a large mansion. Addie introduces herself as Taejun's alarm clock for the day. Still sleepy, he asks what she's doing as Addie tells him it's time to wake up. Now sitting up in bed, Taejun asks why he passed out so suddenly since he still had mana. She explains that even for a version 2.0 user, it's not easy to move in an isolated dimension. Addie believes his stamina was completely drained and he complains that they should have warned him. She then suggests he check his status window as it will completely change his opinion of them. A reward notification then appears on his screen informing him of a deposit for the criminal's capture. He is surprised to see he received 10,000 coins. Taejun is shocked by the enormous amount of coins he received, but Addie comments that since it was a third-degree criminal, it's actually not that much. He finally understands what the man meant when he said he wanted to thank him. Then Taejun tells Addie that he's realized he doesn't want to be a hunter anymore. From that day on, his new career goal is to become a bounty hunter. Addie just asks if he's kidding. She then claims it was all thanks to her tip and that he should thank her. Taejun asks why she can't appear physically, and Addie replies that it's only with her supervisor's permission. He calls her his good luck charm and hugs the pillow, but she quickly moves away. Taejun then remembers that Azel was a third-degree criminal. He deduces that there must be first- and second-degree criminals, and Addie confirms there are. She explains there are few first-degree and not many second-degree criminals. But that doesn't mean third-degree criminals are weak. Taejun asks how someone becomes a first-degree criminal, and she begins to explain that it depends on the person's abilities. She then stops talking abruptly. Addie apologizes, saying she can't say any more, as the rest is confidential. Taejun then states that if Addie is right, he can't just ignore the situation. He remembers that if that man was once a hunter, he was probably one of the strongest, and yet he was only a third-degree criminal. He then questions how strong the people from the organization who captured these criminals must be. Addie tells Taejun there's really no need to overthink it. She then explains that they're just an ordinary company that distributes and manages status windows, nothing more. Arriving at the beach, Captain Young-soo Kim sees the destruction and wonders what happened in the last 3 days. He questions if a natural disaster hit the place, as the situation is unbelievable. Then Saren emerges from the forest with her companions and greets the captain, who recognizes her. Young-soo helps her board the ship and invites the others to come aboard as well. He then asks if they are all ready to leave, but a voice asks him to wait. The captain turns to see who interrupted him. The Bone King gets on board and Young-soo asks him why he's there. The founding master just asks what the problem is with him boarding, and the captain comments that it's strange to see him on the ship. Young-soo explains he can't be late because it's his wife's anniversary, but the man tells him not to worry. He states he just has some business to take care of across the sea, and the boat departs. At the destination port, Yonghwa Seo awaits their arrival. As soon as she sees him, Saren runs toward her, calling her name. She hugs her tightly, saying she missed her so much, and Yonghwa welcomes her back. Saren starts to cry and says she wouldn't even believe it if she told her what happened. But she quickly explains that she can't share the details because it's confidential, while Yonghwa comforts her. Yonghwa tells Saren she won't ask her why her mana is depleted or about the traces of undead on her. Surprised, the young woman just asks how she knew. The Bone King approaches and thanks Yonghwa for coming all this way. He asks if she came alone, and Yonghwa confirms she only brought a driver to take them. The founding master expresses his relief, as he didn't want to be bothered by the media. She then explains that's why she didn't tell anyone about his arrival. He thanks her for preparing everything, but she states it was an honor. Then he whispers in her ear that he's still looking for a way to grant her request. Yonghwa simply thanks him. She says goodbye to Taejun, telling him they're heading back to the guild, and he tells her to take care. Saren then turns and gets Taejun's attention. She apologizes for calling him Appa without permission and confesses she's wanted to get closer to him since the exam. Taejun replies that he feels they've become closer, just as he did with Jian and the Bone King. Then, Saren asks if he would mind if she kept calling him that. He replies that it's no problem at all and she can call him whatever she wants. With a smile, Saren whispers that she liked his answer. She then waves goodbye from inside the car, and Jian Kang shouts for them to take him along. Jian turns to Taejun and says he'll remember the martial arts skills he displayed. He then points at the young man and promises that the next time they meet, he will surpass him. Jian says goodbye as a brother in arms and runs after the car, while Taejun just tells him to worry about his own ride. The Bone King states they should also get going, as Miss Seo has already prepared everything. He then turns to Taejun and asks if he's prepared. The founding master adds, questioning if the young man is ready to be the center of everyone's attention. Taejun replies that he certainly is, as he's always prepared for anything. Moments later, they arrive at a conference room filled with journalists. A banner at the venue announces the event as the press conference for the return of the Bone King, Jeonho-go. The Bone King then takes the stage as photographers ready their cameras. One of the photographers is surprised to notice someone else with him. The reporters recognize Taejun and wonder why he's accompanying the Bone King. Two journalists from the Hunter Times comment that he looks like an ordinary person, quite different from what they were told. The Bone King asks them to lower their cameras for now, stating he will answer questions later. He announces that, as informed by Yonghwa, he is coming out of retirement, but not to return to his duties as a hunter. His purpose is to pass on his knowledge of essence magic, one of the nation's unique techniques. And then he reveals that the person who will inherit his skills is the hunter, Taejun Lee. The reporters start to comment that now it makes sense why he joined the Radiant Specters. A journalist observes that a prodigy like Taejun was exactly the kind of person that picky old man wanted. But a reporter named Sujin Hong thinks all of this is predictable so far. Only players approved by the International Hunter Headquarters are allowed to use essence magic, and the Bone King is the only one in Korea with that right. Therefore, to use it within the law, his support is essential. But the Bone King states there's one more thing he needs to announce. He then nominates Hunter Taejun Lee as a candidate for the special A-class exam. Sujin Hong is surprised by the mention of a special exam for A-class. The founding master then concludes his announcement. The reporters immediately start shouting questions at both of them. Then Sujin Hong from the Hunter Times raises her hand to ask a question. Sujin Hong asks to pose a question to Master Bone King about Taejun's promotion to A-class. The Bone King gives her the floor. She begins by explaining that for a hunter to take the promotion exam, it's public knowledge that certain conditions must be met. Then Sujin questions him if there's any specific reason for recommending Mr. Lee for the special exam. She continues her questioning, implying that he will probably fail. If he does fail, he won't be able to be promoted to A-class for the next 5 years. Furthermore, the person who nominated him receives a heavy fine and other penalties. The guild's reputation would be ruined, and they would become a laughingstock for the entire hunter community. But the Bone King states he has no such worries, as Hunter Taejun is good enough to pass with flying colors. Sujin thanks him for the answer and says she has just one more question. She then addresses Hunter Lee directly. Taejun allows her to proceed with the question. The reporter notes that while everyone gathered for the Bone King's return, now all eyes are on him. She continues, saying everyone is curious about how incredible he is to be personally nominated for the special A-class exam. Then, Sujin asks him to introduce himself to everyone present. Daeji Kim praises Sujin, saying that, as always, she asked impressive questions. The other reporters comment that she's not asking for an introduction, but rather questioning what makes him so special to take the exam. One of the journalists states that no matter how clever he is, he won't be able to dodge this question. Taejun then lets out a shout into the microphone, startling everyone in the room.